do this.
Video that I should have made years ago. As a diehard
I've been told to watch this as well. Ouch. No, wrong. No, we're gonna get there. Avalanche reviews. I've never watched a full video of his.
Well, talk about a video that I should have made years ago. As a diehard Resident Evil fan, I've obviously played a lot of games trying to piggyback off of Capcom's success in my years, but for whatever reason, I've covered almost none of them here on the channel. Well, I'm happy to say that all ends now. If you guys would be so kind as to join me, I'd like to take you on a tour of every single RE clone that has ever graced a game console. But before we do that, there are some rules. First off, we'll be leaving out any recent indie releases. Now don't get me wrong, there are some killer survival horror games coming out of independent studios, but if I put each and every one in this video, we'd likely have a runtime of 17 hours.
That's true. And just to piggyback off what he said, I'm skipping games that I don't think are RE clones, like Onimusha and other games.
So for now, we'll just be focusing on mainstream console releases. But more importantly than that is my definition of the term RE clone. What I mean by that is any game that tried to mimic the original survival horror style Resident Evil games design principles. And the reason why I'm sticking with the classic survival horror releases and not the more modern action horror entries in the series is simple. Thanks to RE4 serving as a blueprint for any third-person shooter made since 2005, our list would be nearly infinite if we included those. And to be honest, the survival horror titles have always been my favorites. And, well, I'm the one making the videos around here. So if it doesn't have a fixed camera system, inventory management, backtracking, an emphasis on exploration, or some combination of those traits, well, it ain't showing up here. Oh, and I'll probably need to break this one into at least 2 different videos, so if you don't find the title you're looking for in this specific release, well, fear not, it's likely on the way.
Look, guys!
And with all that secondary
stuff out
of the way, I think it's about time we covered some Resident Evil clones.
Are you telling me we're driving into a witch hunt, Mulder?
Okay, X-Files vs. Serve. I have never played this, by the way. But I will give you guys my opinion on every game he shows that I have played, and then I'll see what his opinion is, just so you know I'm not mimicking what he says.
If you want to catch witches, you have to go on a witch hunt.
I am going to play this, though.
If we're going to be talking RE clones, we might as well start off with one of the more odd ones. The X-Files Resistor Served was released in 2004 and created by Black Ops Entertainment. You know the guys behind Fugitive Hunter, War on Terror? You know, that game where you get to fist fight Osama bin Laden.
You kill me, 1,000 more will arise.
So let's keep our expectations appropriately tempered for this one. And right from the start, I have something really cool to talk about. This game has an option for anamorphic widescreen, so we get actual 16:9 footage for this section, which is really nice for an old PS2 game. It may not be true widescreen, but hey, I'll take what I can get. The game starts off with Mulder and Scully driving into a small town in Colorado, which definitely gives me some hope. Usually if a game starts off with a very Twin Peaks feel, it's at least got something interesting to offer. So the two eventually come across a dead body, and while Scully tends to that little situation, Mulder tries to find a phone in a nearby old diner, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that's 2 checks on the RE2 intro event checklist. Not too bad a start if you ask me.
Guys, I'm scared. I'm gonna play this month. I might skip this because I'm playing this. I'm also playing Eternal Darkness, but I've already played it. I'm gonna skip the ones I haven't played just because, and I'm gonna play it just because I don't want to spoil it for myself. I'm sorry, please, please.
Is out there.
There's only like 3 games on here that I'm gonna play, and Oh, Eternal Darkness. All right, I have played this game. I don't remember much. In my opinion, it's something that needs to be re-released. I loved Eternal Darkness when I was a kid. I tried to replay it as an adult a few years ago for Bawktober, and the disc I have was scratched to living hell, and I just got stuck on the boss fight. But from what I remember, this is one of the best RE clones. And it dealt with a lot of cool. It dealt with a lot of really cool new features in a video game, like the like going insane in game affected it in a way that you as the player felt like you were going insane, like turning off your console, yada yada yada. Which I thought that was really neat.
I'll keep that momentum going with a title from the same generation, one that you guys have been wanting me to cover for a very, very long time. Eternal Darkness was pretty important in its day for several reasons, but mostly because it was a pretty serious horror game while also existing on Nintendo's GameCube exclusively. By this time, Nintendo was starting to ease up on their weird moral rules that decided what properties could and could not feature on their platform, but still, you didn't see this stuff very often back then.
I missed the
GameCube.
GameCube.
It was made by Silicon Knights, a company that apparently knew how to make good video games at one point and yet still released 2 human. Interesting. ED has developed what you might call a cult following over the years, and like most things that have that rabid of a fan base, it does tend to get overhyped a bit. That being said, if you came here to see me burn this game alive, well, you're gonna leave unhappy because I flat out love it. It's this incredible middle ground between the gameplay of a Resident Evil title and the story of an H.P. Lovecraft novella, and yes, that is a lot of praise to throw in such a short sentence. Eternal Darkness starts off with Alex here getting the call that her grandfather Edward has been murdered, and she gets on a plane immediately to check things out for herself. After actually seeing what little there was left of her grandfather's corpse to see, she starts to explore the mansion looking for some kind of clue as to what happened here. As she does, Alex uncovers a long-lived series of events that all culminate in the most cosmic horror setup you've ever heard of. Once she gets her hands on the eponymous Tome of Eternal Darkness, she gets to witness hundreds of years worth of prep work, including people from all over the world and all over the timeline who have all come into contact with this book and who all play at least some role in this grand plot to bring a godlike being called an Ancient into our world. It seems like there are protections in place, including other Ancients that are keeping him from crossing over, and the entire plot of the game is essentially Alex finding pages of the tome that tell the tale of how he's been slowly over thousands of years and with help from other humans setting up the circumstances for his arrival.
I actually really like how this game goes, because you're constantly going back to your house, and then you go to a new chapter, and then you go back to your house to explore, and then you go to a new chapter, and then you go back to your house, and then you go to a new chapter. There's a few other games in a very similar style. I can't name them right now. I think they're mostly like indie horror games on Steam, but I really like that aspect of Eternal Darkness.
Instead of giving you all this information in a linear fashion, ED has you uncovering the plot points by jumping back and forth between different locations and time periods. Thanks to this layout, you get to see a bunch of creepy as hell locations and experience a few different perspectives. This allowed the environment designers to really change things up, but in a way that seems congruent with the general feel of the game. This means if you're ever getting really tired
Fatal
of
Frame does that a
locations,
lot.
just know that you won't be there much longer, and soon enough you might be in another place or another time. As for gameplay, this game couldn't be more RE if it tried. In most areas, the emphasis is on puzzle solving and exploration, with a slight bit of combat thrown in for good measure. The choice not to engage in combat is almost always viable, and like a good survival horror game, Eternal Darkness doesn't give out any rewards for participating in combat other than the intrinsic prize of that specific enemy no longer posing a threat to you in that specific area. Instead of the standard tank controls, which I think we all know is my preference with this type of game, we get 3D analog movement like you'd find in most modern games, but unlike the last title we covered, these are actually well done with an environment that was tailor-made for such controls. And what that translates into is this game feels absolutely amazing to move around in. Again, just like the X-Files, ED has a camera that will follow the player on a set course, but for all intents and purposes, it's a fixed camera system. I never had any real issues controlling my character, like I said, except when there were traps in the environment and a careful hands needed. Even then, it wasn't too huge of an issue, and overall, I have to say the controls here felt very, very nice. Combat in the game is handled with your typical RE approach, that being a shoulder button.
Has anyone in chat played this game, by the way?
Use it, but Silicon Knights added a limb targeting system that actually works pretty well. When you ready your weapon, whatever extremity you're targeting will light up, and a good strategy early on is to decapitate your enemies and then circle around to their back and hit them while they're swinging wildly at the last spot they saw you in. Instead of usable items, health is regained via a magic spell, and come to think of it, a lot of other cool things are handled that way too. That spell menu can be a little overcomplicated and not very well explained, but you'll get the hang of it after a while, and there are some useful spells to be found here. Ones that
Yeah, I really
enchant your
like the
weapon
spell
for more
system in
damage,
this
or the
game.
usable types that allow you to progress further
It just
into
made
an
it feel
area.
unique
Of
from
course,
everything
I couldn't
else.
make a video on Eternal Darkness without mentioning the sanity mechanic, a system that'll have the game messing with your head if you let your players see too many messed up sights or let enemies keep their eyes on them for too long. Once sanity is low enough, the game starts playing tricks on you. All kinds of things can happen at this point, and when they happen, it is very, very random.
This was really cool. Like, I
So you might walk
loved
into
the
a room,
sanity
get surrounded
meter.
by enemies, die, and then get teleported back to the door you originally
When I
walked
was
through.
younger, at least.
Or the game might simulate someone sitting on a TV remote and changing inputs. A trick that genuinely made me yell at my brother who was in the room when I first played this. All in all, I think the sanity mechanic was a little overhyped if you ask me, as it really doesn't have any kind of effect on gameplay one way or the other. Don't get me wrong, it's really interesting and they clearly put some serious time into creating a huge varied list of things that can happen, but this mechanic never really elevated itself past an interesting parlor trick in my opinion. It is a really interesting and innovative idea though, and even though I'm fully aware of what can happen most of the time, I typically play the game with low sanity just to see how the game will try and mess with me. To be totally honest, I'm not sure why no one else has picked up the mantle for this kind of a mechanic. Imagine what could be done with a modern game taking a similar approach, like a PC game that randomly quits to the desktop while displaying a fake Windows prompt about deleting your C drive or something like that.
I feel like every game that's tried this, like, I can't name very many, but it's always that garbage on Steam that's like $10. But it's always just comes off as like really annoying, and they don't try and do unique stuff like this. It's more so like a really loud sound. Your character will just go insane to himself and have like an inner monologue, where this game did it completely different. It was trying to mess with the player more so than the character.
Eternal Darkness is one of those cult hits from the early 2000s, and in my opinion that is for a very good reason. Graphically speaking, this was a really strong showing for the time. ED came out around the same time as the RE remake on GameCube, and while Remake's incredible pre-rendered graphics couldn't be touched by any console of the day, Silicon Knights really knew how to make a 3D environment work in an RE clone. The design and lighting of your surroundings are jaw-on-the-floor impressive for the time, and thanks to the benefit of a real-time rendered 3D world to explore, lighting effects from the character can show up on the background, like when a weapon has been enchanted or you get your hands on a torch, you can see that colored light casting on the environment. 3D models aren't the best looking in the world, but the textures used are pretty damn impressive, and if you ask me, this game stood as a better testament to what could be accomplished on the GameCube. It seems like there was a lot of love and attention that went into this one, and that goes for the 2D assets as well.
GameCube is the
I mean,
goated
just look at this little
console.
skull blinking his creepy eyes. I love attention to detail like that. Luckily, this is one of the relatively few games that natively support 480p on the GameCube, which means holding down the B button to force progressive scan mode will net you some serious visual fidelity. Checking out both interlaced and progressive scan options side by side shows the clarity and sharpness gained when using 480p is just flat out incredible. I'm using the FrameMeister to upscale both images, but each is using these same exact settings, and no matter how many times I see it, it just never gets old witnessing these retro games look this damn good. So if you have a Carby, GCHD, or honest-to-goodness GameCube component cables, make sure you play this game in progressive scan mode. Trust me, your eyes will thank you.
480p.
To be totally honest, I hadn't really played this game since I marathoned it with a friend not too long after its release, and I had sort of convinced myself in the meantime that it didn't live up to the hype, but after starting it just to capture footage for this section of the video, I ended up playing to the very end. It does this amazing job of recreating Resident Evil's approach to combat, exploration, and puzzle solving, but also manages to add on to each of those metrics in a very real way. It's not often that a clone adds this much to the core experience while still staying so faithful to its inspiration. Eternal Darkness is an absolute, hands down, no need to think about it recommendation from me. It is an incredibly fun, creepy, and unique horror game that checks nearly every box I like in my survival horror games. Once again, this is a title that has ballooned in price since its release, and it seems to be getting worse as time goes on.
I'm glad he likes this one because I loved this as a kid.
On retro games, and I cannot in good conscience recommend anyone pay $50 for a loose disc or more than $75 for a complete inbox copy, but once again, I'm sure all of you know how to get your hands on this disc image, and that is exactly what I recommend you do. Oh, and if you're looking to really increase the effectiveness of this horror game, play it in the dead of night with headphones on. Trust me, you will absolutely love it.
God, so many games on this list are so fucking expensive. It would make you sick. Like Rule of Rose, for example. Oh my God, it's crazy.
Nothing short of a miracle will keep him alive. And there hasn't been one of those for a long time.
I have never played this. I thought this was gonna be D, like the first person. I don't want to spoil this for myself. And I'm gonna skip Onimusha because I just played them and I don't consider it. Here's a good one.
Huh? Nobody's seen him since last night. I'm really
Oh,
starting to get worried.
everyone always says, Bach, have you played Obscure? This is fun. I like being able to give my opinion and then hear what he thinks. People ask me all the time if I play this. Even today, like 10 people fucking asked. I have played this. It's really fun. It's like an 80s horror movie, but playable. The only problem I have with this game is that it's super jank and hard mode is insanely hard and unfair and unfun. But for the most part, this is a good, like, RE clone, in my opinion.
I know. Aliens beamed him up to their ship, did some experiments on him, and finally killed him.
You know,
And I
best
really
part
like
about
swapping
covering a
with
series
characters
like Obscure
and
is that the name could
the
also describe
permadeath.
its popularity.
I think
really
there's
don't
permadeath.
remember anyone being particularly wowed by this RE clone
Yo,
that was
Punchy.
released, which sort of blew me away.
Thank you,
because
Gajan.
At the time, we really didn't have many survival horror style games to choose from, if any at all. Then Obscure showed up at my local Blockbuster, and as a PS2 owner who loved RE, it was a done deal the second I saw the screenshots. What we have here is essentially what would happen if RE2 bred with the late 90s horror movie The Faculty.
Guaranteed to jack you up.
Oh yeah, this is
It takes place
exactly
in a
like that
relatively
movie. I forgot
contemporary
about
high
that.
school involves a group who stay after the last bell in order to find their friend,
90s,
but
not
end
80s.
up getting involved in a secret experiment set up by the principal, who may or may not be a few hundred years old. The biggest upset Obscure delivers to the established RE norm would be the ability to switch partners. I mean, sure, RE0 did come out 2 years earlier, but since that's the last time we saw that mechanic,
Holy
give
shit.
Obscure points for trying. Your entire
Dude,
crew
this
is
game's
available
way
from the
better than-
start, and not
or
only
well,
does that
I
mean
don't
you
know.
can decide who you'll play as, but also who gets to come with you. And if one of your buds get murked, well, it doesn't necessarily mean an automatic game over. I believe the game can still be beaten as long as there is one single character left alive, but to be honest, I always just reset when someone dies anyways. And I'm able to do that because Obscure is kind enough to allow me to save literally anywhere. You save your game with
Thank
these
you,
CD items,
Johanda.
and as long as you have one in your inventory, you're good to go. This little attempt at aping RE's success ditches the tank controls and goes for that 3D style where up could literally be any direction depending on the camera angle. But this game makes the style work really well in my opinion. I think it has to do with the environments being mostly wide open, which allows for a little course correction, but for whatever reason, this was the most fun to control game on the list so far. The camera follows you on a set track, which makes for a great cinematic feel and matches the horror movie this game might as well have been based on. The combat is very, I guess, clunky, but it works most of the time, and I like the added ability to knock out windows to damage your enemies who just so happen to be hurt by sunlight. The voice acting
That
is,
was a
well,
really cool
I don't
mechanic.
know, I guess just about as bad as you might assume.
Don't tell me you didn't see anything. You didn't notice anything bizarre?
Yeah, everything I see up in this piece is whack.
But the story has a very endearing feel to it. Plus, it does a great job of creating a believable atmosphere. Anyone who went to a public high school probably sees a little bit of their own alma mater in this place, and I absolutely love it when developers create this specific genre of games in a believably current, more normal setting like this. Oh, and I forgot to mention there's multiplayer, although, if I'm being honest, I have actually never tried it out myself. We're looking at the Steam version of the game here, a version that I am very happy to say has no issues installing on Windows 10 and supports both modern resolutions and controllers. So if you're a little worried about heading so far back into the gaming timeline, maybe a nice high-res image will help ease you in a bit.
This one
Although it
is
did
pretty
famously
fun to
remove
play,
the Sum
but
41 song that normally plays during the intro, I guess it's up to you whether or not that's a plus or a minus. If you ask me, Obscure is well worth checking out today and might be one of the most faithful and fun RE clones we've covered so far, which makes me wish I could say the same for the sequel.
Walking around on your bare feet in here means you'll be picking mushrooms from between your toes.
Obscure Aftermath came out a good 4 or so years after the original and hit the PS2, Wii, PC.
I played this with RuneB, and we actually had a ton of fun with this one, but it is far less quality than one. I don't have much to say about this game.
The absolute dork that I am, I hit up the PSP version first and foremost. I recently soft-modded my PlayStation TV and installed an app called SharpScale, which allows PSP games to be played at a much higher resolution than native PSP video output. So I figured this was a great time to show that off. The PSP version of the game actually looks really good, and the sharp integer scale used on my PS TV certainly helps. That being said,
I actually thought this was fun.
Great on a PSP's native screen as well. On the plus side, we still have a butt rock song over the intro, so it's nice to see some consistency there, but right off the bat, the camera and controls jump out as being far lower quality than its predecessor. First off, the environments you start in are much more closed off, often having you move around in one tiny hallway after another. And the fixed path moving camera has returned, but there's also moments when the player can move the camera around freely. When you play on 2-player, by the way, you have to use remote control in the game, like remote Steam play, and the second player just gets fucked by that. Like, it's such an unfun experience for player 2 because you just have to bow to the will of player 1. It's brutal. The issue there being you never really know which section is going to be a fixed camera section and which one will let you take control of your field of view, so you never really know what you can and can't do. See right here, I can fully control the camera anytime I want, but just 2 steps forward and I can't anymore. And keep in mind, this is on the same exact screen. This really sucks because the camera angles are much more close up than before, so it's not uncommon to see the camera get caught on a door or the odd corner. It looks to me like they were going for a closer to the player sort of over-the-shoulder look for a lot of it, and if you ask me, it makes the game a nightmare to actually control. While I haven't put as much time into this one compared to the first, I can confidently say that any fun you get out of this game will be in spite of the controls and not because of them. Other than that, it seems like the overall gameplay hook is roughly the same here. A bunch of young adults stuck in some kind of a school-type environment, solving puzzles and finding keys in order to survive an outbreak of a sentient plant creature. I really do want to spend a little more time with Obscure 2, with anything, because there aren't a lot of games in the genre, and at this point I'll take what I can get. But that being said, the first game gets my recommendation. It's this perfect little microcosm of RE-style gameplay with a few flourishes that come from a new team taking a crack at an established formula. The second game offers more or less much of the same, but the game switches to a sometimes free, sometimes fixed camera, and that leads to huge issues controlling your characters. But on the plus side, they streamlined a lot of mechanics and genuinely improved a lot of the go-to controller functions in the sequel. If you're looking to spend a Saturday night remembering that short window of time when RE clones like this had some kind of a market share, Obscure might as well be your go-to. Definitely give this series a try, and if possible, get one of the console releases so you can watch that original intro and be reminded how bad Sum 41 is.
The organs are all still there. There are these purple marks all over it.
This is Matt.
It may save your life.
Yo, Reziv. Yeah, have I watched X and Y YouTuber videos like this? I watch like literally once a year. If I watch any of these, it's on stream. So if you've seen me watch them, that's the ones I'm on. All right, Cold Fear. I just played this a couple days ago. It's basically Resident Evil 4 on a boat, and it's just okay. Like the gameplay, it's just RE4 but worse in my opinion. But you're on a boat again. But same idea. It's just parasites infecting humans. And yeah, I actually didn't even pay any attention to the story. I just felt like this game was soulless, but I know it's a classic. I don't like this game. And he has a lot to say about it. Holy shit!
I think most people see Cold Fear as a kind of RE4 clone, and while I can see where that idea comes from for sure, it's important to keep in mind that Capcom's Resident Evil upset only beat Cold Fear to market by a month, which means they wouldn't have had the foresight of knowing that RE4 was going to revolutionize gaming as we knew it, so I think it's a safe bet that Darkwood wasn't copying much of anything. In fact, the only reason this game is on this list is because to me, this feels like what I wanted RE Revelations to be. This perfect marrying of RE4's aiming and controls with RE1's general game design. And I think that makes a lot of sense, seeing as how Darkworks' previous horror title was another game we'll be looking at in one of these RE clone videos, Alone in the Dark: The New Nightmare. But first things first, we have to cover all of my nerd stuff. What I really wanted to do was have all my captured footage be of the PS2 original because, well, you know how crazy I am about upscaling old analog consoles, plus Cold Fear offers an anamorphic widescreen option, and it's always fun playing old video games in true-ish 16:9.
I played this on PC, and the FPS ruined the game.
First off, my frame meister was losing sync every
If you play this on PC and don't cap the FPS, some of the enemies hit like a truck.
single time I went through a door, and I'm not really sure why. I'm almost positive the game runs at 480i the entire time, so that was a huge bummer. But more importantly, the frame rate was just awful most of the time. All of the extra effects like water cascading over the screen and realistic ship movements combined with the huge waves crashing on the ship made the gameplay experience less than ideal. So sadly, we'll be using the Steam release for this playthrough. And to be totally honest,
sadly
in its
is
vanilla
right.
form, the PC release isn't exactly great looking either. It's stuck at 4x3, doesn't accept modern USB controllers, and scoffs at higher resolutions. On the plus side though, there are a few mods to get around this. First, there's a widescreen fix that'll let you run
That's
the game
what I
at 1080p
used.
and up, and then there's a .dll that'll allow for a modern USB controller.
I
which
just
is
played
very,
this like 2
very
days ago,
useful and
Sky.
goes a long way in having a modern gamer play this game nowadays. But stuff only I care about aside, Cold Fear starts off with a Navy SEAL team infiltrating a Russian whaling ship. Sadly, these guys get torn apart nearly the first second their feet touch the deck, and in a bout of frustration, the CIA, who's running this little op, orders the nearest government
Oh my
vessel
God,
to
I'm
pick
gonna
up
get
where
to hear the
SEALs left
story.
off. And the aforementioned closest ship is a Coast Guard vessel led by Tom Hansen, our main character. As you explore the ship, you find the Russians were messing around with some kind of an ancient parasitic life form they call exocells.
These are basically villagers from RE4.
These little bastards like to hijack dead bodies, making the enemies in the game basically Las Plagas, but without a Spanish Napoleon stand-in. So, I guess better. Voice acting in Cold Fear is actually relatively okay, with most of the talent coming from Tom here.
Why should I believe you?
Because I'm here and you're not dead.
Ha, funny.
The controls are, well, they're kind of terrible in a lot of ways. Movement is handled without tank controls, despite the camera being mostly fixed, so that means you'll find yourself having to reorient after
What just happened there? If for anyone that's watched my playthrough, that is the exact part I died at, and I was complaining about the controls while it happened, because that happens often in this game.
Handled without tank controls, despite the camera being mostly
that
fixed, so
that
means
literal
you'll find
thing
yourself
happened,
having
like
to
right there
reorient
with that
after
girl
every
pinned in the
camera
corner,
change,
and that guy
kinda
just
sucks.
walloped us.
Now, this isn't anything new. I mean, we've already covered a few games in this list that use this method, but Cold Fear takes it a few steps further in the wrong direction. Hitting L1 readies your weapon and puts you in an almost over-the-shoulder type of perspective, but like I said earlier, this game came out a mere month or two after RE4. So on the plus side, it does get a free pass in the, well, you're just copying RE4 category, but on the negative end of things, these developers didn't have a chance to see a working model of this kind of gameplay before making their own. I mean, let's be honest, I talk a lot of shit about Resident Evil 4 for ruining the formula of RE games going forward, but one thing I can't criticize it for is it was a really good third-person shooter that figured out how to do over-the-shoulder better than anyone at the time. I'm pretty sure you guys know that me personally, I prefer the Max Payne 1 and 2 approach, but hey, what are you gonna do? The industry has spoken, and RE4 is the de facto way all third-person shooters were gonna be made after its release. And what I mean to say with this long rant is there are a lot of issues here in Cold Fear. One of the worst being the over-the-shoulder view sharing a game with a fixed camera system. So in order to aim at a target, you need to rotate Tom so that he's facing what you want him to shoot at. In RE4, this is a snap because the camera is always in the same position behind Leon, but here there are two viewing perspectives, making this a real chore. And normally that wouldn't be the worst problem, but enemies in Cold Fear hit hard as hell. Even the small exocell parasites can drain a quarter of your life in a single hit.
Yeah, see that health drain? Those enemies, if you have uncapped FPS, just fucking murder you in like a second. And you can switch gameplay perspectives in this game by pressing left analog. And it auto aims at targets, but to rotate your character, you have to turn your control stick like a clock, but then it gets stuck halfway, so you have to start the clock over. It's fucking horrid.
That effect continues until you kill them or run out of their little grabby range. Now, it's my opinion that the developers knew this was an issue because they also implemented a more traditional RE type of aiming that lets, in my opinion, life in a single hit. Enemies in Cold Fear hit hard as hell. Even the small exocell parasites can drain a quarter of your life.
I actually wonder if he didn't cap his FPS and that's why he ran into this issue. That may be a thing. Because halfway through my playthrough, I was like, I couldn't believe how hard that enemy hit, so I activated Riva Tuner and capped my FPS at 60, and then they weren't even an issue anymore. But from what I see, I think he had the same FPS issue as me.
Kill them or run out of their little grabby range. Now, it's my opinion that the developers knew this was an issue because they also implemented a more traditional RE type of aiming that lets you draw your weapon and aim straight ahead without altering your perspective. But this relies on the game's auto-aim, and in that case, you might as well not use it, unless the enemy's so far away that it really doesn't matter anyways. Since you're able to move around while aiming in either mode, the right analog stick is used to adjust your reticle, but this process is so slow in the secondary, more traditional firing mode that it boggles the mind, which really sucks, because this mechanic could have very well transformed this game into a real traditional Resident Evil type experience. But here's the catch with all this. After all that complaining, I still really, really enjoy this game.
Oh, we've reached a crossroads.
There's a lot of really cool stuff going on here, but given the context of this specific video, what really impressed me was how well they did laying out a cool environment and using old RE tropes to dot the landscape with puzzles, keys, and weapons that can be incrementally discovered. In a lot of ways, they do everything right in my book. There's a cool little story that feels more like The Thing than some kind of zombie invasion, and some absolutely stunning graphics for the time. I mean, sure, there's a lot of jank to be found here, but the camera angles are cinematic as hell and the lighting is just to die for. There's a huge amount of dynamic lighting sources to be found here, and that may not sound too crazy until you figure, hey, this is a console game.
Yeah, that's true.
I would have loved to see more accurate real-time shadow casting.
The game does look
those
nice.
Dynamic light sources, but you really can't look a gift horse in the mouth. But I think if you're going to have a long discussion about Cold Fear, the main point has got to be the unreal amount of time and effort that went into accurately mapping and animating both the ocean waves around the boat and the effect those waves have on the boat's position. Not only does the boat move in a really convincing way, but you also see Tom's position change along with it. This was a really interesting development.
I commented on that in my playthrough, but that is a really cool aspect of this game, where as the boat sways, your character like shimmies to the left and shimmies to the right. But at the end of the day, like if you play this when it came out, that'd be really cool. But when I was playing it nowadays, it's just like, you know, it's there, but now it's in every game, so it doesn't feel special anymore. So it was just like
development at the time, and
whatever.
To be honest, you still don't see games doing anything close to this. Cold Fear definitely has some major issues, but without a doubt it is one of the more interesting and playable RE clones to date. If you ever wondered what would happen if Resident Evil Revelations was made by a team who actually revered the original RE trilogy, well, wonder no more. I don't care if it's on Steam or console or whatever, just give this one a try. It's rare for a game to stray so far from its original inspiration, yet still hit the mark so damn well.
He wanted to use them, and this is the result. It will kill us all.
Uh-oh.
Hey, you okay?
I just played this a few days ago. I'll take. No, I mean, like I as you're gonna see with this video, I don't care what people say about like anything that I've played as well. I mean, I do care, but what he said about Cold Fear like being good and a lot of people should play it. Yeah, sure. And like I said when I was playing it, I just didn't enjoy it. Like, and I didn't respect it either. I didn't even give the story a try because I was just having so much or so little fun. But again, one of the main reasons I didn't have a ton of fun with Cold Fear is simply because I played it on Steam. I had nothing but issues for like the first hour. It was brutal. And then I was so impatient with the game at that point that it's like, whatever. I just chugged through it as fast as possible. And, you know, I did have some fun with it. Like I said, though, I just feel like it felt soulless and it's just whatever. But I do know people loved it. I actually really liked Deep Fear, but Deep Fear suffers from horrible padding. Like I hope he talks about this, but the backtracking in Deep Fear is horrifically bad. Everything else is really good. Like the FMVs are super far ahead of its time, and it has a ton of FMVs. You would think the budget for this game was sky high, but it was the last game to release on Sega Saturn. I think it was the last game. But I enjoyed Deep Fear. It was fun. It just had a really, really boring like 3 hours, and everything else was fun. And in my YouTube video for this game, I cut that 3 hours or my editor cut that 3 hours of insane backtrack. Thank you, Pink, for the 12. Thank you. And thank you, McRae, for the 16. Mookie!
Kill me, please.
And for the very last game to feature in this video, we have to hit up one of the major titles people have been asking me to cover for years now. An RE clone that's both popular and barely known about at the same time. And when it comes to RE clones, Sega really does know a thing or two. For me, the first real RE clone I ever played and was fully aware it was obviously trying to mimic Resident Evil was a Dreamcast title by the name of Carrier. But years before that, on Sega's ill-fated Saturn, some of us got to see a really cool attempt at capturing the lightning that was RE's success in a bottle. Deep Fear was a Sega-produced title and took the survival horror genre in a direction that you still don't see very often. The game takes place in probably the most claustrophobic environment humanly imaginable, that being the ocean floor. You play as John Mayer. Nope, not that one, although that would make for a wildly different game. And you had a civilian run rescue service called ERS, and you and your crew operate out of a naval refueling operation called a Big Table. While you're going about your undersea business, a capsule lands in the ocean that just so happens to contain a chimpanzee that was sent into space 40 years ago. While that's going on, a submarine that was meant to refuel at the Big Table instead decides to crash into the top secret research division on site. Being the only rescue operation available at the moment, the powers that be decide the risk of sending civilians into a top secret facility is a small price to pay to save a few lives, so the ERS go into action. Along their way, the team runs into some kind of infection that turns people into grotesque insect-type creatures, and like you would assume, it eventually makes its way into the big table, and also like you would assume, we are the only ones who can stop it. Gameplay in Deep Fear plays it pretty safe in my opinion. The Resident Evil formula exists in a pretty unmolested state here, with just about everything you would expect being present and accounted for. One of the additions that I was not expecting though was a system that lets you recharge your bullets at certain points on the map, something that may wreak hell with the whole survival horror classification.
This was
in my
weird.
opinion, but
This can make the game very easy, but you have infinite ammo in this game essentially, and infinite healing essentially. So I don't even know if I died. I can't remember, but it is definitely one of the
realistically
easier
speaking,
games.
I imagine the amount of firepower that a single person would have access to in a naval facility might be so plentiful that, well, it might as well be unlimited. Plus, it's nice seeing where RE Dead Aim was drawing its inspiration from. The other factor to keep in mind when playing a little Deep Fear is that each area of the map has varying levels of oxygen, which is represented by a meter and a few counters on screen.
Oh yeah, the
This
big
wasn't
bug.
only a really
That's
good
right.
move
Yeah,
in my
yeah.
mind, but it also serves as a really cool way to gamify Deep Fear's underwater setting. Scattered all around the environment are panels that'll let you flood a room with oxygen, and when these can't be found, you can actually throw oxygen grenades, a phenomenon.
Yeah, the oxygen mechanic, well, the main problem with this, with Twitch streaming, is that every 5 minutes when I was playing this game, someone would come into the chat and be like, what's that big number in the corner? I'd explain, and then 5 minutes later, what's that big number in the corner? And the funny thing is, this is just specifically about Twitch. He may mention this too, but the air system in this game, as cool as it is, and it does set the atmosphere really nice, it doesn't matter at all. Like, I didn't worry about the air, my air meter at the top right there, or this number, not once in the game. Like, it does not affect the gameplay whatsoever. It is just there. And like, it's a slight minor inconvenience sometimes.
Phenomenon that just feels ridiculous to even describe out loud. Moving around in Deep Fear works pretty much exactly like you would expect, with tank controls and kind of clunky movement, but it doesn't feel as organic as a typical Resident Evil title thanks to the slow loading nature of each room or menu transition. Typically, you're only going to spend a second or maybe two in any one area, but moving to a new screen can often last longer than the amount of time spent in the previous one. And in a game chasing after a genre where exploration is the key point, this really kind of, I guess, tainted the experience for me by making it feel incredibly choppy. On top of that, if I'm being really picky, combat feels pretty clunky, something that might be a problem if this title weren't years ahead of its time by allowing the player to both fire their weapon and run at full speed. A concept that I would like to add still hasn't caught on.
What's that big
in most
number, Bot?
modern
Thank you,
games.
Onken.
One
Thank you,
thing that I
Zenzi.
imagine would have blown me away back in its day was the sheer amount of CG animated cutscenes this game has in it. In the first few hours of gameplay, you've already watched minutes worth of animated cutscenes, which
And that's
was a lot
fucking
for the time.
crazy.
I mean, CDs weren't exactly known for their infinite amount of storage space, and the compression available to developers at the time wasn't amazing either, so it's nice to see a Saturn game that beats out your typical Squaresoft release in the density of pre-rendered cutscenes.
Yeah, that is nuts.
Whoa, your boyfriend? Just kidding.
To be totally honest, Deep Fear is a sort of sad story for me because it has a buttload going in its favor. It nails that Resident Evil combination of a fearful setting and a story that's just shy of purposeful satire. I just wish the game didn't always feel like it was about to give my Saturn a heart attack. If the amount of time spent looking at a blank screen with white text over it could be cut in half,
I
so
played
much
an
better
emulator,
investing my
so
time in this one, but
I didn't
as
have
it
that
is, I always
issue.
get to the same point in the story where I just stop being excited to see what's next and end up putting it down eventually. As a little interesting factoid, Deep Fear never got a US release officially speaking, but there are ISOs out there that have been converted from the PAL release of the game. Now, I haven't burned one myself to see if it'll work with a pseudo Saturn card or mod chip, but I have tried it on the Fenrir ODE and it works perfectly. I would definitely recommend you guys who adore the genre like I do take a look at this one. It scratches nearly every itch you'll likely be looking to get scratched and does so in an interesting environment. And when you think about it, isn't that like 90% of what you're looking for in an RE game? I guess, as a warning, just don't go in expecting it to hold your attention for very long. That being said, try to tough it out and make it to the end of this one. There's a lot more here than poorly recorded English voice acting, although there is plenty of that to be found as well.
What? I told you there's a monster down there.
Didn't you say you just took care of it?
With him talking about like trudging through it and pushing yourself to the end, I think he is referring to what I was talking about before the video started of, it just says so many sections in that game where you run from one end of the game to the other whole end of the game and you do it over and over. You get point A to B to A to B to B, A to B to A to B, and then you get to explore a new area. It's really tedious, but overall, I enjoyed it. So.
Hey guys, real quick before we get into what I imagine will be one of the greatest YouTube videos ever produced, I wanted to let you guys know I finally have merch available. It took me way too long to jump on this bandwagon, but in return I've commissioned some killer designs. And since
he's on Teespring, that's my website.
Face on their body, I tried to make sure my stuff looked more like band or video game merch.
Hell
if
yeah!
You'd be so inclined as to check out my Teespring store, I've got shirts, hoodies, tank tops, stickers, and anything else you could.
Guys,
imagine.
it's right
If you're
down there.
interested in copping one of these designs, I'll have a link in the description. And with the shilling out of the way,
fuck yeah, dude. Fuck yeah.
Won't that destroy his brain cells and prove fatal?
It might, but we must follow the clinic chief's orders.
Hey Bach, have you played Galerians? Yep. This is a really cool, unique game that I enjoyed playing through half of this game. I think a lot of it is really fun. I'm trying to summarize very quickly just because this video is long and I don't want to take too long with them. I just want to hear what he has to say, and I want to see what you guys have to say about each game. Please share your opinion on the games as he talks with them, because I do want to know. Constantly I'm asked about RE clones. But yeah, Galerians has really cool, unique gameplay. I can't remember everything about it, but really cool, unique gameplay, really cool FMVs, and some colorful characters. But other than that, the boss fights are horrid. There's so many sections in the game that are insanely tedious, like the hotel. And at the end of the game, you can soft lock yourself due to not having enough resources.
Galerians is a series that has always been on my radar, but for whatever reason, I just never got around to playing it, which is a real shame because there's some absolutely killer ideas being
implemented. And I overall don't enjoy this
like
game.
Your typical survival horror title, but crossed with that one scene from Akira where Tetsuo has to escape the government hospital he's being kept in. This style of the first entry in the series is just undeniably cool, with this very anime-inspired dystopic future sort of vibe. The story has to do with your main character Rion suddenly waking up in some kind of sterile hospital-type setting with no knowledge of who he is or how he got there.
No, that's
As you might
Overblood.
expect, the majority of the game is spent piecing together some answers to those questions, along with
I have it all on
like,
YouTube,
who the hell is behind all this, and how is it that someone keeps speaking to him telepathically?
Rion! Ah, that voice again. Lilia?
This futuristic setting and equally futuristic design style really lets Galerians stand out from the other RE clones we've covered so far, but the uniqueness goes a little deeper than just that. Mechanically speaking, there is a lot of other stuff stacked on top of that RE-style gameplay that makes this game feel more like its own thing than just a clone. For example, since Rion was experimented on and given these telekinetic powers, or however you would explain this, he needs to take certain drugs to keep his anger under control, to make sure he doesn't kill everyone around him, including himself. A pretty cool little mechanic that can actually be exploited to get out of tough situations. Then of course you need to refill the compounds that give him these abilities, and it's all done in a very appropriate way with a futuristic kind of handheld injector. Of course, these are just masks put over a traditional ammo and weapons system, but I really like it when devs find creative ways to shake up what we're used to and offer it to us in ways that feel new and fresh. The actual process of playing the game, however, can be very up and down. While I love how nimble they made Rion in this game compared to your typical STARS member, I am left wishing that speed was a little more consistent. What I mean by that is Rion can run really fast, but he turns even faster, and what that means for a game that uses tank controls is you're going to have to take some serious time getting used to the idea that you run in one speed but turn at another. So for a while you're going to be overturning a lot or even pulling 180s on accident. The enemies in the game are all kinds of stuff you expect to see in some kind of underground experimental psych ward like armed guards, hospital
What do you guys
staff,
think of this
and
game?
Of course, miniature mobiles.
Rated out of 10, guys.
To knock Rion down and stop him in his tracks while doing not very much damage to him really doesn't jive well with that run speed I was talking about earlier. Actually exploring your environment, collecting keys, and solving puzzles is all very fun, which shows me the game's developers really understood the source material they were basing their IP on.
I would give it like a 6.
The first boss fight was so goddamn frustrating, I ended up turning the game off on 2 separate occasions.
Yeah, annoying boss fights, like I said.
No,
and that's not even the annoying one.
You can either outrun my character or use guaranteed damage dealing command grabs.
This is actually the least annoying boss.
That tells me maybe these guys weren't as talented as I first thought. Don't let that deter you though. He sucks an almost unbelievable amount, but the rest of the game I found to be incredibly refreshing. Not only is it nice seeing these RE clones start to step away from the whole modern day aesthetic, but the style this game brings just drips from every visible corner. Of course you will remember I said this was a franchise earlier, so how does its PS2 sequel fare?
Do you really think that you can make me kill Lilia?
What's this?
Well,
I have not played this one. I can't believe... I find it weird that he brushed past the whole second half of the game because seriously, it is insanely inconsistent. Like, he spent so long talking about a lot of the whole game for Cold Fear and Deep Fear. Yeah, he didn't really talk about what my problems with Galerians, but maybe I doubt he played all these. By the way, I'm not saying he's like, oh, he's misremembering or anything. I'm saying that I doubt he played every single one of these before he made this video. Anyways, Galerians, he referenced how the first boss is really annoying. the second and third and final boss are just as bad, if not far, far worse. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of Galerians. I'm skipping through Silent Hill. We've heard enough about Silent Hill. Curse Eye of Isis. Okay. I played, it's the same old story with a lot of these games. Curse Eye of Isis is a really, really cool idea that dabbles in Egyptian setting, which I love that setting always. Which Curse Eye of Isis was really, really fun for the first bit. And then you get to this boat section and that game just falls off a fucking cliff. Like the first bit where you're in the museum for Curse Eye of Isis, really cool idea. I think was executed decently well. I haven't played it in a long time, mind you. But the boat section and onward were so bad. I didn't even put it on YouTube or anything because I was too embarrassed. All I did was shit on the game after you get on the boat. I would not stop complaining about the game. It was horrid after that. But let's see what he has to say.
They was chasing me. I can't see nothing without my glasses.
You know, the best part about working on a video covering RE clones is getting to play quite a few games I've never really tried out before. And even though Curse the Eye of Isis has been on my periphery for a while now, until today I've never actually played it for myself, which I will go ahead and say right now is a crying shame. Curse starts out with our main character, Darian Dane, whose name sounds like a rough draft 70s porn star handle, showing up to the Museum of Natural History to meet a colleague. He gets stopped at the front door by the police who tells him he can't enter because of an ongoing investigation, but then they immediately just walk away, allowing Darian to just stroll right through the front door anyways.
Now, sir, please go home. My officers will deal with the situation.
Okay, I actually really enjoyed streaming this. Like the first bit of this game was some of the most fun I've had streaming an RE clone, just because it's super chill. There's a lot of funny cutscenes. I think the pacing it's decently paced. And like I said, I find the museum setting very interesting for a horror game. But yeah, the boat section really fucking tips it off.
Some strange shit has most definitely been going down. The intro shows us that earlier in the night, a thief tried to steal the centerpiece to a brand new exhibit concerning Isis and Osiris. Doing so apparently unleashed some kind of malevolent energy, a curse perhaps, and it's wreaking havoc all over the place. Darian gets his first whiff of what Isis is cooking when he comes across a corpse only to watch a yellow gas or energy enter the dead body and reanimate it, turning the poor guy into a pretty cool looking monster. From here, Darian meets up with one of his father's closest associates who warns him that this energy corrupting things inside the museum is tied to a curse that Darian's dad accidentally unleashed on his entire bloodline. This curse, or possibly the process of trying to defeat it, eventually turned his dad into a raving lunatic, and now apparently the task of ridding his family of it falls to Darian. Honestly, this story felt like a massive breath of fresh air for me. Now,
I'll talk about that after
I love
this.
a good zombie outbreak in a small to medium-sized town or city type of tale, but this game feels like one of those old adventure serials that inspired the Indiana Jones movies. But here's the real kicker. It so closely resembles one of those early black and white mysteries without making me feel the goal was to satirize the concept. It seems like when developers go for this kind of a narrative, they can often make their work feel like an extreme, over-the-top, and exaggerated form of the source material they were working from, but Curse has a very genuine and earnest feeling to it. The story sets up this cool little mystery, and all the notes you end up finding essentially spells out a script for one of those old black and white films where an archaeologist goes a little too far in the name of discovery and opens some sarcophagus, unleashing a powerful entity of some kind. I really like this story, and because you don't see this kind of a setup too often outside of point-click adventure games, I have to recommend this game on its story alone. You really aren't going to get this anywhere else. But a game can't live on story alone, so the question is, how does it play? And that's kind of hard to say. I won't lie, it's very clunky feeling, but it's a kind of clunkiness that genuinely works most of the time. Controlling your character feels relatively solid, but this is another one of those games that has rapidly switching fixed perspectives while opting for a 3D control style where the controls change along with Darian's orientation. I will say though, they work really well here because the developers obviously tuned them to the environment you'll be exploring. Darian's turn radius might be a little wide, but you'll almost always be in an area that accounts for this because most locations have a pretty wide open floor plan, allowing you to move around with ease. In my last video, I figured Obscure might be the best implementation of this 3D control style, but I think Curse might beat it by a narrow margin here. When creating the combat, the team at Asylum Entertainment must have been playing a lot of Eternal Darkness because we see its limb targeting system make an appearance, but I'd go as far as saying it actually works better. Holding the right trigger lets you aim, and hitting the left trigger will change where you're aiming at.
I forgot that was even a thing.
Once you're aiming at something, you'll see a reticle appear, and waiting till it lines up perfectly will ensure your shot doesn't miss, and I think it might also make it a little more powerful, but I'm not sure. This system by itself actually works perfectly, but that jank I mentioned before is almost all found here in the combat. First things first, firing and hitting your target feels great, but having to reload afterwards is where the whole thing falls apart. Your reload animation is the most fickle thing I have ever experienced. You can walk around avoiding attacks and Darian will still continue to reload, but God forbid you even inch near that run button, because if you did, well, you just canceled your reload, and the same thing goes for taking damage, something that'll be very hard to avoid since you can't run without accomplishing that goal. Now, it's pretty common to see something like this, so I'm not too mad about it, but where I really start to get frustrated is when that animation seems to have finished perfectly, so I run to the perfect sniping spot, line up my target, wait for the reticle to align, and as soon as I hit fire, Galerian starts reloading. I had this happen to me so damn much it's not even funny, and each time I could have sworn the reload animation was finished before I ran or took damage. On the plus side though, the game gives you an option to reload outside of the menu with a manual reload button, and I was doing this non-stop to make sure I didn't run into that issue again. Outside of that, you'll definitely notice the telltale signs of a not quite AAA development budget, but nothing ever feels broken or unplayable, which is really nice.
It's only showing
I didn't like how there wasn't much of an invincibility window directly after taking damage, so you might find yourself in a situation where you take a lot of hits rapid fire without much of a chance to do anything about it.
That room is one of the most annoying in the fucking game.
The aforementioned jank does make its way into the visuals, but again, not in any kind of way that'll bother anyone. Moments like this can be a little funny, and some rooms can be so insanely bright they actually wash out the game's colors and shading. It is sped up, yeah. All that aside, I love the way this game looks. It pulls off this style that has your surroundings looking...
By the way, I rarely watch videos on the intended speed. No, thank you.
Realistic enough that you feel like you're running around in the real world, but character models are stylized to a really cool degree, and I have to assume that the Time Splitter series served as a bit of inspiration because the resemblance is uncanny a lot of the time. If you ask me, this was a perfect look to go for. It matches the feel of the game perfectly and keeps things in this limbo between serious and cartoony, which
it's at 1.5
again, feels very
speed.
accurate to the old mystery serials the game is essentially based on. While we here in the US got Curse on Xbox and PC, the Xbox version commands a pretty steep price nowadays. I would have really liked to try out this console version, but I'm not made of money and I haven't modded my Xbox yet. But as luck would have it, it is available on Steam, and I just so happened to stumble across it for a cool 50 cents about 5 or 6 days ago. The good news is this game installs and runs fine on Windows 10 and even recognizes modern USB controllers. You'll have to go in and set your own key bindings, but that's not...
Sorry, no, I have it at 1.25, sorry. Oh, maybe I should put it on 1080p.
Too big of a deal. For some reason though, not all of the game's functions can be set here, so you're still
not
going to
that
need
it
to
matters
use
with
your
this
keyboard to
kind
get
of
to the
video
pause screen or change pages on text pickups. The console version of this game seems to support widescreen, but on PC I couldn't get it to go past 4:3 without stretching the image. If you're looking to go past the relatively meager resolution the game supports out of the box, you can mess with its .ini and input your own custom resolution. But keep in mind, you can't use the same 16:9 ones you're used to without making everything on screen really fat and distorted. Well, all of the technical stuff aside, I really can't recommend this game enough. It has a great look to it, an amazing atmosphere, and a uniqueness you really don't see a lot, especially in the genre. If you're looking for more of an in-depth type of coverage, I'd like to give this bad boy the full Avalanche Reviews treatment, but until I get around to it, my buddy the Dolly Popka has a review of the Xbox version up on his channel, and I'd really recommend you check it out. He goes into much more depth than I can here, plus he's an adorable little scamp, so give him some love, and more importantly, give Curse some love. Coming from a guy who's played nothing but Resident Evil clones for the last 2 months, this game really stands out as being uniquely fun and having a boatload of heart, which is exactly why I heavily recommend you guys give this one a try. When it comes to non-RE survival horror, this is easily one of the best titles you can get your hands on.
I agree, up until the boat section. And you guys asked, didn't Runeby play this a few weeks ago? She did, and she had the exact same problems. But in the boat section, so like I said, the museum section of this game is really well done. It's really well paced. Like, he had nothing but praise to say as well, and same here. But the boat section is literally like the bad part in Deep Fear, where you are, but it's worse. There are so many segments in the boat section where you have to go run to the exact spot the game wants you to run with no hint. You have to go exactly to where it wants you to go, and then a cutscene will trigger. And then you you get that cutscene, and then you have to go again to another very specific area where the game doesn't let you know where it's even close to. Not to mention, in the boat section, you are constantly going through the 2 floors. I think there's 2, maybe there's 3. And you're going in each and every room that all look the same and all the same thing with annoying enemies in between you and the rooms. And then the boss fight at the end does not, it's like the jankiest fight. I was going to say it does not work at all. It obviously works, but it's just really janky. And then the Egyptian part at the end is just straight up almost all puzzles, which was decently cool. But like I said before this video, yeah, the first part is awesome, and I recommend playing this too. But most people, I assume, are going to get to the boat and then be like, okay, this is terrible. And you guys ask, what boat do I like in games? I really like the boat in Resident Evil Revelations 1. I really like the boat. If Gaiden got a remake, I think that boat is really cool. And if, I don't mind Dead Aim's boat either, honestly. The ones I hate are RE7, Curse Eye of Isis, and, hey, Deep Fear takes place in a boat. And the Silent Hill 2 boat. Oh! What's next?
What happened?
Oh! Carrier! Okay, you guys, I mean, we just finished this like minutes before the video. Yeah, this game is just really boring. The story is semi-interesting. The voice, okay, he better touch on this. Every NPC in this game has a different ethnicity. I'm pretty sure there are like 3 voice actors, and one of them did most of like the civilian guys that you have to save, and all of them, one's a pirate, one's French, one has a Canadian accent, one has accents from every state in America. Like every NPC has a different accent. It's hilarious. And the voice acting, like I said, is very abysmal. The gameplay is insanely clunky. It's just a boring, slow-paced game. I think this is Deep Fear, but just worse.
That bastard. Hey, get it together. What happened?
But
in the last video,
it was all right. It's just boring.
Clone that stuck pretty close to its inspiration, and today we're doing the same exact thing. Carrier hit US Dreamcast at the start of the year 2000, quite literally a month before Capcom's Code Veronica had a chance to show DC owners how it's really done. And this is another game I've already covered here on the channel, so if you end up wanting a little more of an in-depth look, check out the card in the corner or the link in the description. Actually, my first experience with this game came from one of those Dreamcast demos that came with the official DC magazine, and even though it was noticeably rough around the edges, back then I was really excited to get my hands on a game that played like Resident Evil, but had the unique touch that only came from an outsider's
when I first got this
genre works. Well, a few years back,
I thought it was
finally
really
played
cool
all the way through it, and, well, it was certainly something.
Hey, stop! Are you crazy?
The game starts with a surprisingly interesting story concerning limited resources and the entire world essentially breaking up into 2 warring coalitions. You play as a member of the Spark team, which is like Jaleco's Walmart brand STARS, and you've been sent out to the US's biggest wartime weapon, the Heimdall, a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier that might as well be a mobile continent in itself. You were sent out because no one
It's playing the only good song if you guys can hear that.
Understandably, a little worried that it may have fallen into the wrong hands. Once your chopper gets near the Heimdall, it's immediately fired upon, forcing an emergency landing, and things only get worse from there. Just like the Obscure series, everything seems to have fallen prey to this weird plant-like infection that has both covered nearly every surface of the ship and turned its crew into these weird plant-monster hybrids. And after hearing that basic setup, if you've even walked past someone who knows about RE1, you're likely to finish the story in your head with a pretty good degree of accuracy. The gameplay is about what you would expect from an RE clone. Exploration tops the list just above trying to survive a ship filled with monsters. Tank controls will be getting you from point A to point B, and in a straight line, these controls might feel a little more responsive and quick than most old-school RE titles. But when it comes time to take a corner, Jack's crazy wide turn radius can make for a very difficult time. That complaint standing.
And that is literally the exact room to complain about this mechanic. And I did it too in my playthrough. As soon as we got here, I was like, man, the movement is bad for this room.
Honestly, the game feels really good to control most of the time, thanks to the environment consisting mostly of long, straight corridors and hallways. Combat in Carrier works in the expected way, but with a cool little twist. In your standard survival horror game, a shoulder button needs to be pressed to aim your weapon, and the D-pad is used to move your aim up or down and turn your character left and right. The same thing applies here, but with a very slight difference. In Carrier, letting go of the up or down direction won't have your aim returning to center, which is usually straight ahead. Honestly, I'm not sure why that seems like so big of a deal to me, but for some reason this blew my mind when I first played it all those years ago. And to further compound this, to be totally honest, combat really isn't built around this mechanic, so you'll only ever notice it when you either fight some of the swimming enemies in the flooded sections of the ship, or you accidentally hit a diagonal when aiming. In my opinion, the game drags on a lot longer than it needs to, but it can be pretty fun some of the times. Of course, you're gonna have to understand, a lot of that fun needs to be had in spite of the jankiness that obviously comes with any title from Jaleco. It's clear these guys knew enough about Resident Evil to copy some of its systems, but not so much about it that they could get them all to work together perfectly. So you'll find yourself in a lot of situations where you'll say get your ass kicked thanks to an obscuring camera angle, or spend way too much time trying to figure out exactly what the game wants you to do in order to drive the story forward. To save myself a little time, I'll just say it feels like a budget title. Jaleco also made the Vampire Hunter D game I covered on this series, and I would say it's a damn near mirror scenario here. Great setup and technically speaking a good foundation, but a lot of the connecting material just isn't up to snuff. The backgrounds are fully 3D rendered, which means it can switch between your more traditional fixed camera angles and the moving perspective you see a lot more in these early 2000s survival horror clones, which you guys know I always get a kick out of. Credit where credit's due though, Carrier does a little more than most with a scanner item that lets you get a first-person view of your surroundings, although you'll probably notice the game slows to a crawl anytime you use it. As far as the general look of the game goes, you could be fooled into thinking it looks great if all you see are far-off shots or stills, but when the game zooms in for cutscenes or conversations, the wheel starts to slip a little bit. I'd say Carrier looks exactly like what it is, a Dreamcast game. That console had the most recognizable 3D graphics and color palette I've ever seen, to the point where you almost instinctively know you're looking at a Dreamcast game just from a single still image.
That is very true. I was saying the same shit when I played.
And that's because Carrier goes for this dark sort of horror movie look, but you'll often see that clash with the Dreamcast's trademark bright and noticeable color palette. All that means nothing though. If there were one defining aspect that made Carrier stand out from the crowd, it would definitely be its legendarily bad English voice acting. And if you know survival horror, you know exactly how bad voice work needs to be for it to stand out in the genre.
He's right.
Honestly, think about it. about
Thank
it.
you,
Can
Jack
name a
Jack,
better,
for
more
the 15
emotional
months.
scene than Jack yelling Colonel a whopping 3 times in the same key and cadence, all in the same sentence.
Don't make my death
He's doing
meaningless.
it.
Colonel! Colonel!
We're dealing with pure magic here. Carrier isn't exactly what I would call a must-play for people interested in Resident Evil lookalikes, but if you enjoy that classic look and design that defined the Dreamcast, and you need your survival horror fix, well, I'd suggest you play Code Veronica, but in a pinch, I'd say Carrier can certainly entertain. And that goes double if you're a fan of laughably bad English voice acting, which, let's be fair, if you're listening to my videos fairly often, you probably are.
I 100% agree with this review for this particular game. Oh no, it's Rule of Rose. I'm interested to hear what he says about this.
When it comes time to start really talking underrated survival horror titles, there
because I am never going to play this game again. So I don't
two
care.
names that come up 9 times out of 10. And the crazy thing is...
Oh, I forgot to share my opinion. I have never finished this game and I never will. People tell me to play this all the time. I think it's the perfect example of the comments you see on YouTube when I play a game like Cold Fear, or when I play like Carrier, or any like RE clone spin-off. In the comments, I'm always like, I always see like, you should play this game, you should play that game. It's so good. Rule of Rose is constantly thrown as like one of the most god tier RE clones and just an amazing survival horror game. But I played it, and you know, things I love about this game is the style, the atmosphere, all the sound effects and like the menus are really well done, and the stylization of the entire game I think is really, really cool, and it sets the tone very, very well. But it has the worst combat I have ever seen in a horror game. The combat is atrocious, like 2 or 3 out of 10, or even lower. And not only the combat, but just the running around in general is just so obscenely boring. But the thing that redeems this game is the really, really interesting story and the really cool FMVs and cutscenes. That's why people recommend it. But actually playing the game feels horrific. If you're going to play Rule of Rose, just watch all the cutscenes as a movie on YouTube, because the gameplay is atrocious.
Okay, here we go. I have never played Rule of Rose or Haunting Ground. I know, some fucking expert on the genre, right? Well, the good news is I've officially taken steps to remedy that problem. I started with Rule of Rose because, well, I don't know about you guys, but I'm not letting alphabetical order make all my decisions for me, and instead of leading you guys on until the halfway point of this little piece, I'll let you know straight up, this is one unique, top-rate, world-class education on exactly how this genre's done. And if it sounds like I'm a little bit surprised, well, that's because I am. See, when a game starts getting all this cult-following type of love, I tend to default towards skepticism. Not sure why, but I've just always been that way. And luckily I was proven dead wrong here. But let's take care of some business before we get into that. In Rule of Rose, you play as Jennifer, a teen on her way to some orphanage. Once there, she follows a young boy to a graveyard on the property where she digs up a blood-soaked sack, likely containing whatever these creepy-ass kids were stomping a mud hole in earlier. Shortly after, these really, super creepy kids show up and just bully the hell out of Jennifer. They push her into the coffin, and next thing she knows, she's aboard this disheveled airship where some kind of cabal is formed between the aforementioned kids called the Red Crayon Aristocrats. A name so damn good, I absolutely refuse to believe there's not some college jam band out there that hasn't already taken it. Jennifer finds out there are a few adults on board, but they're not exactly what I would call reliable.
Uh-oh.
So she is
That's the guy I quit on.
Kid-friendly form of the book Animal Farm, where she has to bring the group 1 gift a month in order to stay in its good graces. Now that's the general setup, but what you're not getting from this description is the pure, unadulterated weirdness of this game. It plays like a relatively by-the-books RE clone, but the scenery, story, and symbolism all point towards it being more interested in the Silent Hill side of the survival horror dichotomy. The game has this David Lynchian dreamlike nature to it, and like SH, it's not afraid to pull some seriously disturbing shit. It's very, very hard to really describe, and I would wager that factored into me not really ever caring much for giving it a try based on recommendations alone. Like I said before, Rule of Rose sticks pretty close to RE in a lot of ways. The game is essentially one big point-and-click adventure game, with more of the large environment opening up to the player once the right item is combined with the right door or puzzle, and in that sense it hits the ball out of the park. But don't let that fool you into thinking this is a cookie-cutter experience. The standout feature that, well, makes this game stand out would be this mechanic by which you can find a little doggo friend and use him to find characters, locations, and items, as long as you have something he can smell.
That was cool. I liked the dog mechanics, but who doesn't like dog stuff?
Rescuing this little guy, and before you get your hands on him, I gotta say, this is a much tougher nut to crack.
Oh, I just beat Carrier.
The in-game map is all but useless, with it not marking locked doors, previously visited rooms, or really anything on it other than room names, which are useless to me. Something I would like to remind you, both of its inspirations, RE and SH, nailed in the 90s. This first section of the game had me really struggling to find my way back to areas I was just in a few seconds ago because of how winding and convoluted the airship's design is. Honestly, at this point, I was ready to mark this whole thing down as a major flaw type of deal.
That is exactly what I went through, and then I actually did quit.
But once you and Brown team up, a whole new element of the game opens up. The trace elements of the game.
Well, I
really
quit at
start
the
to
first
flow
boss.
after this, and it becomes really enjoyable. Once I wrapped my head around the scent tracking mechanic, I was zooming through this area, and now that I could reliably navigate it, the airship became a much more interesting place to explore. Now, anytime I received any kind of instruction, I went straight into my inventory and got to work on figuring out what item might lead me in the direction I wanted to go. I went from struggling to remember room layouts and routes to really enjoying the act of exploring this Zeppelin-looking thing. To perform that exploration, your standard for the time 3D-style controls were used, but these have a much more polished feel than you're usually used to, and it's clear they were perfectly tuned for the game, only really giving me trouble in the first boss fight where I got stuck between him and a camera change that really messed with my attack strategy by turning Jennifer around right when I got near. A problem, ironically enough, that would have been solved with tank controls.
Look at that
I will
gameplay.
not stop simping for them. There is combat in the game, and much like any other self-respecting survival horror title,
It has the worst fucking combat. I have never heard someone praise this, but let's see.
well, it's rarely necessary, and believe me when I say you'll be glad for that when you actually decide to engage in it. To say it's clunky just would not get the right point across. Jennifer is, for all intents and purposes, a complete wuss who couldn't swing a melee weapon if her life depended on it, and it often does. The enemies I've come across so far have either been these very disturbing, faceless children, or variants that, for whatever reason, have rabbit heads on them, so I guess take that for what it's worth. Like I said, you won't exactly be pulling off any massive damage-dealing combos or sick one-frame links, but on the plus side, Jennifer can take a lot of damage, or in this case, hugs, I guess, so it does sort of even out. And I'm happy to say Brown the dog is utilized pretty well too, with him picking a target and barking at them till they cower in fear, leaving them open to free hits. Honestly, I wouldn't even put this game's combat in the same league as the admittedly bad melee combat in early RE games, but since most fights can be ran from and the enemies aren't exactly doing much better than Jennifer at it, it all kind of works itself out in a weird way. I'd say more than anything, you should be playing this game for its very effective dreamlike approach to disturbing horror. Throughout my playthrough, I saw things that didn't seem to hold any coherence to the plot or game world, which made things way more creepy. The standout instance being a part of the game where the young communist club charges me with finding an escaped rabbit named Sir Peter. I spent a damn long time tracking that bunny down, and in the meantime, the terribly creepy janitor guy wrote a book about him, and I started developing this kinship since we were both trying to get the hell out of there, until I found a group of those damn weird kids just beating the bloody hell out of it with sticks and brooms. Like, how am I supposed to feel about this? Honestly, I would have been less disturbed had there been a human body in there and not a cute little rat that I was trying to track down. The soundtrack feels to be very much a part of the game's general time and setting, and by
Thank
that
you,
I mean
Hurricane
there's a lot of
Chris, for
somber
the
piano
61.
licks and sorrowful, almost weepy violins, and they
Yes,
perfectly
sir.
match the game's setting and feel, but what was odd for me is the voice acting. Not that it's anything to write home about though, I mean, it's average at best, but it was kind of weird to me how little of it there was. Every one of the kids in the club have actual voices, but you only ever hear them during random interactions.
Thank you,
The
Horror
rest of the time,
Show,
you'll
and
just hear a sound that relates to
Spag
that kid's character trait.
and
Talking
Vincent.
to the sick girl only plays coughs while you read her dialogue, for example. This really wasn't an issue for me, but at this point in the PS2's life, this kind of cost-cutting measure just wasn't seen a lot, especially since SCEA themselves were footing the bill for development, which kind of makes me feel like it was a purposeful inclusion. Now, why they would do that, I'm not really sure, but it seems odd that it would be left out in a game that had a pretty decent budget for the time that it came out. I was really pleased with the look of this game. It hits this really nice middle ground between realistic and stylized. I'm not sure why, it just really does the trick for me. My only real complaint being the constant static filter that plays over the screen. You guys know I've never liked this approach, and for some reason it was everywhere you looked back in the PS2 era. On the plus side, you can turn it down to 1, but a completely off option would have really improved what is an already great looking game.
Oof.
What really bothers me though is the fact that there are surely people out there who would crank this dial all the way to max and actually play the game that way. To be totally honest, that might be scarier than the premise of the game itself. Rule of Rose is an automatic recommendation for me. Being such a fan of psychological thrillers like Silent Hill, I thought I was nearly impervious to being disturbed by a video game, but the pure insanity of this game most definitely did just that. On the downside, I do get the feeling that this is all heading towards some kind of Silent Hill 2 tier, Jennifer is just reliving some terrible event that she tried to suppress for too long type of deal. But in full disclosure, I haven't finished the game yet, so I have no idea. To be totally honest with you though, the rest of the game could just be sliding block puzzles set to easy listening tracks, and I'd still love it. It may rely pretty hard on the inherent creepy nature and automatic repulsion that comes from seeing small British children in school uniforms occupying a dark room, but hey, that trope works for a reason, right? So long story short, you should have already tried finding a way to play Rule of Rose for yourself. I slept on this one hard for all these years, but you should definitely learn from my mistakes. Nowadays, you really don't come across a lot of games that put you in that Silent Hill state of mind anymore. Hell, you can't even find any in the modern Silent Hill series. So what I'm trying to say is Rule of Rose is incredibly effective as a horror game that wants more to make you feel uneasy than it wants you jumping at quick audio spikes, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, this
And as
game
far as
is
this little
insanely expensive on eBay. Yeah, it's insanely expensive in general nowadays. Like, it is a rare game.
Resident Evil clone project goes, this one stands as one of the best playing, most atmospheric, and all-around most well-polished titles on the list. So in honor of this sleeper hit, I'll be putting a paper bag over my head and standing outside a neighbor's house while beating a bloody burlap sack. You know, just to see what they do.
No, I can't believe it's Robert. No.
Oh boy. So I'm not gonna buy final thoughts on Rule of Rose. He does have some big he does have a big recommendation for it, but it's just a game I've played and I find it incredibly boring, and it's just not for me. Like, anyway, Reign Terror's Realm, I have played this. I'm so excited to finally get this out there and I could put this on the VODs channel. Hey Bawk, have you played Haunting Ground? Exclamation mark RE VODs. Click the video, go and find it. The Reign Terror's Realm plays the most, actually, okay, I'm not gonna lie, I semi-enjoy the song that plays in the Reign Terror's Realm. There is one song that plays for like 3 hours of this game. Like, the whole first portion of the game plays one song, and it has a heartbeat in it, to make matters worse. And people say it's one of the worst songs in any video game ever. This is just a really dull, really clunky, really shitty game overall. It is not a good game. And this is one I may replay one day, but man, the first like few hours of this game are almost unbearable. You're just going in and out of rooms over and over and over, praying you're going to the right place. It is brutal.
And since we've already covered one Dreamcast RE clone in this video, I don't see any reason why we shouldn't do another one. And what better property to convert into an RE clone than an equally famous Japanese horror franchise? Oh yeah, once again, I've already covered this game in length here on the channel, so if you're a little interested in giving that a watch, you know what to do. The Reign Terror's Realm hit Sega's doomed last console the same exact month as Capcom's RE Code Veronica, and I would just love to tell you guys that they share a similar level of quality, but that is just flat out not the case. This was very clearly a budget production staffed by people who may not have been the absolute best in the industry. Nearly every aspect of this game is flawed in some kind of way, and I know that makes it sound like it's not worth playing, but that couldn't be further from the truth. And to further cement that case, let's take a listen to the genius level sound effects Asmic decided to include in the title screen. Ooh, that's that good jank.
Yeah.
So you might be wondering to yourself, if I started this piece by telling you how flawed nearly every part of the game is, how the hell is this worth playing? Well, all of those flaws, or at least most of them, end up either being very interesting or just flat out laugh out loud funny. For example, both the English translation and voice acting are in a league of their own in terms of terribleness, but come on, you can't tell me this isn't funny as all hell.
Like, hey man, what's happening here?
Now hold on a moment, sir.
I know the two of them. They're friends.
And sure, the combat may be god-awful, but it's a little hard to get mad at a game that lets you fire a rocket launcher at a shaved baboon. Listen, the point is, the game is the stuff memes are made from, but it seems like the gaming public just hasn't got a hold of this one yet, or it would have already achieved legendary so bad it's good status. Alright,
that's
so
all
we
true.
already know it's wacky as all hell. Let's dive a little deeper. The Ring is the story.
By the way, and that is why I said I'll probably play this game again, even though it's horrible. It is like you guys were laughing your heads off the entire fucking playthrough, even though I did nothing.
And specifically, it starts with her driving to her boyfriend's house for a nice little date night. But it seems like he won't be joining her for that date.
Kind of a slight case of death.
Now, you'd assume an event like this would scar Meg for life, but you know what's even worse? Starting a new job at the CDC the next day and not only replacing your dead boyfriend, but also occupying his old office. Now, I'm not saying this was an obvious assassination for monetary gain, but this is exactly what it would look like if it were. So on her first day, Meg gets a call from her reporter friend, and he lets her know that the dearly departed was working on a Ring case, which is kind of interesting. This makes this game less of a tie-in and more of a continuation of the events in the movies. Apparently, the CDC got wind of the Sadako murders and
I love Dreamcast horror games for all the wrong reasons.
A few other CDC workers were looking into this killer app, and they died the same way Meg's boyfriend did. So to make sure there wasn't some sort of viral leak, the CDC fully locks down maybe 10 minutes after Meg settles into her new office. And the rest of the game is spent finding out what the hell this program is all about and who's behind the shady stuff going down in the CDC during the lockdown. Now, this is where things sort of split into two separate games. The first gameplay experience is sort of a detective game that has Meg exploring the CDC, talking to her new coworkers,
brutal.
and figuring out what the hell is going on.
And this is
here.
what plays
the
the shit
season,
song.
Meg opening the Ring program, which transports her to this post-apocalyptic version of the CDC building filled with these skinned ape and lizard-looking creatures. The detective parts of the game have zero fail states, and because of this, you could say it's a little boring, but to be honest, they were my favorite parts to play through. I like figuring out the story and interacting with the odd people Meg works with. Now, that doesn't exactly mean these sections were amazing, but comparatively speaking, they might as well be. The portions of the game that has Meg engaging in combat with monsters are some of the most frustrating experiences I've ever had in my life. When Meg runs around, it's insanely easy for her to get caught up on every little piece of the environment, and the enemies can be a nightmare to put down thanks to an inconsistent amount of hits done per shot, and the fact that the auto-aim can sometimes have issues figuring out which is the biggest threat, the reptile abomination right at Meg's feet, or the square inch of wall directly behind it. And I know that's some damning criticism, but the more survival horror parts of the game's design, like opening new areas of the environment to explore and unlocking more pieces of the story through puzzle solving, can be really fun and satisfying. The only issue issue is you will need to engage in combat in order to engage with those parts.
Oh yeah.
If you ask me, the entire game...
When enemies run around, they make the liquor sound effect.
The only issue is you will need to engage in combat in order to engage with those parts. If you ask me, the entire game could have been those detective parts, and I would have genuinely enjoyed it, but if that was the case, I don't think I could have included the ring on this list, so I guess take that for what it's worth. More than a video game, the ring essentially acts as a physical list of game design mistakes for developers to learn from, but I'll be damned if it doesn't have enough heart to make those hurdles almost worth jumping for an actual player. After all, how many games can you say that you've played that crashed to some sort of command line prompt when trying to load a cutscene? If you're looking for a movie tie-in / RE clone to play, there are definitely way better options out there, but as far as creativity goes, I think there's something worth checking out here. So let's count this as less of a recommendation and more of a check this game out if you're looking for a good laugh combined with a slight chance of enjoyment.
A slight chance. Yeah, this is one I'm definitely going to play again. I'm going to skip this because I haven't played it. And I'm going to skip Fatal Frame because, we know. Parasite Eve. Wow, that list is really short for Parasite Eve, or that review. All right. I think on this list, not counting games that got big sequels and franchises, I guess Parasite Eve does count for this. But Parasite Eve is one of the off games in this list that I actually do enjoy. Here, I'm going to let Fatal Frame 2 play because I really have to use the bathroom, but I don't want you guys to sit here and stare at a screen.
One thing in this world I love, and I mean truly
I think this is one of the best horror games ever made, even though it's not my favorite. I think Fatal Frame 2 did everything right. I'll be right back.
Concept, but I think we all have a franchise in mind that hasn't gotten this memo. Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly feels like a perfect follow-up to the first game. All of the core elements that made me enjoy the first entry have been brought over, and you can really feel the hand of the developer in some small key areas. For example, look at this awesome transition into the menu. I mean, come on, it's so fitting. I'm actually a little mad they didn't think of this for the last game. And as another example, once you're actually in that menu, you'll find what I think may easily be the absolute best map in a video game, bar none. Not only do we have the ability to move around the map with a little cursor and icons for important stuff like locked doors and save points, but also a little thumbnail view of what the area you're selecting actually looks like, as long as you've been there before. How in the hell is this not a standard feature in video games by now? Honestly, this was so insanely useful, especially since the explorable environment in Crimson Butterfly is larger and less densely laid out than the first game. While using that map to explore, you'll find nearly the same exact style of gameplay with almost no changes except for one improvement on an issue that bothered me in the last game. It seems like it's way harder to get caught up on environmental details now, and I welcome that with open arms. Combat still uses the camera obscura and flows in a similar fashion, but it doesn't seem as impactful and satisfying as the first game. I'm not really sure why, but I think it has something to do with sound and camera effects in the first being way punchier and providing more visual and audio feedback. The system is the exact same here in part 2, but for some reason I just didn't get that feeling of satisfaction after a fight. To balance this out though, we now get to face off with several ghosts at once, which really ramped up the difficulty in a way that provides a more intricate challenge, but not so much that the game becomes noticeably harder to play. The story's still your standard Fatal Frame deal. Two twins get stuck in an area where a great tragedy took place a long time ago, and because Shintoism was involved, apparently that guarantees a ghost infestation. Now, I would like to comment on that, but I have no idea how Shintoism works. And to be perfectly honest, I don't think most Japanese people do either outside of celebrating a few holidays. We still get all the expected symbolism and Japanese ghost story cliches, and again, they're awesome. In the first entry, I sort of got burnt out on the ghostly jump scares because they were so frequent, and I think this one does a great job of toning them down so each one feels a little more significant.
Maya?
Why?
The game still combines harsh, realistic-looking locations with bright-eyed anime-looking characters, and it still looks great to me, and no, I cannot for the life of me figure out why that is. I had an issue with the first game covering the screen with a staticky, messy-looking obscuring filter while using the camera, and I'm happy to say they fixed that issue here. The only problem being they just moved that static filter over to your normal view. So now instead of a clean, sharp picture most of the time, we kind of have to rely on the camera to get brief glimpses of what this game would have looked like if it were made in a time when developers weren't so scared of 480i that they smeared their games with terrible-looking filters that made sure no one got to see the edge of a single pixel.
I skipped Codel because I'll probably play it one day.
To see a sharp-looking picture on a CRT. On the plus side, the ghosts no longer distort your vision so badly that it gets hard to track them, something that didn't really bother me too much in the first game until I went back to compare the two. I was genuinely worried Tecmo was going to drop the ball here, and I'm absolutely thrilled that they didn't. Fatal Frame 2 is a wonderful follow-up that seems to have really understood what people liked about the first one. Without a doubt, get this game in your collection, and if possible, play it right after the first one, so you can really appreciate all the work that went into subtly improving it over its predecessor.
I can't wait to hear what he says about Siren, because I fucking hate that game. All right, we'll listen to Parasite Eve, but okay. So if you're just getting here, I'm trying to skip the games I'm gonna play, and I'm trying to skip the games we've like we've already heard every single thing about. Like Parasite Eve. Parasite Eve is easily one of the best games on this list. It's one of the best like RPGs in my opinion ever. And we need a remake, and we need another Parasite Eve that isn't dog, but I'll see what he has to say just because I do love the game.
There's absolutely no getting around
and
it.
yes,
When you
I've
talk
played
about
Parasite Eve, Parasite Eve 2. Every game I've skipped, besides the ones I've said out loud I haven't played, I've played.
classic survival horror, Parasite Eve is bound to come up, and that is for both good and bad reasons. Good because Parasite Eve may be one of the most amazing turn-based role-playing games ever made, but bad because,
that's right,
well, there's nothing about the gameplay or mechanics that a reasonable person would ever call survival horror. I'm almost positive that there's no one ready to argue this game doesn't play like an RPG both in and out of combat. And if by a slight chance you are willing to argue that point, well, I'd recommend you check out my Parasite Eve retrospective that I made years ago. In it, I dove much deeper into the entire series than I'll be able to here, so if you feel like checking it out, there's a link on screen and one in the description. Shilling aside though, the point here isn't to argue over what degree of correct I am about what games are and aren't survival horror. The point is to say I don't care what type of games you get into, Parasite Eve is a classic and you absolutely need to play it. For those of you who haven't though, the game is the story of Ayabrea, a New York cop who for some reason is immune to the attacks of a mutated freak named Eve. Eve's goal is to free mitochondria from human cells and create some kind of utopia for it, and Aya goes through the game both trying to save New York from her genetically manipulated monsters, while simultaneously trying to figure out what her and Eve share that allows her to resist Eve's control over her cells. The game pretty much plays out as your typical RPG with weapons and armor to be found and stats to be upgraded, only in this instance the weapons aren't swords and shields but good old-fashioned American firearms. Everything else in the game is basically a contemporary analog to your average RPG tropes, and lest that sound like an insult, I absolutely love it. Combat in the game is handled with a hybrid of both turn-based decision-making and real-time movement. So when you trigger random encounters, you're free to move Aya around the playfield.
What makes this game turn off, or what turns people off this game, I assume, is the giant globe thing that appears, like the giant globe that appears when you're taking your turn. It's very weird. It's like I don't know any other game that does anything like that. And when I used to watch people play this game, I'd see that globe appear and I'd be like, man, this looks ridiculous. Like, I don't want to play this. It just looks confusing. But in reality, when you do play it, it's fine. I think the gameplay for this game is aged
start choosing commands from a menu just like you're used to.
Vagrant Story? Oh, I've never played
RPG combat was mind-blowing to my little teenage brain when it first came out, and even today it still feels fresh and novel, but sadly we are not here to talk about the first game. In an odd twist that I really wouldn't have expected, Parasite Eve did well enough to warrant square-footing the bill for a sequel, and to say that they were inspired by Resident Evil this time around would be putting it very, very lightly.
Okay, I'm not going to watch Parasite Eve 2. I've played it, and it's okay.
Partner. Who?
Svetlana Lupescu.
I have not played this, but I don't know if I'll ever play it, so.
I hate monsters.
If you ask me, Nocturne may be one of the most obscure titles we've come across in this little RE clone project, and that is for very good reason. Not only was it developed by a company who seemed to be—
Wait, this seems fun. Okay, wait. What's next? Okay, let's skip Nocturne. I'm gonna play Nocturne one day. This actually looks fun. Okay, Men in Black, I consider to be the worst RE clone ever. Like, it's atrocious. And yeah, sometimes it's funny. I don't have anything good to say about this. It's a steamy pile of shit.
Lovely play. I bet the rent.
Except it's funny. Like, it's like, it can't be funny, and it's just, oh my god, it's horrible.
As you guys watch this series, you may have noticed that I tend to be pretty forgiving when I cover these RE clones, and truth be told, there's definitely a little nepotism taking place here. After all, you guys know I love this genre, the gameplay it typically uses, and on a surface level, I just get a kick out of seeing pre-rendered—
Please let this be a lead-in to this being the worst RE clone ever.
backdrops with 3D characters running around on them. But for the first time in the retrospective, I can confidently say that the game I'm covering right now is just flat-out terrible with zero redeeming qualities. Men in Black, the game, was only released in PAL territories, likely because bringing it over to the US may have violated some kind of non-aggression pact. And even though I was kind of excited at the idea of seeing the world of Men in Black represented in my favorite gaming genre, I have to say this game makes for one hell of a first experience. After watching what I think is supposed to be an intro, I was just dumped into Will Smith's role in the movie. I was given no instructions on what to do or even a hint as to the direction I was supposed to be heading. After finding a locked door and struggling with the god-awful controls, I just died.
Yep.
So I guess there was a bomb in the apartment with me, and sure, that explains the beeping noise, but there's a lack of context clues, and then there's just terrible game design. It would be one thing if this was mirroring the events in the intro of the movie, but that's not the case, and I'd wager most people had died twice before they even find the room the bomb's in. So on my next try, I figure, hey, maybe I'll look for this bomb. So I found it in one of the rooms and attempted to interact with the only part of the image that my cursor would animate for, which results in another game over. So this time I think to myself, well, we have a bomb that can't be defused.
Let's go out the window.
On it. Why don't I just get the hell out of the building? And then I tried to escape from a window.
Instant death.
worked, and by that I mean it resulted in the bomb blowing up again. This whole scenario was absolutely insane to me. I was only 3 screens into the game, and it had already completely beaten me. Just to gain 5 minutes worth of progress into the very beginning of the game, I had to die 9 or 10 times before I said screw it, gave up, and just looked at a guide. So it turns out you can disarm the bomb, but it can only be done when the biggest section of this little meter is lit, and only after it's defused can you get out of the window. It seems to me this
is even worse.
That old DOS adventure game type of design where you can die on every single screen in the dumbest ways imaginable, which is probably why the game prompts you to save every 1 or 2 screens. It essentially becomes a giant exercise in trial and error, and at some point bad game design becomes less and less likely, making room for flat-out contempt for the player. After that life-alteringly bad
and then you get stuck in the trash
and a weapon, and then you're off to yet another series of screens that can kill you with no warning. For example, once you venture out of the first area in this section, coming back will just gradually kill you, and at no point did I figure out why, which is just super fun. The Wikipedia entry for this game says they mapped actual pictures of the actors' faces onto these 3D models, and if you think you can tell that, you're lying. The voices in the game are compressed so badly that they're actually hard to listen to, which makes no sense. I mean, the disc isn't exactly packed full of content, and these guys are the ones who recorded the audio.
No use sugarcoating it. Aliens live amongst us. That's the big secret, and it's our job to make sure it doesn't get out.
God, I hate this game
so badly. Without a doubt, this game was made by a group who seems to have only heard of the concept of video games through the grapevine, and if I had my way, they would be tried and prosecuted to the fullest extent the law would allow. And for some of you guys, that may not be concise enough, so let me put it this way. This game is a war crime, and at no point should any human being ever be subject to its atrocities again.
I agree. It's fucking horrible. I find it so funny that I even skipped a lot of the games, and we got here and I was like, it's the worst one. And he said it too. It makes me so happy. I'm not crazy.
May 10th, 2010.
Okay, this is one of my favorite ones, but I love Dino Crisis, Dino Crisis 2, but we're skipping these because they're uninteresting to me. Because I just, the video is 4 hours long. I don't want to be here all day. So Clock Tower 3, put Dino 3. No, I want to play Dino Crisis 3 very soon. So, this game I've played a few times. I actually love Clock Tower 3. It's my favorite Clock Tower game, like without even a shadow of a doubt. I think this is one of my more enjoyed horror games. I don't think it's necessarily like a great game by any means, but I personally enjoy it because I just enjoy the theme. This is. I'll just see what he says. I enjoy everything.
In my time covering games here on YouTube, I've come across some oddities. Games that are just too damn weird to describe, and without a doubt in my mind, I can confidently say that one of them reigns as undisputed king of that category. Clock Tower 3 was recommended to me by a Patreon supporter, and since I loved Clock Tower on the PS1, I figured I knew exactly what to expect. But holy hell was I wrong. CT3 ditched the point-and-click adventure gameplay that the series was known for up to that point and swapped it out for a more traditional survival horror type of system. And even though I do love the point-and-click adventure genre, I gotta say this was a huge improvement in a lot of ways. During that transition though, I think someone might have accidentally overcranked the batshit insanity knob because this game is so odd it boggles the mind. The game's developers seem to be very intent on including mocap cutscenes, but for some reason actively directed the motion cap actors to exaggerate every single move they made. And yes, looking at the finished product can be an absolute treat, but you really have to see the mocap sessions. They are genuinely a thing of beauty. But weirdness aside, what does this game have to offer and why is it on the list? This is the story of Alyssa and her bloodline, an ancestry of female demon hunters called rooters. Alyssa's just now finding out about her lineage while trying to find her missing mother. She discovers that these things called entities can enter people and drive them to do terrible things. Once those people die, they essentially become eternal spirits who have been strengthened by how many people they killed while they were alive. Now it's important to mention this is nowhere near where the odd stuff starts. All things considered, this is pretty run-of-the-mill for a Japanese horror property. Where things really start to tip the scales of craziness is when Alyssa transforms into a sailor scout and banishes these things to the shadow realm with her magical bow and light arrows. Starting to see what I mean? The general gameplay from the original CT games is still alive and well, and that means until a boss encounter you'll be either running from entities or slowing them down with environmental traps. In addition to that, you'll also be collecting keys and items while solving puzzles, so its credentials all seem to be in order for it being an RE clone, but I think it's the ridiculousness that really sells the experience. Don't get me wrong, the gameplay is fun as hell, and I did enjoy the shit out of the boss fights, but it's the story, gameplay, and setting that pushes the game forward for me. The incredibly overacted cutscenes will have you scratching your head wondering who okayed this creative decision, and the craziest part is while all that's going on, the game will flat out disturb you with some of its content. For example, one part of the game is set in 1960s London and you're trying to get away from the spirits of a mother and son who were victims of a murderer. That murderer dunked their living bodies into an acid bath to get the job done, but not before blinding them with acid first so that their spirits would never be able to find each other in the afterlife. Honestly, that's some messed up shit. If I didn't know any better, I would have assumed this was some kind of scrapped content from a
This
Silent
game
Hill
is
title
sick.
and not a plot point that takes place in a game containing this scene.
50 subs to play Men in Black? I would do it for maybe 5,000.
And if that's not enough for you, how about a scene where a little girl is just flat out beaten to death? Because you weren't planning on sleeping tonight anyways, right? Like a lot of the stuff we've covered so far, I've already reviewed this game, and if you're looking for more than a surface
And I remember I
level
said
look at
maybe.
it, I definitely recommend checking that out. Clock Tower 3 is something special in my eyes, mostly because the majority of games that are this wild and out there end up being very flawed and or tough to get into. But this is a pretty simple system to wrap your head around, and once you do, you'll find a surprisingly polished experience waiting for you. If you're familiar with Resident Evil...
I get offers like that pretty often of like, someone was spamming me on Twitter saying I'll give you $100 to play through. I don't do much for, like, I'm a streamer. I literally stream for the generosity of others, but I rarely will I accept money for anything. Like, if someone donated like 1,000 subs, like, play this, don't do it, because I won't do it. I just, you guys do it out of the generosity of your own heart. I'm not like some stripper. Regardless, I've had people say like, dude, I'll give you $100. There was a guy on Twitter who wouldn't stop bugging me. He must have said 5 or 6 times he'll give me $100 if I get the record for Claire A RE2 remake. Getting the, even for God, even if Jesus came back to Earth with superpowers, getting the record for Claire A RE2 remake is like 2,000 hours played. 2,000 hours of my time for $100. That's like half a penny an hour.
You can jump right into this game, and the added bonus of hiding from your pursuer should appeal to people who really enjoyed the persistent threat provided by Mr. X in RE2 Remake and Nemesis in the original RE3. Plus, fans of pure absurdity will probably get a kick out of the flailing limbs and seizure-like actions of the characters during cutscenes, which somehow exist on top of an interesting story that can get serious.
By the way, not that I would do it anyways. Just saying that it's like, I find it funny that people like 50 gifted subs to play Men in Black. That might send me to a psych ward.
Killer time, if not for its sheer oddness, then for its cool twist on survival horror gameplay. If you can, grab yourself a copy of Clock Tower 3, but if you do, make sure you don't get the dicky eyes from playing it too much.
Your old mother may have dicky eyes, but she's not on her last legs.
Well, then,
Countdown Vampires. Alright, I don't even know what to say about this game, really. It's a weird one where, like, I don't think it's good. The cutscenes in this game are hilarious. The main character is like Billy on steroids from RE0. Like talk about a voice actor that does not fit the character. Whoever voice acted, I forget the main character's name in this. It just doesn't fit him at all. Regardless, I actually really liked some of the environments in Countdown Vampires. Some of the puzzles are okay. But what kept me playing the game is the funny cutscenes. Like, that's what trudged me through the whole game. But there are some neat ideas with Countdown Vampires. I don't hate the game. This is one game that people ask me my opinion, and I will swap left and right and be like, I hate it. Like, it's okay. I hate it. It's okay. I think if you're a huge fan of the survival horror and like RE clone genre, I think Countdown Vampires is possibly worth a playthrough. But, yeah, it has the best intro song. The intro song of this game is god tier. Oh, yeah, my name is Keith. I'm a homicide detective.
I'm sorry.
Or whatever he says.
Hey, it's all right.
This is one of the more entertaining ones on the list.
It's about damn time we got to this one. Among people well-versed in the survival horror genre, there's one name known above all. A title so legendarily bad that its mere mention sends shivers down the spine of anyone old enough to have had a subscription to PSM in the early 2000s. A game that's almost unmatched in its infamy. Hell, I imagine if you've made it this far into my little RE clone series, you already know everything I'm about to say. But for those of you who have never witnessed the worst reviewed game in the genre, strap in.
Oh, really?
It's gonna be something.
There's the cool cutscenes I was talking about.
Vampires is a title that, like most games on this list, was looking to grab a small piece of that survival horror pie that Capcom was hogging all to themselves. And in a perfect world, that's exactly what it would have done. To level with you guys, I've always heard about how bad this game was, and I've had the Japanese release of it for years, but I've never really put much more than an hour.
I didn't know until right now that this game was so badly reviewed or accepted from people. Because, like, from what I know, people are just like, hey, you gonna play Countdown Vampires? It's an RE clone. And I'm like, yeah, one day I've heard it's decent. But I had no clue it was so hated.
Into it. And now having played it for a while, I can say there are some really cool ideas floating around in this game. Sure, they're sharing space with a list of flaws so long I doubt a human being could get to the end of it in their natural life, but you gotta give credit where credit's due. The game starts with a relatively impressive CG cutscene showing your character Keith J. Snyder, a cop who's pulling security detail on the side. Apparently he's here to guard a few VIPs, but after being in the building for less than a full minute, a fire breaks out and the sprinklers kick on to handle it. And in their defense, the fire does get put out. Only the stuff coming from the ceiling isn't exactly water. Instead, it seems like someone put a strange substance in the water supply that has people turning into vampires, and for some reason the white-looking water in the fountain turns them back. Now that our boy Keith is stuck in this casino modeled after horror movies and directors filled with vampires, the goal is, naturally, to get out ASAP. Now, I'd love to tell you more about the story, but there doesn't seem to be much more of it to tell. There's a survivor named Misato who doesn't seem very trustworthy, and some black-cloaked guy is pointing a gun at us and giving out thinly veiled threats. And that's about all I could glean after spending a good few hours muscling through this title. Normally in a situation like this, I would head straight to the wiki, but it's a little barren to say the least. Honestly though, you're probably not coming to this game for a thrilling narrative. Narrative aside though, I was actually surprised by how much I enjoyed the English voice cast. They all seem to be relatively talented enough, although it's clear they were working from a very poorly translated script. But I think we all know the real star of the show is how badly Bandai butchered the gameplay, and I'm gonna tell you right up front, everything you've heard about CV is 100% accurate. It was sloppily thrown together with enemies being able to easily lock you into stun cycles and level layouts that can be incredibly confusing. Without a doubt, this is a bad game, but really and truly it could have easily gone in the opposite direction. The casino you're trapped in can have a relatively interesting ambiance to it, with it sort of reminding me of the early work on RE 1.5 that had very realistic locations sharing space with more fantastic
Yeah, I liked
elements.
the environments.
For example,
like I
each casino
mentioned.
hall has its own stylistic theme that gets
It's just
explained
like
in the lore,
RE2,
which I thought was really cool.
sort of.
The 2D pre-rendered backdrops were very clearly designed well and have a cool look to them, but the compression they put these
Or just like RE2, with everywhere you go in this game, it's just named some, like, see that says Sydney and the candy or whatever it says, but all the areas are locked with like a key respective to what it says over the door.
Images through is out of control in a lot of screens, with artifacts being so visible that a lot of small
I thought it
details
was
become
really
hard
cool.
to see. And as a funny little aside, the dead bodies in some screens are baked into that background layer, so you could just walk right over their corpses as if they were 2D. Something that feels like it could have been avoided by applying proper boundaries on that layer. The human and, well, I guess humanoid characters look pretty convincing, and while it's easy to make fun of Keith over here for sporting a full-body tribal design that would make Carrie King jealous, he looks good as far as proportions and geometry goes. If you ask me, there are elements of this game that really could have wowed PS1 owners at the time, but they're just stuck behind a wall of bad game design. For example, being a massive facility, the Desert Moon can be a real pain to navigate on memory alone, so no big deal, right? Just pull up your map and figure out a route.
Marcel.
And in a good
thank
game,
you,
that would
Wolf,
be
for
an
the
easy
13.
process, but here I need to wait for the slow fade to black that
Oh, you have
accompanies
to
switching
wait.
to the inventory. Then I need to select the map option that has me sitting through another long fade to black, and when I finally got my bearings, I need to wait through another 2 long transitions before I'm back to playing again. No joke, I often ran into this issue where by the time I was back to moving Keith around in the environment, I had already forgotten where I was headed because I spent so much time looking at a black screen. Scattered all around are gambling mini games that can be played, and at first I thought that was pretty cool. It's always a good idea to include even a little bit of environmental interaction in a game like this, but these games are so rigged against you, you might as well go out and lose your money at an actual casino. Plus, I never figured out how to get more money, so after I bought a few healing items,
I think you can actually abuse one of them. I thought that's what I did.
Are relatively easy to figure out, but mechanically satisfying enough. The only issue is the amount of backtracking you have to go through once you get a key item is almost criminal, and that wouldn't be too big of a deal for fans of the genre if those long fade to black transitions I talked about earlier didn't also apply to the doors. And as a quick side note, listen game, you made a cool moon transition for when the player moves between major areas in the casino. Why not use that same screen for the regular door transitions instead of this cheap now loading text? Combat can sort of kind of work sometimes, but most of your encounters will likely frustrate you beyond belief. On their own, the humanoid vampires aren't much of a threat. Not only are they pretty weak, but Keith can take a surprising amount of damage. Our boy here can run pretty fast, so choosing not to take them out is a valid option a lot of the time, and downing a single enemy is usually no trouble. Get more than 2 in a room though and you've got yourself a really bad time. Their lunging slaps interrupt all of your actions, and if they catch you in a corner, you might as well reset the game. You have 0 invincibility after taking damage, so every single hit they lob at you is going to connect, and every time it does,
Oh, everything's better than Men in Black.
Down by your side.
That game
I
is
often
like
found myself being
unplayable.
unable to aim my weapon when more than 3 vamps got a hold of me, and I just had to hope their attacks lined up out of time with each other so I could at least
Like,
run away. But
I'd give Men in Black probably a 3 out of 10, and that's being pretty generous.
majority of the time, this just meant an automatic game over. To tell the truth, the weapons are pretty cool here. You start off with the dart gun that shoots tranquilizers, and I think the goal here is to kill as few humans as possible. Once you've knocked out a vampire, you can pour this white liquid on them, which will turn them back into a person again, and I have to imagine this has some kind of effect on your ending or something. But once you're halfway through the game, they show up in such big groups that this is effectively suicide, so I'd recommend switching that out for a lethal sidearm as soon as possible. The handgun does its job pretty well and has a nice sound effect when fired, but the rifle and shotgun are definitely where it's really at. The rifle,
The
which looks like a
shotgun
Vietnam-era
animation's really
M16
cool.
in my
It's
eye,
just like
actually penetrates
T2.
when fired, so if you can get a few
Or, well,
vampires
not
in a line,
like
you can
T2, but
effectively
just
down
as
the
a
whole
cool
ring. The
reload
shotgun
animation.
kills with a single hit at close range, and at medium range does a hard knockdown, which really helps build some distance between you and these cheap bastards. And you might think that would solve some of my earlier problems, but Keith decided this was an action movie and refuses to eject spent shells like a normal person, instead pumping it one-handed like one of those chuds who goes to the range specifically to impress people on Instagram. So the amount of space you may have gained from knocking down an enemy is negated since you can't move during this animation. This becomes a giant issue when fighting these flying assholes who always show up in pairs and seem to only attack in perfect unison.
Oh yeah,
allowing
they're
you no
really
time at all to
annoying.
raise your gun, of course. When you actually
It's
do
all
get a shot
flooding
off,
back.
the reload animation pretty much guarantees
I
these
played
guys
this
get at least
years
4
ago.
more hits in on
Like
you.
2 or 3 years ago.
I kind of found it funny that the dev team who localized CV accidentally left some of the Japanese text in the game. And the funny thing is, it's not like it's in some obscure location that no one thought you would check. There's a box in the casino's second major area, and if you check it before activating a Kino machine, it'll tell you something about not having something. I'd love to look like some kind of genius for translating all of it, but I can't read the first 3 kanji, so I have to assume it's saying it doesn't have power or something like that. Listen, I'm gonna level with you guys. I went into this with the intention, obviously, of laughing at how bad the game was and sharing a few jokes at Bandai's expense, but this proved to be a little more of a complicated situation. Instead of being a game that was so bad it's good, Countdown Vampires pissed me off. Not because it was cheap, I mean, it is, but more than anything, this felt more like a wasted opportunity. The obvious ridiculousness of the story, setup, and horrible script aside, these guys had a genuinely interesting, and at times, fun survival horror game on their hands. Of all of the RE clones we've looked at so far, I think this one has stayed the closest to the established Capcom formula, and I really enjoyed those aspects of it. The game's story and world, while totally unbelievable and hilarious, just sort of feel like par for the course for that era of games on the original PlayStation. The 2D backdrops actually looked great once you get past all the work they had to do to fit them on a 700 megabyte CD, and the combat had a vibe that I think could have worked really well if they would have fine-tuned it a little bit more. This may sound insane, but I think there's a good game in here somewhere. As I was playing and trying my hardest
I feel
to
that way
adapt
with
to the
Martian
amateur-level
Gothic.
flaws around every corner, I noticed I was kind of enjoying myself, and oddly that made it even worse. Because I was having fun sometimes, the issues with the game hit me like a ton of bricks when I actually experienced them. If we could get a team together like the guys who've been restoring Resident Evil 1.5's unfinished build, I think we might see a genuinely cool survival horror title here. Man, talk about a direction I was not planning on heading in when I started this. I guess I can't really recommend this game in good faith. Even if there was the slight glimmer of a fun time in here, you're going to need to dig through miles of sewage to ever actually reach it. But if that sounds like a risk you'd be willing to take, I'd say go for it. Look, Countdown Vampires may be exactly as terrible as the gaming press has made it out to be, and possibly even worse, but at the same time, they might have been selling it a little short.
Where's the girl?
She's not here. I'm looking for her too.
The countdown is beginning.
Uh-oh.
Carnby's a loose cannon, but we
Oh no, Alone in the Dark. I used to speedrun this game. I actually think I think people hail this as one of the higher quality RE clones, which God, I don't know what to say about this game. What did I...
Beginning. Carnby's a loose cannon, but we had no real choice.
Corned beef. This game is essentially scores now. Yeah, I mean, well, this isn't the OG game, but Alone in the Dark is. I think this game is semi decent. Like, I'm trying to think of bad stuff. This is the game with the fucking 49 pager, by the way. I think what was it? Was it 49 pages? One of the books. Now, some of the pages are only like a paragraph or two, but still a 49 pager in this. Yeah, of course I'll play the remake. But I actually think this is one of the better games on the list. But I still don't think it's a necessarily a good game. It was really cool that you could play 2 different characters, and I think it's, I don't know. I think it's a stretch to say it's like a great game, but I mean I speed ran it. I enjoy it.
Full disclosure, I've never really been a fan of the Alone in the Dark games. Now don't get me wrong, I appreciate that the series flat out laid the groundwork for what Resident Evil would accomplish in the future.
I think this is the one that's most like Resident Evil.
It's sort of like my relationship to the Star Wars franchise. There's no doubt Lucas paved the way for a near infinite amount of sci-fi media that would come to follow, but call me crazy, I prefer those properties that built from that foundation and improved on it in every conceivable way. So while I absolutely give the utmost respect for what the series would later lead to, well, it's not exactly the franchise
I've heard of every single game on this list.
That being said, if there was one way to get me to put a disc in a console...
Actually, there was one I didn't hear about. It was, I guess Vampire Hunter D. Like the Vampire Hunter D stuff I just watched, that was like the first I've ever watched of it.
Copying Resident Evil, which is exactly what Alone in the Dark: The New Nightmare does. From what I was able to gather, thanks to a few disparate internet sources and some friends that hung out with me during a recent live stream, this seems to be a hard reboot of the series. You can play as Edward Carnby, who serves just about the same role as his red-headed progenitor, but this incarnation exists as his own entity outside of the original. So this is essentially using the familiar elements of the series, but placing them in a new world with sort of new characters. Now, like I said before, I'm not what you would call a fan of the earlier games, so excuse me if I miss a lot of what might be obvious references to past canon. So the general idea is Carnby, who's some kind of investigator, is looking to find out how his partner died, and that means boarding a train and heading for the last place the guy was seen, Shadow Island. Along for that ride is Aline, a smarty pants college grad type, who's there because the guy bankrolling this little...
They gave Aline the biggest butt I've ever seen on a character that you view from the behind.
Excursion is looking to recover 3 mysterious tablets that are supposed to hold some kind of supernatural
Oh no,
power.
actually, in general, her proportions are like perfect. It's hilarious.
She knows her way around ancient artifacts. On the plane ride over, the crew is attacked by some unseen force and are forced to parachute down to the island, and here's where you get to decide who you'll be playing as. From what I can tell, Carnby is more focused on the traditional RE-style gameplay, combat very much included, while Aline is more focused on puzzle solving. I naturally went with Edward for this playthrough because I was looking to see how well they captured that Resident Evil feel, but I was tempted to start up as Aline for some reason. I'm not quite sure why, but there was just something about her that appealed to me. Anyway, starting out with Carnby reveals the devs behind this game to be pretty knowledgeable on what makes RE work so damn well as a survival horror property. I mean, if we had a checklist to determine what makes a great Resident Evil title, 95% of those boxes would be marked here. Just off the top of my head, we've got 10 controls, holding a shoulder button to ready your weapon, flat-out genius static camera angles, combat is present and accounted for, but almost always avoidable, incremental exploration using backtracking and item collection to push it forward, and a focus on conserving resources. Now, I'm certainly not going to say that all of these elements are perfectly implemented, but you really don't see non-Capcom titles hitting this close to home, and if anyone knows that, it's the guy who's been playing nothing but RE clones for the last 2 months. The game's story was successful in getting me interested to continue forward, not just because I enjoyed the gameplay, but because I wanted to see how the mystery would reveal itself. From what I can understand, there's this unexplored world near the center of the Earth where creatures made up of shadow and organic material roam, and this island just so happens to sit on one of the tunnels that lead to it, which explains at least some of the creepy stuff going on here. I will say, while I was very impressed with the sheer amount of things brought over from my favorite zombie puzzle game, not everything was handled as well as it could have been. For example, I love that I could move around with my weapon drawn, but because the D-pad couldn't control the height at which I aimed, the game often auto-aims for me. Unlike RE, you won't turn to face an enemy when hitting a shoulder button, and the cone, for lack of a better word, that determines when Carnby will auto-aim seems very, very narrow. I don't know, it just seemed really odd that they would include this feature but then essentially force the player to manually aim anyways. Because of this and some far off or obscure camera angles, I had issues determining when Carnby had locked on, meaning not only did I waste more ammo than I would have liked, but I also took a few more hits than I felt like I should have. I will admit though, this can be compensated for by learning the game's quirks. After getting to a point where I was depressingly low on ammo, I restarted the game, and after getting used to the combat, I was able to hoard resources like a boss. One thing that did bother me though is something I can't quite confirm. I think there might be certain areas where enemies respawn, and in any other game that would be fine, but if you're giving me a very finite amount of ammo to deal with these enemies, having them keep populating cleared areas feels more like an oversight than a conscious decision. Because of this, a restart is almost necessary about halfway through. This way you can keep in mind what you have to do and in what order.
There's also one boss, I don't know if it's bugged on console, but on PC, and this is where all my speedruns die usually, but there's a boss in a library that's like invincible 90% of the time, and you have no clue if you're hurting it or not. It always looks like you're hurting it, but if you get there in a blind playthrough, you will use all your ammo there, and but you won't use it effectively. Like it dies in like 4 hits, but you'll end up shooting it like 40 times.
Backtracking will have you spending every last resource you have. Other than that, the puzzles Carnby comes across felt really innovative and organic at the same time. Like in one area I needed to input a 2-letter code on a statue, but there was no documents around that gave me any hints. I did notice there was a 3D object though, and the RE faithful know that if it's 3D you can either pick it up, shoot it, or push it. So I took the latter option and just kind of moved it around randomly when I noticed the code needed was written in reverse on the back. So I pushed it in front of a mirror and got the information I needed. A lot of the head scratchers you'll come across has a similar feel, and I really like that. Alone in the Dark definitely isn't going to hold your hand, so if you're expecting it to drop a lot of hints, you'll find yourself lost pretty quick. But if you use real-world knowledge and some experimentation, I'm sure you'll figure most of this out on your own. Graphically speaking, there's a lot to gush about here. First off, you really have to give it up to the art team for these absolutely stunning camera angles. They made great use of odd placement and Dutch angles to give the feeling that things aren't quite right here on Shadow Island. On top of that, I noticed what I think is an homage to that one scene from the original Alone in the Dark's intro in a similar scenario in this game. Even though I'm not really into the older games, I still thought this was a really cool little nod.
I really like the
pre-rendered
first
backgrounds
Alone
are
in the
flat out
Dark.
stunning, and believe me, I have really strict standards for this kind of art style. Each screen feels well detailed and populated, but also does a great job of giving you a sense of space and placement. What I mean by that is I can form a pretty good idea of where the next screen is going to take me before I even see it for the first time, just based on little environmental details on the current screen and a nice use of landmarks. But more than anything else, you really have to give this game credit for doing something I've never seen any other game using pre-rendered 2D backdrops do. As you might expect for an alone-in-the-dark game, light plays a pretty big role in the gameplay, meaning your flashlight isn't just for show. This thing acts as a real-time dynamic light source that can actually light up the background. Now, let me say that again in a different way because I don't think you're as impressed as you should be. A 3D light source on a PS1 game is actively lighting what is essentially a 2D, non-interactive JPEG on the screen.
Yeah, that is really cool.
Is it just me or is that genuinely sexually arousing? I struggled to figure out how this was even possible
I
for
didn't
the
really
first 30
think
or
about
40
that.
minutes of the game, but then I noticed most rooms had light switches that let you turn the lights on and off, and that's when it hit me. I think the devs rendered out two versions of background art, one light and one dark, and it seems to me the flashlight isn't so much lighting the background, but instead creating a transparency layer that allows the lit version of the background to be displayed within the vertices of the flashlight cone. And if that still, for some reason, isn't blowing your mind, keep in mind this was something not even the incredible RE remake was able to achieve on the GameCube. Man, talk about pushing this console to its limits. And since we're on that subject, I did opt for the PS1 release despite there being a PC, Dreamcast, PS2, and even Game Boy Color offering.
Thank
Obviously,
you, Nikolai,
the
for the
vertical
5
resolution
months.
is attractive as hell to me, but come on. If I'm not upscaling 240p footage here on the channel, it just doesn't feel like me.
No.
That being said, I don't know if I'd recommend going the PS1 route for a playthrough. There seems to be a few issues with this version, but the most annoying is the long amount of time it takes to transition from one screen to the next. I assume this has something to do with the fact that the console is loading two pre-rendered images into memory simultaneously, but it can make the game feel like it's flowing less organically. If that's something that'll bother you, I would say maybe stick with the PS2, PC, or DC versions, especially since the game can be found on Steam for next to nothing and installs and runs perfectly in Windows 10. If you want it to run at a higher resolution than 640 by 480, you'll have to create
the problem with the PC version, and I know this because everyone on my YouTube videos has told me, the sound effects and music are super bugged and sound like shit. And also there are some buggy moments that come from the PC version.
Shortcut and append it with the desired resolution, but that's not running at a higher resolution than 640 by 480. You'll have to create a shortcut and append it with the desired resolution.
And I think that's because of the reasons I said.
I've ever had to go through to get an old PC title running on this operating system. All in all, I was flat out floored with the new Nightmare. I knew going in that it was going for the RE crown, but I had no idea it would get so close to grabbing it. There are many, many flaws here, but I'd still say this is a no-brainer. It did almost everything I expected it to, but shot past those expectations and started really adding new life into the genre. And if that's not enough to get you interested, may I remind you, Aline comes into this experience all kinds of cheeked up, so, you know, it's a plus.
And unlike RE, the Aline playthrough is actually quite different. Like, you visit a lot of different areas, if I remember correctly.
Don't move. Leave me be. I'm gonna die.
We've covered a lot of varying quality in terms of these RE clones, and I think the only terrible, definitely would not play it again level game so far has been the PAL-only release of Men in Black. So I guess you might assume it's time for another stinker, and, well, you'd be right.
I have never watched anything for this game, but we'll watch this one just for fun, because I don't know if I'll ever play.
I'm sorry, Dad. Now we can never be together. You must remain here forever.
The Crow's been making the rounds on the internet for a while now, but I think the angry video game nerd is to blame for its more recent infamy, and having played it myself recently, I can say that a majority of that video was hammed up to fit the guy's character, which, in fairness, you probably should assume. Now, that doesn't mean this is some kind of unappreciated gem or anything. It's bad, but it's just not the kind of over-exaggerated bad the nerd portrays it as. But before we get into that, let's get into the story, and trust me, we won't be here very long. You ready for this? Okay, here we go. You're a guy who was murdered, along with your girlfriend, and then you come back for revenge. Alright, now that the story's been covered in a single sentence, let's talk about gameplay. And I hope you're ready for this long, detailed analysis. So here we go. You start the game at a bar, and continue forward beating people up until you beat up the people who killed you. Literally the easiest video game I've ever had to describe to anyone. And you'd think I might be pleased with controls being handled with my tried and true, favorite, very much loved tank control method, but there's some kind of delay baked in here.
Thank you,
I'll press
Duran.
up on the D-pad, and a second later my guy on screen will begin his startup animation for walking, which is not a short process. And that delay makes it feel like you're playing in slow motion sometimes, although I probably should mention that other times you actually will be playing in slow motion thanks to the game not running well when more than 2 people are on screen, along with a few 3D objects like, I don't know, weapons or environmental stuff. When a bad guy approaches you, you'll automatically
it looks like
get your
stop
setup, and
motion.
from there you can do certain moves with button combinations like an uppercut with forward plus circle or a spin kick with left and square. On top of that, you have this neato backflip that serves no real purpose outside of looking cool, which, you know, isn't the worst thing in the world to put in a video game. That baked-in lag I mentioned earlier most definitely applies to the combat, so have fun with that, but in all honesty, this game's sort of hard to talk about. Sure, it's bad, but it's not the kind of bad you can make jokes about without exaggerating. It more sits on the territory of bland bad, where the mechanics aren't implemented well enough, and the game really never gives you any reason to be interested in it. You only have a single life to finish the game, which means every run is a 1cc, and it can be incredibly difficult. After dying my first time, I dropped the difficulty slider down to easy and made it maybe 3 or 4 screens further than when it was on normal. So don't expect to see the ending of this one without spending a substantial amount of time on it, and I want to be very clear here, at no point would I recommend doing that. Okay, so brass tacks time. The Crow is a shitty cash-in meant to capitalize on a movie release. We've all seen this before, and this one is about as bad as you would expect. If you ask me, sitting there watching footage of this game being played is way more fun than actually playing it.
I don't know,
So maybe
guys.
skip
I
this
don't know if I
unless
could
you're
play
really,
this one. This
really into
seems
badly compressed
horrific.
pre-rendered backgrounds, or I don't know, you have a fetish for guys in leather doing backflips, which, by the way, no judgments.
Wait, take it easy. It couldn't be helped.
I don't know what this is.
And now, my friends, we get into the territory of the truly weird, and in the context of this list so far, that's really saying something. Phase Paradox is a PS2 title made as a direct sequel to a multiple perspective spaceship shooter that you've likely never even heard of called Philosoma, which is pretty insane given the gameplay style this game's going for. I can tell you right now, this is very much not looking to follow in the footsteps of its predecessor, as it is an almost entirely story-driven video game, and I don't mean that story drives the game forward. I mean, a majority of the time you're going to spend with this one will be watching the story play out. So that being the case, what kind of story can we expect here? Well, Phase Paradox takes place directly at the end of Philosoma, where the setting of that game has essentially blown up. In this sequel, you play as a trio of characters who are all stationed on the giant cruiser sitting just outside the planet.
Wait.
In the intro, the explosion, debris, and shockwaves from the end of Philosoma have reached the ship, and on top of killing off a large number of its crew, has caused some kind of phenomenon where the remaining inhabitants have started attacking people like some kind of low-rent zombie outbreak. Your 3 characters not only span the spectrum of archetypes, but also the spectrum of timelines. You'll be seeing these events taking place before, during, and after this massive explosion, and the goal is not only to keep these people alive, but also to figure out what the hell is going on around here. Some questions you have may include, but aren't limited to, why is the main character from the previous game being held in some kind of cryogenic pod? Why is the crew going insane and killing people? And how is it possible that every voice actor is recognizably from some kind of early 2000s anime?
Maybe he just fainted, but we can't very well move him now. We have to call for help and get some backup sent over here.
Like I said before, this game is less game and more interactive movie, and I know that's going to be a turnoff for some, but this is honestly a really cool watch. You may argue that what separates video games from cinema is the interactive element, and they do have you covered there. You'll have short sections where you're tasked with getting your character from one spot to another on the map, but during that process, I'll be honest, you'll be triggering cutscenes that will make up a majority of your experience. On the plus side, those cutscenes aren't entirely a passive affair. You'll need to make decisions during them, and while making the wrong one could lead to a game over like you might expect, it could also alter the story in some ways. Some of these moments are set to a time limit, and in some games
played
can
this?
be okay, but I think there's just not enough time to properly deal with this without blindly guessing, so prepare to play through some parts multiple times. I'm gonna level with you guys. At first, this sounded like a unique but ultimately boring approach to making a video game.
I've never even heard of this
until
until
genuinely
now.
wrapped up in Phase Paradox by the time the intro was over. I really and truly wanted to see this mystery solved, and the characters, while not the most well-written things in the universe, all seem to have understandable goals and motivations. This might be the most story-filled experience I've ever had with a video game, Metal Gear titles very much included, and I did not expect to like that so much, but I really did. And all of that's well and good, but I assume a lot of you have one question on your minds, and it probably concerns the massive elephant in the room. This game being a Japan-only release, well, how the hell is anyone who doesn't speak Japanese expected to enjoy its story? And I do have some good news on that note. A majority of said story is delivered through an all-English voice cast, so that should be no issue for 95% of your playthrough.
Hey, hold your fire. Don't shoot.
No! Don't come in here!
That being said, you are still going to have to do a little reading, but if you asked me, that's an issue pretty easily solved. First off, there are most definitely playthroughs of this game on YouTube if you're looking to go that route, but if you're not, most of the text in-game is made up of hiragana and katakana with very little kanji use, so if you're a light reader like me, you might be able to work your way through a lot of it. Even very simple knowledge of key ground-level concepts like positives, negatives, places, simple verbs, conjugation, and a small amount of vocab will definitely get you moving most of the time, but it is insane to expect even a fraction of you guys to have previous knowledge of 2 foreign alphabets. And in that very understandable case, I can confirm using Google Translate as a tool during gameplay is pretty damn easy. It can be buggy, but you should have no issues making out what's going on and what each choice entails. Speaking on those choices, making some of them may lead to a quick death, which isn't a terrible idea, but having
It's
those
just like an
deaths
early
exist in a
Telltale
that's
game or
mostly
something.
cutscenes
It
that
seems
can't be
interesting,
skipped.
but it's
Well,
definitely not
that's
something I'm going to
interesting
play.
bit. On the plus side, though, these moments only ever give you 2 options, so you really can't mess these parts up more than once. Other than that, the game uses a lot of survival horror tropes, which you guys know I love. And might I add, seeing pre-rendered backgrounds on a PS2 game is massive enough to get me to sit up and take notice, but using them in a non-survival horror game that includes no actual combat, well, now you have my full attention. Movement is handled without tank controls, and if you ask me, that was a mistake. The rapidly switching camera angles will often reorient your analog stick, which will have you turn in totally different directions a lot. But since you don't really need to control your characters very often, I don't think this will bother anyone too much. And since all the threats you're going to face will only exist in cutscenes, you really aren't going to need to be too nimble, so no harm, no foul. I know I keep saying this in the series, but this one specific title is definitely the most interesting game we've covered so far. A story-only video game is odd enough on its own, but one that looks and plays a lot like a survival horror title, well, that's really something. And of course, the fact that it tells a genuinely cool story is very much icing on that cake. And having said that, I hope it's obvious, but I would absolutely recommend this one. The Japanese text may be a deterrent for some, and I totally get that, but trust me when I say that this is the most playable Japan-only title in existence. The gameplay may be almost non-existent, but it is engaging enough that you do feel like you have control over what's going on screen, and the cutscenes set up this great little mystery that flirts equally with sci-fi, disaster flicks, and horror. So if you have a way to boot backups or honest-to-goodness Japanese games on a real PS2 or an install of PCSX2 on your computer, stop wasting time and jump on this hidden gem. I really think this is going to be something a lot of you are going to get into. Just try to excuse the wimpy laser sounds.
Yeah, I'm playing Kuon this month, so I'm not going to watch that. Alright, I have not... I watched Runeby play Trag, and this is something I can guarantee I'm never ever gonna play.
If there are two things in this world that I love, it's survival horror style gameplay and a very 90s anime aesthetic. Luckily, I get to talk about both of those things today. A lot of you have been asking me about this one specifically.
You guys have asked me about this a lot too, and
I pull it off the shelf,
I have no interest.
Knowing full well this is a game I absolutely have to make a video on, and well, I guess there's no time like the present.
Oh yeah, full Wildline.
Trag, or as it's known in Japan, Hard Edge, has a very die-hard type of feel to it. The Togusa building has been taken over by terrorists, and you play as an assortment of people trying to put an end to that in one way or another. The first two characters we get introduced to are Alex and Michelle, two Special Forces members who seem to be the only survivors in their respective units. Later we meet up with Rachel, who's adorable as all hell, and Burns Byford, a detective with a cool-ass necktie, played by a voice actor who might want to read commas a little better.
I'm a local detective. The name's Byford Burns Byford.
This game plays surprisingly like an RE title in a lot of ways. You move around with tank controls and incrementally explore the environment, finding key items and puzzle solutions that'll open up more of the floor plan. Where it really starts to differ is the combat though. Excluding Alex, all the playable characters specialize in close quarters throwdowns, which actually works out really well. Thanks to the more action-centered nature of the game, you'll notice a very arcadey style heads-up display, and even though the game never actually tells you about this, there are side-scroller beat-em-up style special moves that can be activated by dashing and hitting attack. These moves will eat up a tiny bit of your health, but to help with that, enemies do tend to leave health boosts on death, which is nice. Attacks can be tweaked with directional buttons, which was something I didn't even know about until my second playthrough, and after having a tough-as-nails time with the first boss on my original go-round, dealing this much damage in a single hit feels amazing. And while fun combat is all well and good, the exploration side of things is also handled perfectly. The game rewards you for snooping around by handing out healing items that can be used with the triangle button, and these little things that permanently boost your HP by a few points. Enemies are all over the place, and fighting them can be fun sometimes, but there is something wrong with it. Technically, I do think there's a cool system running in the background.
Games like this, no matter how shitty they look, even though this looks decent, if they have really bad voice acting, that's already like something I really want to try, but I've already watched most of this game,
so...
Whenever
there's more than one 3D model on screen, Trag slows to a crawl, and when it does, the window that allows you to input multi-hit combos shortens significantly, meaning you might find yourself doing successive single attacks when you're trying to knock an enemy down with a full combo, which really does suck, but you can do this. So I guess we'll call this one even. At any point, you can switch between your playable characters, and to be honest, this switching process is much smoother than I first thought it would be. Sure, there is a little bit of a wait, but it doesn't take nearly as long as you might expect a CD-based game would.
What on earth's going on? Seems the building's been taken over by a bunch of punks.
Each character controls a little differently, which is nice to see, and I think Michelle is my favorite since her run speed is fast and her melee combo is fun to pull off. Then again, Burns over here did suplex a giant robot to death at one point, so safe to say competition's a little stiff.
Hell yeah, dude.
The cutscene is just beautifully rendered, and as soon as I saw these characters on screen, I was immediately taken back to my teenage years when making it to a pre-rendered cutscene was like a treat used to reward you for making progress, or at least that's how it felt to me. In fact, I used to pass the video output from my consoles through a VCR so I could record these cutscenes to a VHS.
My oldest brother did that all the time.
Keep the VCR's controller near me just in case a cutscene.
And we would just rewatch a lot of the cutscenes.
And obsessing over ports and video quality thing might have all started back then. I still have a few of those tapes laying around somewhere, and it's always fun popping one in and seeing what demo I was recording from or what I thought was important enough to share room on the tape. The in-game character models look amazing with that oh-so-recognizable PS1 polygonal style that had characters looking more like a loose culmination of geometric shapes and less like actual people. A style that might not be the most realistic looking, but most certainly works perfectly with this anime aesthetic. On that same note, the pre-rendered backdrops are just beautifully designed, feeling like a cross between late 80s and
that
early
sounds
90s
really weird,
architecture.
like, oh, they'd record it on VHS, but I mean, that's exactly what people do for YouTube. They record the entire game or cutscenes in a game, and then they put it on YouTube. Same as recording it back then. It's like, if you've watched those videos, it's essentially the same idea. But yeah, my brother recorded like every single cinematic in like Final Fantasy IX and a lot of other games, and just
that Art Deco kind of
would whip out the VHS sometimes to rewatch them.
Imagine meeting you here.
I mean, do I really need to finish that sentence? It's a PS1 game. How do you think it sounds? On that subject, though, I was a little thrown off when Michelle sounded like this in the intro cutscene,
I don't know.
but like this in the rest of the game.
I'll make them pay for what they did to our people.
Not really sure what's going on there. Honestly, Track was a really fun time. It did have some very clear flaws, but I didn't feel like they got in the way of the stuff that actually worked. The design and feel of the game world took me further back into my gaming past with each new room reached, and I genuinely had a blast coming across enemies and beating their asses. Movement can be a pain because it's so damn easy to get caught up on the environment or dead enemies before they disappear, but this never got to a frustrating point, just sort of annoyed me every once in a while. If I were you, I'd definitely give this one a shot. It brings over a lot of elements found in Resident Evil, but brings so much of its own personal charm that it doesn't feel as derivative as it may look on the outside. The graphics are a nostalgia trip all their own, and old PS1 era voice acting will always have a spot in my heart. Sadly, it has shot up in price in the last 4 or so years, but with a PS1 ODE like the X Station costing about as much as 2 of these games put together, I think going the optical disc drive emulation approach might be the best bet here. Damn, these used game prices really get up my nose.
Uh-oh, haunting ground.
People who lie really get on my nerves.
Alright, most people are going to absolutely love this game. One second, I just have to refill my water, guys. Here, while I refill my water, I'll put on one that I didn't watch. Alright, one sec.
May 10th, 2010. I'm about to step through a gate to another time. Or maybe it's another world.
Once again, we're left relying on Capcom to come in and clone their own successful franchise, and if there were a better argument for this being an RE clone than Shinji Mikami himself being its creator, well, I haven't heard it. No, that one doesn't count. The Dino Crisis series was born from Shinji Mikami enjoying the general ideas behind Resident Evil but growing disillusioned with the series itself, a pattern you'll see repeating itself over and over again as Mikami has proven absolutely unable or unwilling to work on his own creations for more than 1 or 2 entries. His goal going into Dino Crisis was to create a subgenre he coined panic horror, and without going too far in depth, that basically means integrating jump scares into the actual gameplay mechanics of the game, sort of like Illbleed on the Dreamcast, but, you know, fun to play. As some of you guys may already know, I've gone about as in-depth as you could possibly imagine with the series in my Dino Crisis retrospective, and to keep from repeating myself too much, we're going to go with a nice surface-level overview for this section. If you're looking for a deeper dive with port comparisons and graphical analysis, I'll put a card in the upper right-hand corner leading you to that retrospective. I really like that one, you should check it out.
What about Cooper?
Forget him. Time's up.
Starting with the first entry, you really get the feeling that Mikami wasn't so much bored with RE as much as he was bored with its world and characters, because Dino Crisis feels like some kind of fan-made difficulty hack for a classic RE game. Your reptile antagonist hit like a fistful of freight train, and since ammo conservation plays an even greater role in this game, you'll very rarely find yourself actually firing your weapon. In fact, when first playing it with a friend, we would joke around that Regina essentially fires 1 bullet throughout the entire game, she just keeps having to retrieve it every time it's shot. If you watch a lot of Resident Evil content here on YouTube, you'll often hear something approximating the idea that there isn't enough ammo to take down every enemy in an old RE game, which I maintain can be true for a first playthrough, but obviously once you've got survival horror down to a science, you can cap everything the game throws at you. In Dino Crisis, however, this isn't a rule as much as it is a commandment. You have to live and die by the tenets of conserving ammo, because the amount you'll find in the course of the game approaches sadistically low levels. Luckily, the game sort of makes up for this with a few environmental offensive options like traps and laser grids. These will either let you keep the Dino menace at bay in one area of the map, or give you an easy kill if something needs to be taken out. Like I said, the game essentially works jump scares into the gameplay by having events take place that require a swift getaway or some fast button mashing, and I guess this might have been sort of innovative at the time, but as the years go on, I find it harder and harder to actually appreciate this mechanic. Dino Crisis was pretty world famous for including an honest-to-goodness real-time 3D background instead of a static image, something that might not seem like a noteworthy feature nowadays, but back then this was a pretty big shake-up to the genre, especially since the environments look so damn good here. I think this was an impressive attempt at revolutionizing the general gameplay hook Mikami brought to the industry, but if you ask me, it doesn't feel quite as solid or well put together as its predecessors. But its unique gameplay, tough-as-nails puzzles, and beatdown levels of difficulty make it well worth the play, which is something I recommend you do, not just because it's a rare experience to be had in video games, but also because, well, you're never going to see it again. When it came time to follow up the moderate success of Dino Crisis, Capcom put a new set of eyes behind that project. Dino Crisis 2 surprised the whole damn industry by turning nearly everything about survival horror on its head with a title that both followed the tenets of the genre and simultaneously spit in its face. You play as our favorite redhead again while she investigates an island that seems to have disappeared from the timeline or whatever. Listen, do you remember the time travel beats of the first game's story? Well, it's like that, but with the quirky Japaneseness cranked up to 11. You now have access to a secondary character in the form of Dylan, a meathead with a heart of gold. We still have the tank controls that made the genre famous, but this time around you'll be using them to zoom through incredible pre-rendered backgrounds at light speed while racking up an arcade-like score count and combo multipliers. And listen, I know this is going to sound absolutely ridiculous, and it is, but hear me out. This may be one of the most fun and frustrating games I've ever played, and I just wouldn't have it any other way. So you're pretty much making your way from one side of the island to another, and you proceed in a typical survival horror fashion, that being finding key items, solving puzzles, and triggering story events that will open new areas. But where it really differs is the arcade action I mentioned earlier. DC2 takes a very Parasite Eve 2 route by having the main character be part of some kind of government task force, and every enemy they bag turns into currency that can be spent at shops that can be accessed from save points. So now the goal isn't so much to avoid combat, but perform really well at it so you can upgrade your weapons, reload your ammo stocks, and improve your character's attributes. The combat is really damn fun, and the fast-paced action isn't impeded at all by the tank controls, mostly because your default speed when moving is
sorry, my mom
long,
is here.
and
She's
still
like
allows you
here,
to move.
staying
You
here
move
for
around
a
the
few
island,
days for my
shooting
brother's
dinos for
wedding.
that sweet score multiplier that comes from taking no damage, and your points get tallied
Dino Crisis 2 is far better than 1.
door transitions, and it seems like the game knows when you're on a roll, because as that no damage bonus gets bigger, it seems to throw more and more enemies at you, most of them conveniently spawning in the exact area you've got your back to. Listen guys, I know I'm not doing a great job of explaining this, but believe me when I say, despite the fact that it sounds like it can't possibly work, this is one of the most fun and satisfying games you could ever play through.
True.
Really, Dino Crisis 2 is required material in this RE clone sort of market space, and I might catch hell for this, but I'd even say it outclasses the first game in that sense.
Catch hell for that, just because he's telling the truth.
Convenient for you. You get to sit back and watch while we fight for our lives.
And before we move on to the black sheep of the DC family, we have to at least mention the entry in Capcom's Gun Survival.
Yeah, Dino Stalker. Yeah, I'm not watching that because I don't want to spoil the beautiful Dino Crisis 3, because I'm going to be playing that. Thank you, Norman, for the 4 months. I also think that Dino Crisis 2 is better than the first one. What do you guys think? What do you prefer, the first or second one? I assume most classic RE fans prefer the first one because the second one's an action game, but I like the second one far more, actually. Yeah, my middle brother's getting married. Not me, you fucking people. Jesus Christ. Holy shit. Holy shit, dude. Exoprimal? Yeah, Exoprimal. Giga Chad. All right. So Haunting Ground, I shared my opinion on this one earlier. I've played Haunting Ground twice, maybe 3 times. And I think that it's a really, really good game. It's a great game, but I do think some sections in the game are horrible compared to some others. Like the castle section and the next section with the girl, I can't remember her name. Those are really well done, really good. Like, I absolutely love those parts. Like the first third of the game is amazing. Yeah, Daniela. And then the next part after Daniela, I think is pretty lackluster. And then the tower section and then the boss fight at the top of the tower, I think is abysmal, like just terrible. And the rest of the game afterwards it's okay. But overall, like if I were to play Haunting Ground and enjoy myself to the fullest, I'd stop after Daniela and be like, that was perfect. And then I would do something else. But I think it's a great game overall. And if people are like, it's the best horror game ever.
That people have been asking me to cover for years, and despite being a fan of these sort of games, I've only just now played Haunting Ground for this video, and to be totally honest, it's a bit of a mixed bag in my opinion. The story, so much as I've gathered, is about a girl named...
What did he just say? Holy shit, is he about to agree with me?
Fiona, who after getting into some kind of car accident with her parents, woke up in the strange castle.
Because most chat doesn't agree with me.
Who wants to keep her around, but mostly the antagonist comes in the form of this guy, some kind of sloth lookalike who wants to keep Fiona as one of his dolls. In my short time with it, I haven't really discovered much more than that, other than
he talks so fast because they have the video sped up.
And I can most certainly give it a thumbs up for getting me interested, but story-wise, this game is a very slow crawl for the first few hours, which certainly isn't a huge issue, but if I'm being totally honest, the gameplay wasn't exactly keeping my interest in the meantime. Now, I know this isn't a popular opinion to have, but I've just never really been into non-combat approaches to horror games. I can't really say why, but I just don't feel as in control of the gameplay when I don't have direct damage-dealing options when faced with an enemy. Which is probably a good time to mention the inclusion of a cute little dog named Huey, who plays into the game in a few different ways. When the weird groundskeeper guy is after you, Huey will latch onto him and keep him occupied, but I tried not to do this very much because sometimes the asshole will kick the dog, and that made me feel terrible. On that same note, you can order Huey around with the right analog stick, which will get him to do things like staying put, searching for hidden items, and interacting with the environment. A system I had a lot of fun experimenting with, but there is one option on the stick to scold Huey, and I swear I lived in constant fear of accidentally hitting that during gameplay. Trust me, the last thing I want to do is take part in some kind of dog abuse simulator. Getting Huey to crawl through small openings is kinda cool, but a lot of the necessary uses for the dog do seem a little like padding. You know, things that could have been done myself, but the game forces me to use a middleman anyways. At first, using Huey can be a real pain in the ass as he doesn't listen very well, which is like giving the player an action button that sometimes won't work for no discernible reason. Although I did find giving him near constant pets does help that problem a little bit. There are items that can be found that on top of healing stamina for both Fiona and Huey can be placed as traps for your pursuer, which I guess is okay, but I sort of preferred the method found in Clock Tower 3 where you had a more direct offensive option.
Same.
Exploration and Haunting Ground for me was the best and most satisfying element.
I like
really
Clock
liked
Tower
how
3
creepy
better
the
than this
castle
game, and they're
is,
very
while still
similar.
seeming relatively mundane on the surface. There's a creepy atmosphere of dread here, and sometimes I felt like I was in danger just being there. I really did enjoy discovering new areas of the castle that seemed off, but not in any consciously recognizable way. I don't know, there's some kind of psychological thing that triggers in my brain when this kind of stuff happens. The only problem with that is you'll randomly come across this groundskeeper and then either hope there's some kind of event trigger near you, or backtrack several areas until you find a hiding place. So it kind of feels like for every 3 steps forward, you gotta take 2 steps back. Man, I can already feel the hate radiating from the comments section. I came into this knowing Haunting Ground had a pretty big cult following, and it's not like there's anything in the game I feel like it particularly did wrong, I just don't enjoy these types of games very much. I can most definitely play something that might be a slow burn, but I'd like to be directly responsible for my well-being in that experience instead of...
It's crazy that he's talking about all the parts I think are good. And like, I agree, going back sections, and I could have a lot to say about Haunting Ground because it's just, like he said, it's a cult classic. It's on this list, it's easily one of the most popular games. And yeah, it is annoying. Like, sometimes it was so frustrating to run into the groundskeeper. My second playthrough suffered from this far more. And then have to go backtrack like 5 areas. Then you find like, all right, he's gone. And you go forward 5 more areas back to where you first found him. And he finds you again. It's like, well, now we go hide again. And then he finds you again. It's like, well, now we go hide again. It's just, like he said, it's just a constant back and forth. But that's the best part of the game. I don't even think he's going to talk about the bad part of the game.
Through some kind of mediary. And I think it's the combination of that slow pace and the constant threat of the game spawning an enemy that'll force me to abandon my pace of gaining ground that bothers me. I enjoy exploring the environment in games like this, and I think the worst thing a developer can do is put something in the way of that exploration that can't be solved in the same way a puzzle might be. So without a doubt, this is not the experience for me, but I will say it is a damn fine looking title for a PS2 release. I'm using Open PS2 Loader and GSM to force 480p video output, and Haunting Ground really shines in progressive scan. The 3D graphics have a very fine, almost soft look to them with a lack of strong outlines and a use of very subtle colors that aren't garish. It's clear they were going for a realistic approach, which I think worked really well here. The environment has an amazing design to it, with rooms that just ooze personality while staying relatively artistically muted, meaning there's not too many elements that stand out as being particularly attention-grabbing, while still being able to keep my attention, which sounds dumb now that I'm saying that out loud. It's clear the in-game cutscenes were mocapped, and really well at that. Plus there's jiggle physics, which, if I'm being honest, never stopped being amusing the whole time I was playing. And the late 90s...
oh yeah, I forgot how apparent they were.
And boobs. If there was one area where I felt like the game stumbled, it would be in the sound department. If you're being chased or watching a cutscene, you can expect some tunes that'll heighten the mood, but outside of that, I hope you're cool with a single moody track that sounds more like ambient droning than a piece of satisfying game music, which is normally something I'm cool with. I mean, you could say the same thing about Resident Evil 2, but here in Haunting Ground, there's just no diversity in the soundtrack. If I remember correctly, there's just one single song that plays when exploring the castle, and that's a shame.
Did it? Oh yeah.
So I'm at
I honestly didn't mind that.
I actually didn't enjoy the game very much, but I would still recommend it. I mean, it's definitely not my cup of tea, but with so many people recommending it to me, it seems clear I'm the odd one out here. Plus, there were a few elements that I genuinely did enjoy. Now, sadly, this is one of those limited releases that commands
Avalanche, you're not the only
one like that, buddy. I would fully endorse emulation or some kind of backup loading as a first and last measure. You can get a lot for $300 to $400, and a single PS2 game just doesn't seem like a good return on investment to me, even if it does have great jiggle physics.
Buddy. Thank you, Buzzgood. See, the game, oh god, the couple games that I went on about the bad parts, like Curse Eye of Isis and Haunting Ground. It's funny he didn't, I feel like a more in-depth video that's about each game individually, he would touch on these, but like recommending Curse Eye of Isis and not talk about the boat segment. Like the boat segment is bad. It's a bad part of that game, and it wasn't even like whispered. But in a lot of these, he's not even talking about the late game or the mid game. In almost every one of these reviews, he's talking about like early game and just general game mechanics. But that's a problem with a lot of these games, is that some of the sections so you have this janky game that's fine as it is, but then you have this awful part compared with in conjunction with the terrible game. And Haunting Ground does that, and so he didn't like it, or generally speaking, he said it was just okay, but didn't even touch on the horrible parts in the game that I that just made the game feel 10 times worse. I forget which Evil Dead this is. I have to check.
Not again.
Oh, it's this one. Okay. Where do I start? This is just an abysmal game. There's not much to say about this, honestly. It's great hearing Bruce Campbell as Ash, and they're very faithful for the most part with a lot of the areas in Evil Dead and Army of Darkness. But for the most part, this game's super short, by the way, and there's just a lot of annoying segments in general, but it's not like I said before, but like the boat or the tower in Haunting Ground. It's more so annoying segments like the enemies just become annoying. But I didn't hate this game. I just, I trudged through it. I was like, that was all right, I guess. But I should mention, when I played this as a kid when it first came out, I fucking hated it. I thought it was awful. I played it for like 20 minutes and I'm like, I'm never playing this shit again. I thought it was horrific when I was a kid on Dreamcast.
Evil Dead Hail to the King would normally look like your typical cash-in title, except for the fact that there wasn't anything necessarily there to cash in on in the
oh, and something that made my playthrough a lot better, and I know a lot of people didn't suffer that. There isn't you can sort of abuse the enemies if you press axe and chainsaw at the same time. You can stun lock a lot of enemies, which I did for the most part once I figured out how to do it.
First place, these movies weren't exactly box office moneymakers, mostly because cult followings don't often equal financial success. That being said, it seems like the world and characters from Evil Dead and Army of Darkness would make for a great RE clone, but that's not what we're dealing with here, trust me. Hail to the King starts off as a sequel to the movies that sees Ash coming back to his time period and going back to work while developing a relationship with a fellow S-Mart employee. He's not left unscathed from his run-ins with the demonic, though, and has been suffering from nightmares and delusions. So his newfound girlfriend suggests that they go back to the cabin from the first movies in the name of getting some kind of closure, and that goes about as well as you might imagine, with Ash's severed hand showing up and hitting play on the tape recorder again, basically resetting the events from the first movie. So now his girl's missing and he's got a chainsaw for a hand. Problem meets solution.
Groovy.
HDK plays a lot like the survival horror games you might be used to with tank controls and puzzle-driven exploration, but it's the combat where things differ. Instead of holding a button to attack, attacks can be done freely and even while running. Now, if only they worked. Honestly, I just flat out gave up trying to develop any kind of strategy with this one. Sometimes a Deadite would take 4 swings with a chainsaw, and sometimes they take more than 12. You can hit R2 to actually turn on the chainsaw, which will be your main method of attack, but thanks to some awful lag, hitting that button just flat out doesn't work sometimes. Meaning you'll be sitting there hammering on R2 while enemies are just wailing away at you. Listen, there's no getting around this. Combat in this game feels closer to throwing up while shitting your pants than it does an RE game. Enemies can kick your ass.
Thank you, Ninja, for the 45, by the way. Thank you, Buzzkill.
These guys just flat out don't seem to understand the concept of hit stun, so expect to take constant damage. They can also spawn right on top of you, which will lock you in place and prevent you from even turning to attack them, and if that weren't bad enough, these assholes seem to respawn infinitely. Sometimes you'll find yourself going long periods of time unmolested by enemies, but I'll be damned if I know why that is. To make up for the absolute garbage that is the combat, enemies will almost always drop healing items, which, if you're lucky, will at least make up for the cheap hits you took while fighting them. So you're probably getting the idea that
I haven't played
combat
through
is
this on
whack as hell,
YouTube.
which is true, but we have one question. Is there anything here worth praising? Well, oddly enough, yeah, there is. In fact, it's a lot. The gameplay is more akin to an adventure game than even RE, with puzzle items being found and roadblocks being cleared by their application. I actually found that aspect of the game pretty fun. Solutions to puzzles aren't typically too far away from where you're exploring.
Yeah,
they feel like real
that
world
was
stuff,
cool.
like clearing a drain to find something that fell into it, or finding a shovel to clear rocks. Another plus and subsequent minus is the fact that pre-rendered backgrounds have a cool design to them, with some of them actually consisting of CG animation.
Honestly, he is showing off the best one. Like, the cabin is actually really cool in this game, and the pre-rendered backgrounds are very well done in particular areas, but for the most part, a lot of the game just looks like shit.
Being how badly they need to be compressed to fit on the disc. That being the case, you'll see block boundary artifacts and severe color banding on almost every screen, but I'll be damned if I still don't get a kick out of looking at them. Having Bruce Campbell voice his character's lines brings the expected amount of attitude, and some of his quips can genuinely be funny.
Hey, let's get one thing straight. I don't like being ordered around, okay? You got me, Padre? Padre? Yeah, nice hat.
Oh, and the devs made the triangle button trigger a random taunt, which makes me wish they showed that same kind of care and design in the rest of the game. Enemy designs can be pretty bland.
The taunt is actually
one area where I had to help an old woman lying in her...
Yeah, you might mention this later, but the taunt is actually useful for something. I can't remember what it's for, but can't remember. I think it can give you health back on your next hit or something like that. I can't remember.
To eventually find out the bedpost were legs, and she was just some deadite spider thing. Not too shabby if you ask me. Boss fights are about as polished as the regular combat, read not at all, so expect to just sit there trading blows with some of your attacks actually registering damage and some not for whatever reason. Having to constantly maintain fuel for your chainsaw was actually kind of fun to manage if only turning the damn thing on and off was reliable. And it seems odd they had a limited inventory when the game just doesn't play to that element very well. Items are dropped by enemies on death, so conservation isn't a factor here, which makes me wonder why they just haphazardly implement something like a limited amount of inventory slots if items and enemies respawn anyways. To be totally honest, I was looking forward to overreacting to this game's clear lack of developmental talent like some kind of YouTube hack, and it did piss me off to the point where I just stopped playing it one time, but there's also something going on here that actually works. With all the same elements but a team that knew what the hell they were doing, I could see this becoming a hidden gem, but as it is, it's far too flawed for me to even remotely recommend, despite the fact that I may hate-love it. Very not groovy if you ask me.
Alright, lady, you got yourself a deal. But I swear, any one of your boys gets near me, I'll turn him into furniture. Got it?
Yeah, I agree. Oh, okay. This is the grand finale right here. Well, it's not actually the finale, but this is probably the most controversial, or I shouldn't say most controversial, but this is the one I never shut up about. But Martian Gothic, if you guys don't know, I played this twice. And I have one of the playthroughs on YouTube. I didn't upload the second one. And it's oh my god, it's hard for me to even talk about, but it's a damn shame. Like this game is so insanely ambitious and it has so many cool ideas, but it is hindered by the fact that everything you need to do is so hard to do, and it's so hard to figure out anything in this game. And the smallest task requires so many little steps to get done. It's just a very confusing, very difficult game that is like, it's a masterpiece wrapped up in a bunch of fucking shit-soaked cloth. It's basically So if you guys have never seen Martian Gothic, you control 3 characters, and those characters can't interact or you insta-die. So you have to transfer items through these tubes. So you have to send all, if let's say character C needs an item from character B, then but character A is holding it. You know, you have to send it to character A and then you send it to character B. It's RE0, but 10 times harder. Like this is probably the hardest game to finish on the entire list. Of at least of the games I have played, which is a lot of these. I'm really interested to see what he has to say, because like I think this game sucks, but at the same time it could be like god tier. If this deserves a remake, but I don't know. It has some really funny, like the voice acting isn't bad. It's just there's a lot of really funny notable lines. And the movement is atrocious and the combat is atrocious. Like, oh my god. I need to take a drink for this. Oily Rag. This is the one Oily Rag is from. I like Oily Rag. And a lot of lines, honestly. All right, let's see.
I found myself a king of infinite space. Were it not that I have bad dreams.
In covering these Resident Evil clones, a portion of my goal was to cover a few games that have been sitting in my collection unplayed because I knew I was interested in trying them out, but wanted to wait till I was going to produce a video about them. And in that category, Martian Gothic was king. I mean, a game that has a group investigating a Martian outpost filled with zombies and other supernatural phenomenon. It sounds like a home run to me, and in a lot of ways it is, but I'm sad to say this might be one of, if not the most disappointing games on this list.
Yeah, yes.
Not so much because
oh my god, yes. I'm so glad he's making me not seem crazy. That's exactly what it is. It's disappointing. There's so much to live up to in this game, and it doesn't live up to any of it.
But more so because of how much better it could have been. Martian Gothic is a relic of an older school of retro PC game design, where the main goal is centered around solving puzzles and not so much about mechanically engaging with a video game. And with this adventure game logic cranked up to the max, I doubt very much a majority of people will be able to progress more than 15 or 20 minutes into this game without a guide. This is a massive disappointment because everything about this game has the potential to make me love it. Speaking of which, Martian Gothic starts off with one hell of an interesting setup. A group are on their way to a settlement called Vita 1, a base on Mars that has gone...
Thank you, Blazehead. Like I always say about Martian Gothic, it has the potential to be god tier. Like, man, when you're playing the first few minutes, like, whoa, this is super interesting.
Video silent since about 10 months ago. The last actual communication received from the place included a warning that simply said, "Stay alone, stay alive." Now, as far as openings go, this is one of the more well-done examples of pulling a player in that I could list. Right from the start, we have the plot of the movie Event Horizon with a few of the key points switched around. The idea of Martian mysteries that might include forbidden knowledge and cosmic horror is permeating the entire intro cutscene, And gameplay seems promising from the start as well. You have a total of 3 characters to swap back and forth with, and each one is selectable from a menu. The swapping process is easy to use and takes no time at all to up and switch to a new character in a totally different part of the base. Movement is a huge issue though.
Oh yeah.
Don't get me wrong, you know I love tank controls, but these just were not working for me.
They're horrible.
Controls sluggishly and with a bit of lag, and turning while running is only an option on the most wide of paths. Mostly you'll be stopping to adjust your angle and then running again, which does kind of...
We talked earlier about respawning enemies. These hallways, you can't dodge anything. They'll grab you from a mile away. It triggers this massive jump scare sound effect, and they do a ton of damage. And if you're like, all right, I'll kill it, it just comes back. It's brutal.
Kind of take away from the pace. But in all honesty, this isn't the worst deal breaker ever. What is, though, is what I consider gameplay so obtuse that I struggle to believe anyone sat down and figured this stuff out unassisted. The first room in the game can be easy enough to wrap your head around. There are only 2 examinable objects in the room, and taking/using one of the items
and
in the
it's
helmet
still
will see
hard.
Each character getting in touch with each other over the radio. As you continue, you find you won't be able to proceed with 2 characters until the third one is able to open a door for them. So you run around what is a great-looking environment and eventually find a computer, and again, this is pretty straightforward. There are a few bodies on the ground near here, so you search them and find an item that'll grant you access to the computer, which will open the door. But it's here where things start to really break down. Now the explorable environment has grown substantially, and there are 2 more playable characters, which further multiplies things. And my issue with this is there are a lot of resources scattered around that can be collected but can't be used yet, and locks and interactive objects that can't be utilized till much later. So when it comes time for a little trial and error, you're left with far too many options, which might not be as big of an issue if running from one area to another wasn't handled with the slowest and worst feeling controls I have ever used. On top of that, transitions between camera angles can take a very long time,
they're
and
brutal.
sometimes you can trigger them accidentally. In fact, I'd say most of the time. So the game pushes you to explore and try things out, but makes it incredibly annoying to do so. And further on top of that, things need to be done in a very specific order. For example, going into this room and searching a corpse can trigger an event where that corpse gets up to attack you. The only issue being, so far in the game, you have yet to come across any means to defend yourself and maybe one healing item. And sure, this may seem like an isolated incident, but trust me when I say the entire game is just a series of these events going back to back. In this way, the game effectively makes itself uncompletable if you do things out of order, and believe me, it is not an order that will appeal to normal human intuition.
Yeah.
Once you do get your hands on a gun, combat isn't the best, and at one point my character got stuck holding the gun and couldn't put it down. The controls that used to aim up or down moved me back and forth, and every single button on the controller either fired the gun or did nothing, which was just a joy to experience.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not going to sugarcoat things. I gave up on this one pretty early on.
What?
It is frustrating as all hell, and I got the feeling that the game was designed to be restarted over and over again until the correct order of events was memorized, and I don't see that as an effective method of game design. Dark Souls. Okay, I'm like 50% joking. Please don't burn my house down. What really pisses me off, though, is that I didn't want to stop. The game's story, setting, and overall
it's just
feel was through the
impossible.
roof.
Like, the
I've
game
never
is
been so damn
impossible.
excited to solve a game's mystery, and now I feel like that's all wasted on a title that wanted to gain nerd cred in the adventure game community by being so damn difficult, it's essentially unbeatable without a guide. And again, all the game design failings wouldn't be so bad if the act of exploration or trying new stuff out wasn't directly brought down with the game's horrible controls, slow pace, and the fact that it punishes you for playing it anyway except how the creators envisioned. I mean, I looked up the guide, and you can most certainly complete the game, but only if you go about it in the most oddly specific way imaginable. Deviating from that path may have zombies spawning in a room where you need to grab an item, and this is before you ever get your hands on a healing item. That's just inexcusable in my opinion. Guys, genuinely, I wanted so bad to figure out why these zombies are here and what's going on with the game, but I genuinely don't think I ever will. I'm not going to respect a game that doesn't respect my time, and I really wish I didn't have to say that.
I played it
really
twice.
Upset me because there's an amazing experience, world, and story under here. I can tell.
I beat it twice. Sorry.
An awful mess of game design that seems so amateur. I was genuinely blown away when I found out these guys had made games prior to this. Maybe one day I'll come back to this one with a guide in hand and try to.
I don't even know what that
it,
says.
I
I'll
can
swallow
promise you
that,
will
but
not
great
be anytime
link.
Soon. Man, talk about wasted potential.
By coming in through separate airlocks. Stay alone, stay alive. That's what we were told, and that's what we've done.
Oh my god, double whammy. I also hate Siren. Let's see what I say about Martian Gothic. I have no clue. This game, this is like, if you can get by the, if killing the same enemies 9 million times in one playthrough doesn't bother you, then this is a good game. Like, part of me loves this game, and another part fucking hates it. Like, the first, like, 6 to 7 hours were awesome. The last, like, 10 hours were brutal, because you finally realize, like, okay, now we have to run back and forth and back and forth and back and forth through all these enemies. And that made me fucking hate the game, bro! Bro! What the fuck up, you? Siren. I can talk about this one easily. I have tried. I think we did beat this the second time. Did I not? Siren is a game I have played twice. I'm pretty sure I beat it the second time. But here's a problem I have with Siren. If this is the first one, I think it is the first one. Well, RuneBee says Siren 2 is the worst game ever made, so I'm a little afraid to play Siren 2 because we have a pretty similar opinion on a lot of games, but we'll see. Maybe I will play it. But regardless, Siren, I think it has some of the worst, like, the worst overworld, I guess you could call it, ever. It looks like the fucking TV guide. It's horrible. And, okay, everyone talks about how it's a stealth game. You don't need to stealth in this game almost ever. Like, stealthing is optional for most of the levels, as I proved when I played it. Regardless, I did have to stealth in a lot of missions, yeah. But the problem isn't the difficulty. It's just so unfun to beat a level that's insanely hard, and then the game 2 hours later forces you to go back and redo it for some ridiculous reason because, oh, okay, you did that level, yes, but now the game wants to go back and blow your nose in one of the dirty Kleenexes in the second bathroom in the third house on the left, and then beat the level again. It's like, are you fucking kidding me? Why the fuck do I gotta go back and do this bullshit for a second time? Like, why can't we just do it once and be on with the goddamn thing?
Now this one is a title I wasn't even sure belonged here. I mean, when the creator of the original Silent Hill works on a project, it's easy to assume it's going to be in the same genre, and broadly speaking, that may be true, sort of. But if we're being real here, this
I
shows
hope he
almost none of
hates
the
this.
characteristics that I would expect from either Resident Evil or Silent Hill. My insanely stringent standards aside, I don't think letting Keiichiro Toyama get grandfathered into this list is going to hurt anyone. In fact, it may help. And on that note, Siren is something truly unique.
That's true. By the way, there is really cool ideas in this game, and the graphics are charming in a way. But overall, this just comes off as a very, very annoying to play chore, in my opinion.
It takes place in a rural Japanese area that has just suffered an earthquake, one that ranked high on both the Richter and supernatural scales. It seems like a religious cult has had their hands in this event, and after the shaking stopped, some weird stuff started going down as well, like all the bodies of water turning red and people turning into mindless creatures looking to kill anything not like them.
I can't
You
believe
experience
even
what I
seeing
can
this
only
annoys
loosely
me.
call a story from several perspectives, and I say it that way because this is less of an actual story and more of a series of events that a group of 10 or more people went through. Story events are presented out of chronological order, so your first time through, you aren't going to have the slightest idea of what's going on, and to be fair, there isn't much of these cutscenes to be able to tell you anyways. Sure, watching them in the right order may reveal who's who, but they aren't going to outright make any real explanations, or at least they didn't for me more than halfway in. And with the game's creator being who he is, I don't think it's going to surprise anyone that gameplay is just about as odd as the approach to the story is. Technically, we're playing a horror stealth game here. Actual means to defend yourself are few and far between, and even when you get your hands on some kind of weaponry, well, you're not exactly a force to be reckoned with.
I had to glitch out a lot of the enemies.
So I guess sneaking it is. The act of evading enemies isn't handled in any way you're likely to be used to. No radar to show patrolling bad guys or anything like that. Instead, you use the sight-jacking system, something that lets you see through a person's eyes. And I have no problem saying that this was a really damn refreshing mechanic to get used to. You have to sneak your way around the environment and hit the L2 button, which will let you scan for nearby lines of sight to tap into like some kind of supernatural radio dial. You move the left analog stick in any direction until you get a hit, and then you can assign that perspective to a button like triangle, square, circle, or X. That way
What
you
is
can
that
quickly
clip?
swap between patrolling enemies instead of looking for them all over again. Now, once you start looking through someone else's eyes, you can track your own position on screen with this nifty little indicator. This system can actually be used in a pretty damn wide variety of unique ways. Things like using a flashlight or making noise around one of these insane people can draw them to your position, so you can get to a corner, start sightjacking them, and wait till they turn their back to make your move. Or sightjack a bad guy with a gun, waiting till he needs to reload before running in and bludgeoning him. At first, I thought this was going to be a hard mechanic to keep track of. I mean, just keeping yourself hidden can be a chore, but you'd be surprised how easy it is to swap between all these different pairs of eyes and how instinctive it becomes. And as I'm actually saying this out loud, it sounds pretty insane because we have first-person and third-person perspectives in video games, but now we are using someone else's first-person perspective to see us in the third person, which I think adds up to the fourth person if that's how math works. Either way, this was a really fun and unique mechanic that was intuitive enough, but also so far outside the box that it kind of blew me away when I used it. Very much a thumbs up from me. Combat's handled in the typical survival horror method with R1 readying and the action.
Talk
button
about the
during but
overworld
how slow
and the
unwieldy
replaying
this
the
is,
missions.
You won't be relying on it much.
Or
even
this
when you
isn't
come
a
across the
fair
gun.
review.
The game does a great job of slowly introducing new challenges, making sure you don't just ghost every mission by making a mad dash to the end, but that's where one of my chief complaints actually starts. Each mission has you completing a main or sub goal, but that one area is always going to be relatively small. This added with the segmented nature of the gameplay, which has you taking up a different character each new mission, makes the game feel more like a spreadsheet than a single cohesive experience. And I know that sounds really dumb, but to be fair, there is an
It literally is.
that tracks your in-game progress, so maybe I'm right? If I could
That's
make
the
one change, it would be
overworld,
to have
or
a
like,
single perspective
that's how you
to view
pick
the
your
story
mission.
from with a singular start-to-finish type of layout, because going from one area to the next doesn't really feel like progressing through an interesting setting here, but instead like an old video game where you start and finish different levels with different themes. I guess what I'm saying is I would have liked more of the connective tissue between areas to have felt something more akin to Resident Evil or Silent Hill, but that being said, this is a guy who's known for his creativity, and I doubt purposely emulating previous works is ever going to be his main goal. Although I can take solace in the fact that the dev team were able to implement tank controls effectively in a game that's controlled primarily with an analog stick. Except there is one issue there. It uses a method that has you sneaking when the stick is slightly pressed and running when held all the way in one direction. The only issue being I often overshot that run-walk barrier when an enemy was around, and I was a little more prone to squeezing my controller a little harder, which certainly may be an issue specific to me, but something worth keeping in mind. As you may have noticed by now, the faces are a little off-looking, and as a matter of fact, this is what really stuck out for me when I rented Siren as a teen. They essentially went for that Max Payne look by wrapping actual pictures of the actors' faces around a 3D model, and as you can see, they pretty much used a few interpolated frames as an animation when switching from one expression to another. And if I'm totally leveling with you, it is very off-putting, but to be fair, in a game with this kind of subject matter, given the context of the person who made it, it seems to be right at home, really. As far as the 3D stuff goes, this is a great-looking PS2 game. Environments are absolutely stunning to look at, and the fact that you have your flashlight off most of the time makes them all the more creepy. While I myself haven't ventured too far into the Japanese countryside, I have gone as far as Hakone, and it's cool seeing that similar small village vibe here. And on a note that I don't think anyone cares about, the menus are really sharp looking too. For such a dark and dreary game, there's a lot of colors and modern looking angles to the menu system, and normally I'd say this would clash visually, but to me it seems to fit right in. I don't really know why. Because this is a 480i game and I couldn't get it working with GSM, I had to use the FrameMeister for deinterlacing, which to my surprise didn't show very much visual noise at all. But it did keep dropping sync during the transition from gameplay to cutscene, although I can't be sure if that's not just my capture card, so if you are planning on using a scaler, you might want to go with the OSSC or RetroTink 2X. Well, it had been more than a decade since I last played this game, and truth be told I had mostly forgotten about it, but it had no issues dragging me right back in for this video. Now, it's certainly not perfect. The trial and error nature of the environmental puzzles can feel very harsh when exploration is punished by roaming bad guys who can get back up after a while of being knocked out, and when guns get introduced, the game turns into a fun system of tracking your many deaths until you eventually try the right order of actions at the right time. But all that aside, this is one effectively scary game. Seeing through the enemy's eyes and hearing their blood-curdling moans and breathing just hits all the right triggers for me. Plus, it's a very Silent Hill sort of small-town environment, which always lends itself to creepiness. Flat out, make sure you play this one. It's one of the most unique looks at horror game design I've seen in quite some time, and it has certainly made a fan out of me.
What he didn't mention is that you have to replay almost every single mission in the game, and the second time is far more annoying than the first time. And you're essentially doing almost the exact same thing, except one different thing. Like, in one of the missions, you'll go in a house and wash a cloth, and then use it to wipe some blood up. And that's the whole reason you go back. And then you finish the mission again. And then that is like almost half the game is replaying half the missions. Yeah, and well, just to piggyback off that, yeah, Failmore, my problem is replaying the game. But on top of that, it's hard as fuck to figure out how to do anything in the game. Like even the most simple levels I was stuck on for a while. And it's not because I'm like not used to this genre. I am. And we didn't really have trouble when I actually figured out what to do. It's just brutal. Extermination. Wait, is this the game I think? Oh my god, Overblood. Is this the game I think it is?
A perfect shot of our hero who destroyed the monster.
It is. This is the game people tell me to play all the time, and I said I played it once and I hated it. But yeah, I gave this a college try. I played it for like 3 hours and just like straight up, I just didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. I didn't like anything about it really. And I was like, fuck this. And I I stopped playing.
The third-person horror title Extermination is one of those games from my past that I just can't separate from the console it first appeared on. I remember back in the early days of the PS2's launch, drooling over screenshots of games coming to or having been released on the new console and just knowing I didn't have enough money to see that bright blue power.
But yeah, for those who have been in the chat for the million times people say, hey, can you play, when are you going to play Extermination? Here it is.
Extermination was one of the first horror games I remember seeing in those screenshots, and even though it didn't exactly take full advantage of the hardware it was released on, it still holds an awesome little spot in my heart. This is essentially a third-person shooter that takes a lot of inspiration from Resident Evil in a lot of very obvious ways, the first of which being the story. You play as a member of an elite Marine squad sent to a top-secret military research base that has fallen into some kind of accident. After touching down, it's not too long.
I'm never playing this game again.
Looking bugs, which, if I'm being honest, is always a red flag in my book. The goal here is to infiltrate the base, regroup with your team, and destroy the facility to keep from any further outbreak taking place. Along the way, you'll meet up with a person from the main character's past and researchers from the base. Interacting with them will see some of the most hilarious video game voice acting you're likely to come across, possibly another element stolen from RE.
I've been worried about you. I haven't been able to contact you ever since that day.
Dennis, is it really just a coincidence that you're here?
In all honesty, though, I think Extermination doesn't resemble Capcom's seminal spooky environment exploration simulator as much as a lot of people tend to think. I mean, sure, we do have a specially trained team dropping into the scene via a failed helicopter ride, and yeah, we are dealing with science-type guys covering up a deadly bacteria in a laboratory facility no one's supposed to know about, but I'd argue those are pretty broad themes that have mostly existed in popular media since long before Resident Evil. That being said, there are some similarities there if you're looking hard enough, which is something you really can't say about the gameplay for the most part. Extermination controls exactly like a third-person shooter made before the great RE4 revolution, and combat is handled in much the same way. And me saying it that way may give you the impression that it's pretty simplistic, but it's actually kind of the opposite. In my opinion, Extermination doesn't get near enough credit for the wide variety of options baked into its overall gameplay. First off, exploration is aided by a lot of different movement options, from climbing to a vent, shimmying across a small ledge, or hanging from the ceiling, and combat takes a similar approach to variety. You can aim with R1, which will bring up a laser sight, but R2 will get you a pretty cool first-person mode that can change based on the scope you have equipped, and on that note, the game's one and only weapon can be tweaked to a crazy degree. Underbarrel mounts, scopes, forward grips, and other gadgets make this one customizable firearm, and you'll often need to switch up your loadout based on stuff like the environment you're in or the enemies you're fighting. Overall, I'd say both combat and traversing the game's world can be amazingly fun. Hitting R1 will activate a soft lock-on if you're within a certain distance from an enemy, and this can help out a lot. You move at a satisfying speed while running, so you could definitely get away from a threat if you need to. Plus, there's a secret dodge roll that I don't think the game ever actually tells you about that can be activated by hitting X just before an enemy attack lands. So on the plus side, you do have a lot of tools at your disposal, but I will say things can still devolve into taking hits the entire time you're attacking and just hoping your life holds out till the monster in front of you is dead. And this can be especially annoying when the game throws mutants at you that have firearms. Movement has a similar issue.
This
Overall,
actually makes
lots
me
to do, and the game does a great job at varying the challenge, so you're never just responding to the
reassures me I
environment
never want to play
boredom.
this again.
That being said, I never felt like I had full control over my guy. It's kind of hard to explain, but control seems just a bit sloppy with a single flick of the analog stick, resulting in an animation that lasts a pretty decent time longer than the actual act of moving the stick. So if you're like me, you'll probably find you overshoot a lot of stuff. Now, this is definitely something that can be accounted for once you get used to it, but I think you'll find it'll still get in your way from time to time. Now, the point of keeping all the complaints right up front is because I absolutely love this game, and I really do want to give it a glowing recommendation, but I also want you guys to know what to expect. Extermination has often clunky controls, combat that can be less than stellar, and voice acting that most definitely deserves to be mocked for how dumb it sounds.
Damn.
But all that being said, I really do love it. The exploration is laid out exactly like an RE title, with more of the base becoming accessible, with key items being found and story flags being met, but it's all taking place in a more traditional 3D action.
He does love it, but he also mentioned he played it when he was younger.
Ledge far away from an enemy and take pot shots while
so
they can't reach you, or you can run away from a charging asshole and turn just in time to deliver a shotgun blast that'll stop him right in his tracks, hoping it's going to leave him open for another shot to his weak spot. Essentially, it's a lot of stuff that might have interested you.
I'm always a little
about an RE
softer
title,
on
but
games
with
that I
less of the
played when I
purposefully
was
laid out
younger.
limitations. The combat, while frustrating as hell sometimes, can really be exciting and requires
or not
just the right amount of
always,
input
but
from you that you end up feeling like a supreme hard-ass when you pull off a cool-looking kill or a smart strategy. The environment, despite being a single research base, has a lot of variety, and after a very short amount of time, I was able to commit a large portion of it to memory. So when it came time to backtrack thanks to some newly acquired item, I could head right back to the area it needs to be used in without ever checking the map. Something that seems to be one of those overlooked aspects of level design with games from this genre.
That was a problem in Carrier,
clones for this series has really opened
where
my
it's like
eyes
you had to
the subtle
keep
art of
checking the
making
map
game
because you
settings
didn't know
something
where the
that
fuck
players
you
will
were,
remember while making sure it's complex enough that it won't feel too simplistic. Honestly, stuff like this just tends to be comfort food for me. I mean, sure, there are very real issues within these games, but that doesn't stop them from being fun as all hell. If I were you, I'd grab myself Extermination right now. It typically stays within the $10 to $20 range, and it is most definitely worth that kind of scratch. Certain parts of the game may turn to so bad it's good territory, but far more of it is so good it's good. So I can say without a doubt that I think a majority of you guys would get a kick out of this one. It certainly has its pitfalls, but in my mind, when a game has enough high marks, it can definitely make up for the low ones. And I'm not really sure what you guys are waiting for. Get your asses to the Arctic and save humanity. For truth, for justice, for Andrew.
For Andrew.
Oh, Overblood!
Oh, for gosh sake, what is it?
Alright, now we have a game that I'm biased towards, because you basically play as Barry Burton. This is the one with people! Yeah, I know. That's my problem with Extermination. And it's a problem with a lot. I know what a lot of you probably think when I say this, but like, oh, Extermination's really boring. I don't want to play it. And then you see me play something like Carrier. But I find, like, if a game has... I don't mind games with boring gameplay or gameplay that you don't need to do stuff. And I know some people can only be stimulated by shooting something, but shooting stuff in a game does not just do it for me right then and there. Just because I'm shooting an automatic weapon at something in front of me doesn't mean that it's like more fun than just running around doing nothing. And Extermination fell under that for me. There's just like, I don't know. Anyway, Overblood. I played this last year, I think, and I played it right again. As soon as I finished it, I played it again. I just think this is a really charming game. It is not good. The environments are really bland. The soundtrack is very atmospheric and sort of boring, but I like a couple of the songs. And the movement's clunky. There's jumping. But it has really, really funny cutscenes. I love the Peepo character. He's amazing. The combat's horrific. And the story is just like, but overall, I don't know. I found this game charming. That's the way to put it. And it made me feel like a kid again. It made me feel like I was playing a game as a kid. And I really like Overblood. I don't recommend it, but I like it personally.
What have I done to deserve this? If only I could remember who I am, maybe it would help me understand.
Every once in a while, a game comes around that may not have the highest production values or the most enthralling gameplay, but for whatever reason becomes a cult hit, and I really don't think you can talk about Overblood without at least broaching the fact that it has developed its own cult following. Personally, I had previously only played this maybe once or twice as a 13-year-old when a buddy brought over some of his PS1 games.
I like this. The song playing right now is one I like the most.
But running relatively well was a welcome change from the typical PS1 status quo. That being said, I had an experience I would imagine mirrored most of your guys' first few minutes with the game. I never made it out of the first room on my own, because almost no games require you to crouch down to examine something not even below waist height, and if they do, they'll at least prompt you to do so before locking you in a room that slowly kills you.
Yeah, so if you didn't hear what he said, because I sort of talked over it, in the first room you're freezing to death, and if you don't do the main objective fast enough, you die. And what you need to do is press the crouch button to inspect an object, which is not in any other RE clone. I like very few of them, not one that I can think of. But yeah, you need to crouch and then inspect the item.
But before we start getting into all that, what's Overblood all about? Well, if you ask me, one of Overblood's best handled features is its story. You start off knowing absolutely nothing. You wake up from some kind of cryosleep lacking any and all knowledge of who you are and where you are. After finding a snazzy new vest, you meet a robot that you name Peepo, and the path to figuring out what led to this
the best character
is actually a really interesting one.
And thank you,
Tyrant.
The amount
of info
and
fed to you is done at a pace that'll keep you both interested in progressing and eager to see what you can uncover next, which is good because if you know what you're doing, this can be a very, very short game. After a little
That's
bit of
why I played it right after
who seems
I beat
to be
it.
in a similar state as you, and together you find out you're both trapped in a secret cloning facility and that there are failed clones hanging around looking to beat people to death with their bare hands because, well, wouldn't you? And of course, there's a lot more to discover, but I'm not going to spoil all that here. Now, this may not be the best sci-fi narrative anyone's ever put together, and at this point, even pointing out how cliche the amnesia angle is becoming cliche in and of itself, but there's something I respect about a story that can give out very small servings of information with just the right combination of pace and interest levels that I keep playing a game that is objectively poorly made. Oh, my bad, did I forget to mention that? Yeah, this is a pretty dogshit game, at least in the traditional sense. Movements handled with tank controls, which can be jarring in a fully 3D environment, but more than that, the issue is that they really aren't very good tank controls. Running anywhere near anything will put you into a pushing animation, which can be annoying to get in and out of, but your character will also change his position when turning or running forward, which also makes you think you're about to start pushing something. So the game spends most of its time either tripping you up or making you think it's tripping you up. Like I mentioned before, you have to learn that examining things needs to happen on two separate planes, which can be hell to get used to and means you're going to leave a lot of items behind on a first playthrough. The general layout layout feels almost exactly like a late 90s adventure game, with items being the key to furthering game progression and things needing to be done in a very specific order, something I criticized Martian Gothic for, and in the name of consistency, I have to be equally as hard on here. The only plus side being, Overblood doesn't feel quite so unfair. I mean, sure, I might be able to die just from walking off of a ledge, but at least that's on me.
Pretty easy, honestly.
I think most of the difference between these two titles for me comes from Overblood being a very linear game. A word that the industry has turned into a pejorative because, I don't know, every 4 years or so we all take something that used to be commonplace in video games that we all enjoyed and then shame it out of existence for reasons I don't think anyone's ever going to understand. If I was going to be pissed enough to rant and rave about a single gameplay failing, it would definitely be that I kept bypassing the open box in the first area of the game, so I never got the item that would allow me to save, meaning that I went through the first 30 or 40 minutes of gameplay at least 4 times till I figured out that open box actually had something in it, which begs the question, why would the devs put something so valuable in the one and only non-closed box in this game? An issue that is made orders of magnitude worse when jumping works like this. So gameplay does kind of work on a technical level, but it just doesn't feel great moving around or engaging in combat. That being said, the general act of progressing via puzzle solving is perfectly fine and is even really engaging sometimes. It's easy to assume that the majority of this game's cult following might be here for the less than stellar voice acting or hammy nature of early PS1 era 3D graphics, but I imagine a lot of these people just really enjoy adventure games of this ilk. Speaking of which, the game looks okay enough for the time it was released. Objects are made up of pretty simple shapes, making the environment a little more bland and lifeless than it had to be, but on the plus side, you really don't notice a whole lot of affine texture warping, which is pretty damn cool to see in a fully 3D PS1 title. The camera can be crappy sometimes, and hitting the L1 button will change between a far-off, more RE style of camera that follows you, or a more traditional over-the-shoulder type view, and even a first-person mode, but sadly it feels like none of these camera modes fit the game world or gameplay very well. I found that switching to an alternate camera mode might have me missing objects or routes that the more fixed camera would have drawn my attention to, which made my ability to switch camera modes a little more of a gimmick and a little bit less of an actual feature. Most of the music in Overblood sounds like cheap horror movie tracks from the 70s, with weird synthy wind chimes and other equally odd sound effects thrown in haphazardly, and I'm about to blow your mind when I say it doesn't exactly work against the game. Maybe it's because of Overblood's campy nature from the start or my own weird taste talking, but these odd sounds sort of fit the cold, isolating environment we see here.
I'm glad he agrees with me on everything.
At least mention the CG cutscenes, which don't exactly look great, but are fun to watch anyways because early PS1 CG is just so damn cool. Overall, I actually had a lot of fun with this one. It feels like the kind of game that you can beat a few times, remember the general order of everything, and then jump back in every once in a while when you want a familiar and cozy experience.
That's what I did!
Sure, it does play like a low-budget movie from the late 80s, but that gives it a bit of charm, and like I said before, the story is actually kind of cool in a lot of ways. It's a pretty simple affair that won't exactly surprise you with any kind of world-shattering innovation, but it's fun, hokey, endearing, and only a little bit annoying. I can certainly see why so many of you recommended this game to me, but to be honest, I have no idea how it's supposed to be an RE clone. With all the messages, comments, and tweets I've been getting, I assumed I was remembering the game incorrectly, but turns out I wasn't. When it comes down to it, Overblood is just a straight-up adventure game. And yeah, survival horror does take a lot from the adventure game genre, but that doesn't retroactively make every adventure game now survival horror. Plus, RE and Overblood were released within a few months of each other, so I think, at least with this one, it's safe to declare it as its own thing and not so much an RE clone. But RE clone or not, I'm glad you guys pushed me into giving it a second chance, and if your first experience was like mine, hopefully this video serves as a similar push for you. Trust me when I say that giving Overblood a second chance is exactly what people would have wanted.
Don't leave me, people!
People! The rest of the games on this list, I don't think I'm gonna play, and oh wait, Blue Stinger is here. I didn't even see that. Don't leave me, people.
When searching through the more underground parts of the internet for leads on possible RE clones, I would often come across
I haven't played this, but I'm not playing this.
Supposed to mirror Resident Evil. And one day during one such deep dive, I found out there was actually an English fan translation available for this elusive game. And after finally playing Mystic Knights for myself, I think there's a single takeaway here. No one who ever posted any of that nonsense has ever played Resident Evil before. Alright, let's talk basics before we get into that. First up, Mystic Knights can be really tough to do research on, especially since its name sounds more like a strip club next to some I-95 off-ramp than a video game. From what I was able to discern through vigorous thumb-chewing, it was a game made in Korea that was never released in the US. Honestly, that's about every single piece of info I was able to dig up, so if you find yourself in possession of more information than that, feel free to enlighten me in the comment section. Starting the game up will greet you with a pretty cheap-feeling slideshow of stills to set up the general premise, which sees you taking control of Bruce, a good-looking guy who's on his way to a state-run research facility to see some ex-friends or co-workers. It's not really clear on that point. But once Bruce gets inside, there's a violent explosion, and he awakes to this. And let's be very clear and upfront here. That's a penis. And I know now that I've addressed it as to this. And let's be very clear and upfront here. That's a penis. And I know now that I've addressed it, every single comment's going to be about that, so let's go ahead and get it all out of our system right now. Alright, sound good? Moving on, we have a pretty standard story. You know the deal. Guy gets in over his head and has to escape a lab crawling with bio-experiments, or if the one resource I was able to find is correct, these are vampires, I guess. Long story short, story isn't exactly the game's strong suit. I mean, there are characters and stuff does happen to them through the course of the game, but typically it's in service of the let's get the hell out of here plot device, and now that I think about it, I wouldn't say solid gameplay is a strong suit either. It's got some stiff as hell controls, and the camera will follow you realigning at your back when turning corners, except when it doesn't, so plan on hitting L2 to recenter your camera every time you take a 45-degree turn, which will be 95% of the gameplay. And that's because the game takes place in a series of seemingly never-ending copy-pasted hallways and corridors. So
I would hate this game.
Location anytime soon. On the plus side, though, the developers seem to have been aware of this and gave you a map with markers denoting where you gotta go next. The only issue being it'll take up nearly half of your screen. So I guess you really have to make a decision in this one. Do you either want to see where you're going or know where you're going? Because you're not going to be able to do both. The general layout is sort of similar to RE, with items being collectibles and puzzles coming in the form of deciphering passwords and formulas through discarded files and documents, so that's nice. But the combat, well, combat is something different. You hit R1 to ready a weapon, and R2 will cycle between selected weapons, but no matter what you're shooting or swinging, it's not going to feel very satisfying. There seems to be a real lack of feedback on the player side, so the difference between a miss and a hit is mostly a very light puff of blood. Blood that I would like to mention can be easily obscured by a camera that's set just a little too low behind Bruce's back to actually reveal any threats in front of him. There's a few firearms.
That's one thing I think a lot of these games suffer from is the hit. Like when you hit something, it just doesn't feel very satisfying. And that's one thing Resident Evil did really well. Resident Evil 2 especially, when you're shooting something like a zombie, for example, it's very, very, very satisfying.
A sword to contend with, and like I said, it's not very satisfying to use them. Running from enemies is very much an option though, and you'll likely start taking that route as soon as you find out how unreliable the combat is, but it's not uncommon for enemies to box you in by two of them showing up in a single hallway. At this point you can just start swinging and hope you get a hard knockdown, but I found backtracking and waiting till their AI lets them take another path is the best way to avoid damage. When it works. Graphically speaking, the game looks roundabout like what I assume it is, a budget title. The intro sequence, looking sort of amateur, clued me in right from the start, but other than that, you'll see corners being cut all over the place. The environment is mostly made up of two constantly repeating textures, animations are as basic gets, sound effects are missing from places that feel unnatural without them, and enemy design can vary from sort of interesting penis head humanoids to, seahorses on wheels. A design so bold and challenging that not even Masahiro Ito has the balls to put it in a Silent Hill game. Check and mate. One thing I will say though is that the 2D character art that shows up during dialogue is actually really good looking, and the fact that it's there is kind of cool too. I mean, sure, they could have just animated the characters speaking to each other in 3D like every other game does, but using these face sets gives me a sort of RPG feel, which is always really awesome. So Mystic Knights most certainly ranks towards the lower end of the spectrum of game development budgets, and that definitely explains what a mess it is as a whole, but here's where I blow your mind by saying I kind of enjoyed my time with it. I was frustrated a lot and ran into so many issues I really can't count them all, but there was still something here that I actually enjoyed. Maybe it's the fact that it's a game that I might not have otherwise been able to play because of the language difference, or just that it serves as an interesting getaway from the binary of either US or Japanese game development, but something about the game kept me playing it long after I should have put the controller down. Now I can't necessarily guarantee you'll have a similar reaction, but realistically, what do you have to lose? The English translation is available for free, and if you know where to look, a patched ISO of the game is not very hard to find, so maybe take a chance with this one. I went into this thing interested, and even when itemizing my myriad of complaints, still felt a certain amount of charm with it. This may not be the kind of title that turns you on to a whole new world of non-Western game design, but it'll kill an hour or two of your time, and isn't that what all this gaming stuff is about anyways?
What do you think?
Looks like first-stage parasitic infestation.
Chaos Break is another one of those titles that I've heard about for years and never really got the chance.
Maybe someone has told me about this in the past, but I've never myself tried this one. Just give me one sec. I'm going to play one that I skipped over because I just have to use the bathroom. Here, this is a perfect one.
The series in its absolute best form, and well, I guess that means it's a little bit of a drop from here. Silent Hill Origins had the bad luck of being released during Konami's famous "we'll let anyone with a condom and a motel key bed down our IPs" period. But even though nearly every SH title released post-4 can be described as being sort of terrible, Origins is most definitely the entry that most lives up to the original series, at least as far as gameplay is concerned. The layout will be familiar to fans of either RE or SH, and I'm happy to say that is the compliment it sounds like. As a matter of fact, if you're playing the PSP entry, you have in your hands right now the only game that even comes close to survival horror on the platform, minus obscure Aftermath. For its meager beginnings, this game manages to impress me every time I boot it up, and even though I don't like that the devs made transitioning to the other world something the player can opt into, I'd say it's the closest thing in the latter series to an actual SH game. Of course, there are plenty of Silent Hill titles to dive into, but these were the ones that most resemble the series' roots of cloning RE, and if you ask me, probably the highest quality games in the series anyways. So even though it doesn't really need to be said, Resident Evil fans looking to keep those survival horror flames burning have a wealth of content to find here in this foggy little town.
I lost my glasses. They was chasing me. I can't see nothing without my glasses.
You know, the best part about working on a video covering RE clones is getting to play quite a few games I've never really tried out before. And even though Curse: The Eye of Isis has been on my periphery for a while now, until today I've never actually played it for myself, which I will go ahead and say right now is a crying shame. Curse starts out with our main character, Darian Dane, whose name sounds like a rough draft 70s porn star handle, showing up to the Museum of Natural History to meet a colleague. He gets stopped at the front door by the police, who tells him he can't enter because of an ongoing investigation, but then they immediately just walk away, allowing Darian to just stroll right through the front door anyways.
Now, sir, please go home. My officers will deal with the situation.
Once actually inside the building, we find some strange shit has most definitely been going down. The intro shows us that earlier in the night, a thief tried to steal the centerpiece to a brand new exhibit concerning Isis and Osiris. Doing so
sorry, I
apparently
didn't
some kind
move
of
the mouse.
malevolent energy.
Oh my
Curse,
god.
perhaps,
Oh
and it's
my
wreaking havoc all
goodness
over the
gracious,
place.
I'm
Darian
sorry.
gets his first whiff of what Isis is cooking when he comes across a corpse.
What do you think?
Looks like first-stage Parasite
What do you think?
Unification.
Chaos Break is another one of those titles that I've heard about for years and never really got the chance to try. It being a PAL only release didn't help that,
I
but more than
know,
anything,
Doctor.
I just didn't understand how all those recommendations came in the form of, well, if you like Resident Evil, you'll probably get a kick out of Chaos Break. And I'll be right up front with you guys, there is next to nothing in this game that would even approach the territory of an RE clone in my opinion. I mean, sure, we've got a cute girl in a beret in an underground research lab being taken over by the very organism it was looking to study, but I don't think that's a line in the sand we should be drawing. That being said, it not exactly falling into my definition of what makes something an RE clone doesn't mean it's a terrible game in and of itself. In fact, I might argue it's pretty okay. The game starts off letting you know all the background info that amounts to a laboratory has recently had some kind of an outbreak and your team has been sent in to retrieve whatever can be retrieved as far as their research is concerned. You can choose between 2 separate campaigns from the start, and while it would be nice if this would have equated to separate experiences, I'm not too mad that it just means playing the game backwards depending on who you pick. So once we touch down in the lab, we're faced with the very subtle hint that the situation may not be as good as it could be.
Run!
And now that we know what we're up against, the rest of the game is spent moving vertically through this beehive of an underground hallway system, finding items and files that'll help us solve the puzzles needed to progress further. The one aspect of the game I can agree sort of fits in with the whole RE clone thing. The environment that is the lab is actually pretty cool looking, despite how repetitive it can be running through what seems like hundreds of samey looking hallways leading to rooms with a lot of repeating assets. Sometimes you'll run across areas that were hit worse during the outbreak, and these spots help freshen things up when I started to get bored both visually and gameplay wise. Most of the puzzles in the game have to do with piecing together a password to unlock doors by paying attention to the environment and collecting files that need to be read, and I'd say this works pretty well. The puzzles do definitely require a little thought to finish, but don't step over into the realm of too hard to figure out without a guide. Now, running around a research lab filled with mutated humans and alien-looking facehuggers can be fun, but it's being able to shoot at and or beat the hell out of these things that I'm interested in, and in that sense, combat in Chaos Break is sort of, kind of okay. You have a melee combo, a gun, and a bomb of sorts, and that seems like a pretty wide variety of options to me, but for some reason it never felt too engaging. I don't know, something about it just seemed pretty run-of-the-mill to me.
Maybe, Jingle. I'll look them up after this video. You guys let me know some horror games I can
can often lead to a face full of counterattack. That is until I went into the options menu and discovered the dodge roll. This one little addition to the combat is a godsend and really got me back into it. You can cancel the last few frames of an attack with this roll, and this not only helped me stay away from cheap hits, but also had me engaging more in the mechanics of combat, since I had to be pretty okay at timing to pull off this high-skill, MLG-level gameplay. As far as presentation goes, I would say Chaos Break ranks pretty hard in the middle of the spectrum. It doesn't look amazing by any means, but it's also not one of those games used to illustrate how bad early PS1 3D was. By the way, I'm putting the largest quotations humanly imaginable around the whole early PS1 3D was bad thing. I kinda like it. If anything, it's pretty impressive that Taito were able to have fully 3D characters running around a fully 3D environment and have it run this well on an original PlayStation. Kudos. And while we're on the subject, I was actually interested to see that this game isn't its own original creation. It actually stemmed from an arcade title released by Taito at the time, which I thought was really cool. I only found out about this game's arcade origins after playing it, and now looking back, it does seem to have a very arcadey look to it. It's a little hard to explain, but there's just something about those blocky models and the action emphasis that just
I think
screams
we're gonna
late
play that this
90s
year,
arcade.
Pablo.
That being said, I do wish they could have achieved a look closer to the actual arcade prequel, or at least I think it's a prequel. Either way, this release of the game looks really damn cool, and I'm not exactly sure why this level of presentation was out of the question for the PS1
I like the
release.
music that's playing for this
I'm fairly
video.
positive that console could have at least handled something nearing this level of quality. So coming up on the end of this little piece, I find myself wondering if I would suggest this game for you guys to check out, and I really don't know the answer to that. I mean, it's not bad at all and can be fun, but it's also nothing special in my mind. It just sort of does its job in a relatively satisfactory manner. It being a PAL-only release may limit some of you, but I'd say if you find yourself in a situation where you're able to play this game, I'll go ahead and give it a whirl. Its combat may be the most fun aspect to speak of, but it also engages in some very light ARI-adjacent exploration, and you really don't get too many chances to hear voice acting on this level anymore. However, if you find yourself with no real way to play backups or games outside of your own region and emulation isn't your thing, well, I'd say don't worry too much about missing out with Chaos Break. It may be pretty fun sometimes, but I wouldn't call it a must-play or anything. More than anything, I would say this game has a lot more value in how well it takes me back to those early days of PlayStation game development where anything went and devs weren't quite so scared of an idea failing. Back when someone could make a full story-based experience from an action arcade title and have it actually work.
What's wrong with you?
Everything.
You're hurting me!
The City of Lost Children was an oddly creepy movie.
I've never
with a
played
killer
this.
atmosphere, and in those terms, I guess the game it eventually spawned
But I have no
actually made a
plans
lot
to.
of sense. What we're looking at here is another adventure game for the list, which you might assume automatically bumps it out of the running as an RE clone, but we do have tank controls, a fixed perspective, and a huge emphasis on puzzle solving, so I'd say that pushes it just enough over the line for me. Much like its fellow PS1 release in the genre, this one is your typical adventure game layout, only the interaction isn't handled via mouse cursor, but by moving your character on screen instead. And just like Martian Gothic, the act of actually controlling it can be incredibly frustrating. Like I said before, you move Miette, your main character, around with tank controls, but her movement speed leaves a lot to be desired. An issue that would be a little easier to deal with if collecting items and solving puzzles didn't include navigating an impressively big environment. And I'm fairly positive that a majority of you guys know how survival horror games are played by this point, especially ones where finding hidden items is the stated goal. Essentially, you gotta hug the boundaries of the environment, mashing the action button until you pick something up.
The colors
You're definitely
in this
gonna want to
game
do that in
make me
CLC because
sick.
the majority of items aren't visually represented on screen. Most of the time, the only way you're gonna be able to tell there's something there is when you get right on top of it, and I mean pixel perfect right on top of it, and a prompt comes up. And since you can't run while doing that, that means pixel hunting with an on-screen avatar who can't seem to outrun the elderly. As for the rest of the gameplay, this is pretty much every adventure game you've ever played before rolled into one. You're tasked with small objectives that can often turn much larger when you find out the person who's holding the item you're looking for requires several other items in return.
I could never
pretty
play
standard
this.
stuff, and excluding the controls, I'd say it all works pretty well. The fact that items can be hidden in incredibly obscure spots with absolutely no indication that they are there is a massive pain in the ass, and because of that, I'd say go ahead and get a guide loaded up for this one before you play it. As far as presentation goes, I would say this game actually looks pretty great. The 3D models don't get anywhere near looking realistic, but that was clearly intentional. The devs did a great job of using this cartoony stylized look that works really well with the PS1's limited resources. The pre-rendered backgrounds are absolutely gorgeous and are totally reminiscent of the one seen in the movie, which makes me wish the controls weren't so terrible because I really would have liked to have seen more of this game's locations. I kind of feel like this one was a cop-out for me. Similar to my Martian Gothic coverage, I really wanted to enjoy this a lot more than I actually did. That being said, it's much more satisfying to play the Martian Gothic itself, so take that for what it's worth.
Depressing.
Fans of more atmospheric
in a
video
way
games
that
are
I
likely
don't
to
want
get
to
a kick out of
try
this
it.
one, as a lot of the time the draw isn't so much the gameplay itself, but more the world that the gameplay takes place in, and in those terms,
I just really don't like
does a lot
this
correctly.
kind of setting.
But I will admit right here that I didn't play very much of this one, and the fact that controlling it was so hard accounted for 99% of that. I really do like playing adventure games like this, but the sheer frustration of controlling a character in small tight quarters where she'll bounce off of every obstacle, leaving you waiting for her to finish her slow animation until you can take control again, that's a long sentence, is about as annoying as it sounds.
Oof.
On that same note, hitting the action button causes a similar issue where she shrugs her shoulders and spouts some dialogue, once again leaving you doing nothing until this animation is finished. And in a game where you're going to need to hit the action button a lot to find hidden items, well, that kind of sucks. If there were some kind of theoretical version of this game where these obvious time-wasting issues were taken out, I'd say this would be a great title to get lost in, but sadly it just didn't give me enough of a reason to keep playing past the frustration.
Yeah, this just seems so bad.
You out of harm's way.
My husband?
He'll catch up with you very soon.
What the hell is
I'll
this?
rescue your father.
So here's a question. Have any of you ever wanted to play what might be the perfect blend of every early 2000s spy and military action flick, but also needed it to fit pretty snugly in a list of games that use tank controls? Well, all 2 of you that actually said yes to that, boy do I have a game for you. Covert Ops Nuclear Dawn was released at the very start of the year 2000 by a team called Sugar Rockets, which is the greatest name I've ever heard in my life, and while I can't find a lot of info about its development, it's clear the goal was to mirror action flicks like Mission Impossible, Broken Arrow, or the Bond movies. And to be honest, they did a bang-up job at it. The story is set on an armored train built by
Has anyone played this in chat?
terrorists led by an ex-KGB agent take it over. The Knights of the Apocalypse, which is a great death metal band name and an even better MC name, then proceed to kidnap the French ambassador who was on the train, and the goal is to ransom him off for $20
Played a
billion.
lot.
A price I would assume is a little too steep for an ambassador. The only hitch in that plan being a single NATO lieutenant who survived the initial attack. Like you might have assumed, this guy serves as our main character, and the rest of the game's story plays out exactly like the military espionage thrillers it's based on. Since you're the only asset still in play, you end up taking your orders directly from the higher-ups in the US government, and that makes for this really effective international military action deal.
We need some time to discuss this with the authorities.
You must realize how impatient we are at present.
Aboard the rescue mission. All helicopters will return to base immediately.
While most of the train's occupants were killed in the initial takeover, you'll find a few survivors, including the ambassador's family, and the introduction to other characters helps this feel a little more grounded and appropriately realistic. If we're going by story alone, this game already gets a huge thumbs up from me, as this kind of media where action-packed shootouts share the same screen with international governmental intrigue.
Yeah, I've seen that question quite a bit of like a lot of these, how are they RE clones? It's the exact kind of games where people like in Twitch chat will be like, oh, you want to play an RE clone? Play this. Like a lot of people say, play Trag. The people told me to play Trag. In no way is that an RE clone. But it's all these games that people think of being an RE clone, like tank controls, fixed camera, yada, 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 that kind of thing.
Tends to be my favorite. I mean, don't get me wrong. I like seeing the bad guy get taken down in the end, but it's even more enjoyable if the good guys end up striking a deal with Hungary in order to get the deed done. Of course, this is an RE clone video and not a Jared's Dumb Taste in Cinema production, so let's talk about what elements, if any, are shared between these two. Well, first off, I think the most obvious similarity is going to come in the form of the controls. Covert Ops uses tank controls to move Jack Morton around on screen, and they actually work really well here, but not so much for their individual merits, but instead because the devs gave the player a lot of supplemental options to choose from.
Yeah,
like,
thank
sure,
you,
you
Malicious.
could just use tank controls, but you could also crouch behind cover, then roll out of that cover only to shoot a terrorist in the dick. 10 out of 10 game of the year. Truth be told though, this game wouldn't be on this list if it were solely up to me. Having tank controls is all well and good, but to be honest, that's one of the few similarities between this and RE. One of the others could have been item scarcity, as healing implements and ammo can be incredibly hard to come by for a while, but I found that enemies do on occasion drop both of these. So it seems like the game is purposely keeping you low on supplies, and to be honest, that's great. I spent a lot of time walking around with a half-full magazine, and that made the tension all the more effective. Specifics aside though, this game is only on the list because so many of you recommended it, but more to the point, I was looking for a reason to play it anyways. So if we drop the pretenses of comparing it to an RE game, I'd say Nuclear Dawn was a massive surprise for me. Just watching the intro, I knew I would love the overall setup, but I had no idea how much of a kick I would get out of its gameplay. Sneaking around this train, peeking around corners, and popping rounds into asshole terrorists is incredibly fun, and once I started to commit the controls to memory, I was rolling in and out of cover with ease. Aside from the combat, exploration is the name of the game with the expected RE clone trimmings. You'll be checking out this train car by car until you come across a key, access card, or note that reveals the solution to a puzzle, and this was a really fun process too. It does seem like the enemies respawn, so wandering around without a purpose can be punished sometimes, but after dying and restarting from a previous save, I felt like
this honestly looks pretty interesting.
My objective and coming across far less enemies on the way. There are mini games to help shake things up as well, but overall I think the story did a great job of keeping things tense and chaotic, or at least more than the gameplay does. So the gameplay and story are definitely receiving high marks from me. Is the presentation up to the same level of badassery? And well, you've been looking at the game this whole time, so I imagine you already know it looks pretty good by now. But there's something hiding just under the surface that makes it far more interesting to talk about. See, at first, I figured the game's 3D surroundings looked pretty cool for a PS1 game, but I started noticing little anomalies, and for the life of me, I couldn't quite figure out what I was looking at until I realized these aren't 3D backgrounds at all, or at least not 3D in the traditional sense. I assume a lot of you guys know that most games in the PS1 era would pick one of two options. Either they would fully render a 3D environment or pre-render 2D images and then apply boundaries to them so that they looked and felt like an approximation of a fully interactive 3D location. Nuclear Dawn, on the other hand, seems to be taking a little bit of inspiration from both sides of the spectrum. From what I can tell, this game has fully mapped 3D geometry, but the devs seem to have wrapped that 3D wireframe with a giant seamless 2D texture. So instead of seeing the affine texture warping that can take place in a fully 3D world on the PS1, you're instead seeing scale and rotation artifacts caused by manipulating a 2D image in real time. Now, I can't really confirm this as, like I said, the internet isn't exactly bursting at the seams with information on this title, but I'm fairly certain that's what's going on here. It looks like there are a few instances of actual 3D objects other than character models on screen, but 99% of what you're going to see is a flat image stretched, rotated, and manipulated to lay across 3D geometry. And I thought that was just cool as all hell.
Damn.
I mean, don't get me wrong, I like good 3D graphics in a PS1 game, but I love it when developers
game
go out of their way to try some kind of
is
sideways
surprising.
workaround
I
to
think
get
it looks
something that
great.
cool. Sadly, all of this math does seem to negatively affect the frame rate in certain more complex areas, but I wouldn't say this negatively impacts the gameplay most of the time.
Not that I'm going to play it, but
Other than that really damn cool realization, this game looks amazing. The environment around your character may look like a fairly realistic setting, but a lot of the 3D graphics sort of cross over into the more cartoony or arcadey realm of flashiness. Sort of like if Metal Gear Solid and Dynamite Deca had some kind of illegitimate child. And now that I'm thinking about it, that description probably could have saved me a lot of time with this analysis if I would have just put it in the beginning. Well, anyways, the main takeaway here is Covert Ops Nuclear Dawn is a banger of an action game. It may not comfortably fit into my personal definition of a Resident Evil clone, but it's so damn fun and unique that I have no issues throwing it in a video like this anyways. So regardless of the method, I'd fully recommend everyone watching grab some form of this game because it really is an experience to remember.
Isn't there a medical area on this train?
Yes, there is. It's in car 6.
Car number 5.
Buddy. Oh, I've actually seen a little bit of this game. Oh no, Blue Stinger. Okay, good. Ended with 2 bangers.
What exactly do you think happens when you take a
I have it on
Resident Evil, mix it with a
1.25
Kurosawa
speed.
movie and just a pinch of demonic? Well, you get Onimusha, but altering that recipe just a little bit also leads to Soul of the Samurai, a sword fighting game wearing the skin of a Resident Evil title, aka a pretty damn awesome combination. Soul of the Samurai starts off giving you the option to experience it in 2 separate ways, and for this playthrough I went solely with Kotaro. His story deals with him returning to the dojo where he was raised with the goal of visiting his parents' grave. A pretty noble cause for an adventure, but once he makes it back to his old stomping ground, he finds the local cops abusing their power, so he does the only thing one can do in such a situation, draws his sword and turns him into a pile of chopped meat that used to resemble humans. Of course, this leads to every lawman in the town gunning for him, but he eventually makes it back to his old dojo where he and a childhood friend catch up before Kotaro leaves to accomplish his original goal. On the way, he runs into more opposition and remarks that cutting them down just doesn't feel right, sort of like they're not even human. Then when he gets to the graveyard, he finds himself taking down a giant monk, and in doing so, figures out that these people are being controlled by these weird slug things. From here, it's a tale of a single Ronin taking on an entire town corrupted by these soul bugs while he both gets to the bottom of who's behind it and stops it from spreading. The story in this game is pretty bare bones if you ask me, but to be fair, I didn't really expect much, and the personal flourishes of Kotaro's past was a nice touch. Overall, you'll probably see the end of this game in maybe 2 or 3 hours, and for such a gameplay-driven experience, I would actually say the amount of story on offer is pretty impressive. I've yet to get very far in the Ninja Lin's campaign, but I don't expect it to extend the game's runtime much further than another hour or 2. So as far as story goes, it's a you get what you get kind of situation, but what you get is actually pretty good, so it works out. The good news is, during those slim few hours of gameplay, you will have played a surprisingly fun video game. Progression in SOS is much more linear than your typical RE game, but there are areas where you're allowed to move around a decent-sized section of the environment, and heading to locations off the beaten path can land you cool rewards like new swords to try out or new clothes to wear. And as a plus, this is one of the not-so-plentiful PS1 games that support analog movement, so hit that button on your PS1 or PS2 controller and experience some pretty damn good controls. Analog sticks aside, progression is a pretty straight line, point A to point B type of scenario.
Yeah, this
which
seems
is
really
totally
cool.
fine because this made it feel like the entire game had a forward momentum with zero downtime or busy work. The combat, though, that's where this game really shines. Instead of going for a straight arcade action approach, SOS feels more like a combination of Onimusha and Bushido Blade. You have dashes and sidesteps along with a lock-on feature, but instead of rushing in and swinging like a crazy person, you'll be waiting for openings and blocking hits while dodging. The fights really do have that old samurai movie flair, with you and your enemy making very small movements, waiting for the other to mess up and give up an opening. I mean, sure, you can just run in mashing the attack button, but your opponents are just as capable of reversals as you, and each hit really hurts in this game. Like you might expect, there are a few different strikes you can go for. A simple 3-hit combo, directional modifiers, and a lunge, but there are also special moves that burn meter gain from playing well. These are listed in the start menu, and it's important to mention that a lot of these change depending on what sword you're currently using. And I'm not going to waste your time here. Soul of the Samurai has quickly become a new favorite of mine. I've always had it in my collection since playing it on an old demo disc back in the day, but I never got around to playing it for more than a few minutes till today, and I regret the shit out of that. This game, without a doubt, kicks massive tons of ass and provides a perfect combination of deep challenge and satisfying payoff. And when I say deep challenge, I really mean it. A simple starting enemy is more than capable of taking you down in a few hits, and the bosses of the game can seem impossible at first. For nearly each of them, I had to retry more than 5 or 6 times before I finally figured out their patterns and the best way to deal with them, and I actually appreciated that. Not necessarily the part where I had to fight them over and over again, but the fact that there was a tangible difference in my skill level after those retries. I wasn't just testing the RNG till things went my way. I was genuinely responding to their attacks better and getting in hits at just the right time. So I've got to assume the crowd that gets into tough games like Dark Souls may very well want to check this one out.
I love the RPG
Honestly,
elements
that
in this
goes for
game. It
everyone
looks
else,
really
too.
cool.
This game blew me away, and best believe I'll be starting up a new game as soon as you watch this video. Soul of the Samurai may not have the exploration and progression of a Resident Evil game, but pre-rendered backgrounds and stiff but satisfying combat along with it most definitely makes that RE clone title stick. If you're able to get your hands on it, I'd say Soul of the Samurai
Stiff
is an
but
easy recommendation.
satisfying.
I had such a blast with it, I got to assume most of you will find some fun here too. Sadly, this is another casualty of the retro games collector market. So it has risen in price since I bought my copy, but it's in the $20 range for disc only and might run you $60 for a complete copy. So while expensive, I wouldn't say it's too far outside of what I'd be comfortable paying, especially compared to the great game you're getting for the money. Plus, in a world of ODEs and cracked firmware, I have a good deal of confidence that most of you guys know how to skirt the cost associated with physical game collecting. So stop this video and figure out some kind of way to play Soul of the Samurai. It's incredibly fun. and not the type of
I
game
can't
you're gonna need
stop.
to dedicate 60 hours to in order to see the end credits.
I can't.
And it is at this point I wish I knew anything at all about Japanese sword fighting so I can make a witty quip here at the end.
Okay, finally, a game I have played. This Blue Stinger. I'm also really back and forth about this game too. But it's another game you guys tell me to play all the time. I've already played it, and I'm never ever playing it again. It's like the only thing I really like about this game is the Christmas music that plays in the mall section. I fucking love that song. I actually have it on my soundboard. But this game, in my opinion, is a pile of fucking shit. It's I know it's a cult classic, and I know some people here probably love it, but like, it's got some charm to it, sure. And there are some funny cutscenes with the voice acting, and the story is actually pretty decent at times. But for the most part, here's what I actually fucking hate about this game. So many of the songs, like 90% of the soundtrack, sounds like it's playing the last song you'll ever hear in the game, like the triumphant hero, like let's get out of here music, but it just plays all the time. It plays when you're exploring, it plays when you're walking around. It just plays constantly. It's just like, it's such a headache. It's just like you constantly just think you're at the end of the game because the music is just like, oh, you're a hero, let's go. I hate it. Oh my God. But you know, when I did play it on stream, I enjoyed streaming it, but this is a game I'm never going to play again.
Yeah, she doesn't understand jokes. I love
the music.
Kind of chicks.
Throughout my time covering Resident Evil and the games it inspired, Blue Stinger is a name
God,
that you
this
could
game's
reliably
annoying.
find in the comment section of most of my content, and to be fair, it's a game I've always wanted to put time into myself, but for whatever reason never found an opportunity. That is
Like this
until
song,
today,
like the
and,
song
I'm
that's
most
playing right
definitely
now
missing
is
out.
just like,
Find in the comment section of most of my content, and to be fair, it's a game I've always wanted to put time into myself, but for whatever reason never found an opportunity. That is until today, and well, I was most definitely missing out on something special.
yeah, the Christmas part's the
Stinger
only
dropped
cool
on
part
US
in my
Dreamcast
opinion.
towards the tail end of 1999, and I think I may have found a new best example to point to when I describe a game as feeling like a Dreamcast title. This game just exudes that DC style of game development from every pore. It's unique, innovative, and because it's a Dreamcast game, very arcadey feeling. But before we start talking about all that, let's find out what the hell's going on here story-wise. The game starts with an exposition dump informing us that the meteor that wiped out the dinosaurs is supposed to have hit in the Yucatan Peninsula, something I'm going to pretend I already knew. So flash forward to the early 2000s, and an earthquake has somehow caused an island to emerge smack dab in the middle of that impact site, causing the world's foremost scientific and analytical minds to nickname it Dinosaur Island. Now, I'm not saying I could have come up with something better, but I feel like maybe they should have. Anyways, in the far-off distant year of 2018, Elliot here is enjoying some time off on a boat anchored just off of Dinosaur Island when he witnesses something fall from space, crash into the island, and envelop it in some kind of energy dome. Then there's this weird thing following him around, and since he's part of the rescue team, he's got to come in on his day off and rescue whoever survived this event. Lucky for him, there are more than a few survivors, the only downside being a good majority of them have mutated into weird creatures and have developed a taste for spiky hairdos, apparently. Since the island became some kind of a research facility since its discovery, there are all kinds of cool, futuristic locales to explore on your way to rescue people and find a way to get off the island. There's a few different metrics by which the story could be graded. You could take a look at the hilariously awkward dialogue and assume it's a bad tale, but I think dismissing it like that would be a mistake. Sure, it is a Dreamcast game with voice acting, and that means whatever bad example you're thinking of.
What? You guys know each other?
That's about on that level, but there's a really cool mystery here. Something that feels like it's elevated above the kind of funny way it's being told. Now, in the spirit of transparency, I haven't beaten this game at the time of writing this, so I'm still in the dark about a lot of stuff, but maybe that's why I'm so into it. Right now, I still have no idea what the second meteor is all about and why people are looking like lizard-human hybrids. I know that Nephilim took this form because it's something Elliot was already familiar with, but I still have no idea what it is or why it's helping me. For all I know, the answer to these looming questions may be super unsatisfying, but so far I gotta say it has been a really cool ride. As for gameplay, I think there are some things here that might stand the greatest chance of pushing people away. Most of what you do in this game is explore the island facility, collecting items and keys while solving puzzles, which opens up more of the area to explore, and in my opinion, this aspect of the game is handled perfectly. Dinosaur Island houses a massive environment to explore, and the act of unlocking every door is very reminiscent of a Metroidvania game, especially because you end up having to run literal miles getting from point A to point B. Sadly though, it is not the only thing you do in the game. Of course, there's going to be enemies getting in between you and that goal, and I think this is where the game drops the ball. Combat is very clunky feeling, and movement just doesn't play to any of the combat strengths. Like, most of the time, you might want to get a few hits in and run away to avoid the incoming counterattack that seems to interrupt your combos by dice roll. Well, the only problem with that is the camera is fucking horrible, and turning back around to face the enemy...
I think that's the first time we heard him swear.
That they're too damn close to do anything anyways. It's worth mentioning, though, the Japanese release of this game doesn't have this issue at all, and a big thanks to Grabahasi on Twitter for pointing this out. For some reason, the camera in the original release of Blue Stinger follows a more
that was some passion right there.
Being statically placed with the ability to follow the player in some areas on a set track.
He says, well, I haven't heard the F word, I'll say that.
Better method to go with, and I'm not really sure why they changed the camera for the US release, but this does come with the downside of me not being able to read more than half of the on-screen text. On the plus side though, spoken dialogue is still in English, so it might be workable if you're looking for the best playing version of the game. Other than that though, hitting enemies with melee attacks or long-range projectiles feels great with all the audio and visual feedback you would expect. And speaking of which, this is one of those areas where Dreamcast games always excel. Those bright flashes of light on impact with an enemy or booming explosions of blood from their corpse makes it feel like I'm playing an arcade game, and typically that would clash with the more serious storyline, but on the Dreamcast, it just fits really well. On the plus side, you have lots of options when it comes to putting the hurt on these mutated creatures, and you're also able to switch between two playable characters.
There is a lot of cool weapons.
Switch things up a little bit, which is a great time to bring up how awesome of a character Dog's Bower is.
Oh, I have a bad feeling.
If he wasn't in this game, it'd be
cool
atrocious.
You can get different movesets from him by finding themed t-shirts for him to wear. Moving around the island can be a little awkward because the controls can be insanely unruly, but most of the environment is wide enough that you won't need to be too precise. When you are forced into a situation that requires finesse, though, you'll definitely start noticing the issues with the camera and the controls. One thing I really liked is there were all kinds of helpful items hidden in out-of-the-way places, like in the small space between a box and a wall. Little things like that reward exploration and gives me a real reason to check every inch of a room. On that note, there's also vending machines scattered around, and enemies drop money on death, which means you could potentially grind to get amazing items before you should have them.
And that's exactly what I did.
To be honest, I tried doing this for a plasma sword and didn't get anywhere near the amount I needed before I just gave up.
For the 15
so you don't need to worry about the game just handing you endgame stuff early and ruining its own difficulty. Oh, and one more small note here. I love the jokes in this game. Our guy Elliot thinks he's some kind of comedian, and none of his zingers ever seem to land, which for some reason made them really funny to me.
2 girls and a guy. I see trouble in the near future.
The game's visuals are exactly what you would expect for a game on this platform. Big round geometric shapes with bold bright colors galore. The blood spray when you hit enemies can look amazing if not a little too overdone, and every item has its own 3D model which always impresses me. I think the real star of the show is the environment around you though. The facility has stores, living quarters, labs, and all kinds of other areas, so you get to see a wide variety of locations, but they all look great with a lot more detail than your average DC game, which is double impressive when you take into account just how much of the island is explorable. I'm only 2 or maybe 3 hours into the game so far, and I've seen an insane amount of varied locations, which makes me
so
really
he hasn't got
to come up with.
The horrible
Blue Stinger's
stuff yet.
Just dripping with polish, which is really nice to see. This console was capable of so much more than what most titles threw at it, and it's great to finally see it getting pushed to its limits like this. And the awesome thing is, the game does this all at a relatively rock-solid frame rate. I did experience maybe 1 or 2 sections where I could feel things slow down, but I really mean 1 or 2 sections, so in my book that's pretty damn good. So to wrap this one up, I had a buttload of fun with Blue Stinger. It's the kind of game I would have gone crazy for back when I was a teen. Sadly, I was a little too poor to go out and buy it back then. And ever since, I've been missing out on something really damn awesome. And once again, this is one of those situations where I really don't understand why people keep telling me that if I like RE, this game would be right up my alley. Aside from the exploration, I struggle to think of even one similarity between the two, but that doesn't mean too much here. It's still amazingly fun despite 2 big flaws, and it's something I'd recommend you guys go out and try. Blue Stinger may not be for everybody, but I can confidently say it is most definitely for me.
Phew, tough girl. I like it, Janine.
Who the hell is Janine?
My kind of girl, so stay away from her.
I really like this video. This YouTuber is awesome. Like there's so much attention to detail in each one of these little reviews, but I will say for some of them, they are a little, what we are hearing is a tiny bit biased. Cause like if I played 3 hours of Blue Stinger, I would also be like, guys, this is fucking awesome. Like, it's got that Dreamcast charm, yada, yada, yada. But it's a lot of these games, the horrible parts come in later. And it's typically like that with a lot of video games. Like, if you fail your intro for a video game, no one's even going to stick it out, especially in the time of rentals. Like, if your game sucks in the first hour or two and it's rental territory, it's not going to sell. So, like, typically the first few hours of a game are good, because if they're not good, no one's even going to see the good shit. I digress, though. Like, yeah, I agree with this, that the first bit is fun. No doubt about it. When you see all those weapons you can unlock in the Christmas area, the place I said is awesome. It's really, really cool. And I grinded for some of those weapons too, just because I want to see what they were like. But it's later sections in this game. When you get to the army base area, and you have to start backtracking from the start of the game to the army base and back and forth, and then you revisit the Christmas area and have to unlock the door and go down that separate path, that's where the game takes a fucking nosedive. But yeah, it's not talked about in this review.
Go under and go deep.
I've never played this, but it's up there on my list to play.
And here we have yet another one of those games I've always wanted to play thanks to a really cool demo disc I had as a teen, but never really got around to till recently. And holy hell am I pissed that it took me this long to finally put some real time into it. If I had to describe Fear Effect, I would say it's a point-and-click adventure game walking around in the skin of a globe-trotting heist movie which itself is trying to look like a Resident Evil game. The story concerns a missing girl who turns out to be the daughter of some powerful triad leader, and there's a massive bounty on her head. Our main characters, being particularly enterprising, sign up for what should be a simple snatch and grab and end up getting themselves involved with all kinds of criminal organizations and a girl who may or may not be the product of demon worship.
I always heard about this game when I was a kid.
I just mentioned might have thrown you off a bit, but this is a great little globe-trotting heist story. All the characters feel like hardened criminals, but have their own more colorful personalities too. Throughout the game, there's all kinds of shady meetups and information exchanging hands, all the stuff I love to see in these kinds of stories, which was a real surprise for me because when I looked up the guys who made Fear Effect, I found out they also made the very first PS1 game I ever owned, a little 3D fighter named Criticom. A game you could call a lot of things, but a great narrative experience certainly wouldn't be one of them. Old crappy fighting games aside, I really did enjoy the story here. I've always been a sucker for films with an emphasis on criminal empires and the dirty dealings they can get up to, and in that sense, Fear Effect checks every box for me. Without a doubt, even if the gameplay doesn't suit your taste, I'd recommend giving Fear Effect a try just to navigate your way through a genuinely cool story. And speaking of gameplay, this is not going to be an easy one to summarize. Okay, so let's try this out. Basically, you're playing an old PC adventure game here where puzzles don't just come in the form of doors that need keys. Every single step in this game works itself into some kind of puzzle to solve, but they tend to stay away from that dreaded adventure game logic that plagues so many games in the genre, meaning the solutions to a lot of these puzzles are going to be relatively intuitive. These tests of wit can vary from your typical item-based head-scratchers to combinations that need to be cracked, environmental obstacles that need to be cleared, and hell, you might even be able to classify the boss encounters as some kind of puzzle. As you might have noticed, the game takes place on a 2D plane that consists of a looping pre-rendered CG movie, and moving around in this type of environment has always been so damn cool to me. Back when I was coming up, we didn't have access to the kind of processing power it would have taken to render realistic-looking imagery, so these types of games gave me the feeling that I was playing something from the far-off future. Controls are handled with my beloved tank method, and since this is essentially a mirror of Resident Evil's typical setup, they feel right at home here.
This does seem pretty cool.
When it comes time to trade a little lead, though, you'll find a lot more control of your character than any RE title ever gave you. Holding R2 will take you down to a knee, and L2 in a direction will perform a dodge roll in that direction. Since there isn't a whole lot that can be done to make tank control-driven combat feel more fast-paced, upping the amount of options the player has for mobility in a fight seems like a great compromise. Firing your weapons is done with a simple button press, and there's a lock-on system that has a nice little on-screen indicator, which means you never have to aim up or down, and that leaves room for the mystical art of moving while firing the weapon. Something that seems like a simple idea but took decades to work its way into these types of games. Now, I'll tell you guys right up front that this game wowed me right from the start. For some reason, it just felt perfect in my hands and I completely fell in love with it, but that's not to say it does everything right. Truth be told, there are some serious issues here. First off, the puzzles I told you about before aren't always just arbitrary hurdles meant to gate progression. A lot of the time, they just straight up kill you if you get them wrong.
Yeah, thank you, Fuzzy Killer.
You will eventually end up figuring out how to get past these parts. In fact, I was pretty pleased with myself that I never once had to consult an online guide, but it's the constant retries that are the problem. Or more like the load times in between those retries. To get this footage, I'm using a physical disc on a PS2, so maybe those of you with an X station may have a better experience, but the act of loading your last save game can be a little cumbersome. It's not a super long wait, but just long enough to get on your nerves after the second or third attempt. Also, despite the many options you're given for mobility, combat can still feel very clunky, and sometimes you'll end up just getting hit with a bad seed of RNG, and you're gonna have to replay that part till things go your way. Some areas have respawning enemies, which can be a real problem when they don't drop their ammo. There were about 2 occasions where I didn't really know where to go, and the act of exploring had me running completely dry.
Yeah, sometimes save states are the way to go for these kinds of games.
It's not good for a whole lot. Other than those issues, though, I was so damn impressed with this game. It played like the game Still Life meets Resident Evil, and for those of you keeping track, that is a huge compliment. That being said, it just wouldn't be right if I closed this one out without touching on the look of the game again. Like I said before, these are all pre-rendered CGs going on in the background, and they certainly suffer from the kind of compression you'd imagine it takes to fit all this on a 700 megabyte CD, but you really can't argue with the finished product. On the plus side, those of you running this game on a CRT or using an emulator with bilinear filtering, you're going to see much smoother visuals than what the OSSC is providing here, so I guess we'll count that as one of the 2 possible benefits of not spending hundreds of dollars on upscaling retro video, something I still recommend everyone does anyways. On the downside, you will notice these CG backgrounds don't have a lot of runtime to them, so they'll loop a lot, and the devs didn't make them end on similar frames than what they start on, so the looping point can be real obvious. And on that same note, some of the sound
exact thing I am so anal with when I get a new animation done, and in the past, my first few animations I got done for the channel had that kind of thing, where it just like, especially in a game, it just completely breaks the immersion.
Are tied to that animation, so they'll loop just as noticeably too. Of course, all of these environments aren't exactly what you would call space-efficient game design, so expect to be swapping disks every hour or so, which isn't a real problem, but something worth mentioning, I guess. Listen, flat out, this game just looks incredible, and there are flaws obviously, but if you haven't caught on yet, I really recommend picking this game up. It plays like nothing else you'll likely get your hands on, and you could easily say the same for the presentation.
God, it's sort of, the presentation sort of looks like
$40 range on
freaking
eBay,
Alone in the Dark almost at times.
So stop what you're doing and see some awesome PS1 style pixelated squared off cleavage.
Oh!
Well guys, I hope you had as much fun with this one
We
as I
did, Avalanche.
I think this may have been the most satisfying project I've completed here on YouTube, and I'm overjoyed at all the attention it's been getting. Of course, this was just a list of games that ape that original Resident Evil survival horror style.
Avalanche reviews, we loved it.
Kind of RE4 clone series at some point, so keep your eyes open for that. In the meantime, thanks so much for coming along for the ride, and as usual, I'm Jared.
And the perfect ending.
Avalanche Reviews.
Beep.
A big massive thanks to everyone who supported me up to this point. And
Thank
if you
you.
want to join that growing list, I have my Patreon linked here on screen and down
there.
There
You go, guys. Check out his channel if
your
you'd like
speed,
to.
That's okay. Maybe a like and a subscribe might be more in your wheelhouse. I genuinely could
do
not
it.
have come
I'll
anywhere
like
near
it
this far without you guys.
and
Even though I'm
subscribe.
running out of ways to say it, I just appreciate all the support so much. Well, I'll catch you guys later, so have a good one.
God, that must have taken a lot of time to do. Holy fludging balls. Jesus Christ. That was a sick video. Oh, man. Oh, fellas. All right, I'll probably put that on YouTube, but yeah, man, it was awesome to hear. We had similar opinions with so many games like Overblood and Martian Gothic and Carrier and Deep Fear. So it was really cool to hear someone convince me that I'm not crazy. You know, it was awesome to hear. And Men in Black. Oh my God. You know, it's funny. If you guys missed it, he said the exact same shit about Men in Black as I did, like literally to the T. Like I said, it was the worst game on the list by far. It's like borderline unplayable, just terrible. And he said the same shit. He's like, it's like it's the worst game so far. Like, oh, that was great to hear, honestly. Because honestly, what's the worst RE clone? And I say Men in Black. And no, not a lot of people have much to say back to you at that. But it was great that Avalanche was like, yeah, Men in Black is fucking horrible. And yeah, it is.